Hey guys, welcome back to Manga Story, and today we have something special for you. We wanted to try something a little bit different and give you the entire Golden Age arc in one go, which means this is going to be a super long video. So please bear in mind that these videos have been made over the course of many months, so some of the audio may sound a little bit different between video to video. However, we wanted to try something new and give you the entirety of the Golden Age arc in one big video. A lot of you guys have been asking us for big videos, so without further ado, please enjoy and let us know in the comments below what you think.
A one-eyed man in black begins to travel, and he walks until he finds a castle. He makes his way there, passing the townspeople and beggars, and as he continues he notices a caged carriage pass by with women and children. Inside one of the local taverns, a group of men start to throw knives at a tied-up elf. The larger man tells the elf to quit struggling. He's making it hard for them to hit him. As the men continue to throw knives at the elf, the man in black walks into the tavern, then walks over to the bar, and he tells them that he's gonna mess up this place a little, and he pulls a small crossbow out. The elf demands that the men untie him, if not, he'll just chew through his restraints. But the large man says that he'll just have to shut up now and try not to struggle anymore. But before the man can throw another knife, an arrow flies, piercing the large man's head and then sticking him to the wall. The group of men then ask, "Who shot that arrow?" And then the crossbow begins to shoot again, but this time, a lot more arrows. And the arrows begin to hit the men in the eyes and the neck, until all but one stands. The man in black stands up and he loads one more arrow, and then he fires it, hitting the last man through the nose. The last man falls to the ground, and the man in black walks over to him and grabs him by the arrow, asking if he was one of the robbers at Coca Castle. And the man says, "Yes." The man in black tells him, "Good. I need you to relay a message to your master for me. Tell him the black swordsman has come." The elf begins to call out from behind him, and the man in black grabs the hilt of his sword and he pulls out a massive great sword. Behind him, the man appears to stab him, but with one powerful downward swing, the man in black cuts the man in half, sending the severed body flying and blood spurting everywhere. Everyone watches in shock as the upper half is flung into the crowd of people, and the man puts his sword back. The thing is too big to be called a sword, too thick, too heavy, too rough. It's more like a large chunk of iron. The man in black looks at the robber and he tells him, "I'm counting on you," and then he begins to leave. As he gets outside, the elf flies after him, telling him to wait! If he's going to save someone, he should have at least followed through and make sure he's okay. And by the way, that is an amazing sword. How much does it weigh? The man doesn't answer and he continues walking, and the elf tells him, "My name's Puck, and it's nice to meet you." He was with a group of traveling performers when those robbers attacked them. Puck flies over and he sits on the man's shoulder to continue to talk. And the man in black swats him away, telling Puck, "Do not touch me." Puck tries to yell at the man and he hears a voice. And then he looks behind him and he sees the soldiers starting to surround him. Puck begins to fly off and he tells him, "Well, I better be going now." And a short while later, the man is strung up in a dungeon, bloodied from being tortured. The torturer rolls his whip up and he asks the man if he can make some noise, because without him showing any pain, this isn't very fun. As the torturer leans in, the man spits blood back in his face, and the torturer gets ready for another whipping, but then he's told to stop. The mayor walks in and he looks at the pile of weapons that were taken from the man, and he asks, "Are you a mercenary?" The man doesn't respond, and the mayor tells him, "You did something terrible. Those men that you killed will most likely have the whole town destroyed." The man looks at the soldiers escorting the mayor and he asks them, "Are they that worthless?" But before one of the soldiers can hit him, the mayor says that he doesn't know how terrifying the master of those bandits is. It is not human. It's something more frightening. There is no human capable of killing him. The man tells him that he knows. "That monster eats humans. I know it very well. I also know that you send food to him." The mayor tries to defend himself, but the man tells him that it sounds like you're just trying to protect yourself, not so much your townspeople. The mayor falls to his knees in pain, having some kind of a heart attack, and he tells the torturer to do whatever he wants to him, just don't let him die. When you're done, he'll hand him over to the men at Coca Castle later. Later, the robber from before heads back to Coca Castle to report on the black swordsman who attacked them. He had a sword taller than him, and he sliced their men in one swing. He also had a mechanical hand, a very suspicious looking man. The Baron continues to eat his meal, thinking, that man, could it be him? Soon a guard enters, telling them the town mayor is here requesting to meet with them regarding the recent incident. The mayor walks in begging for forgiveness, and the Baron continues cutting his food, stating that he's not sure on the exact details, but this was the work of a wandering stranger. It has nothing to do with the mayor and his town. The mayor says that he'll double the food and the money, so please, and then the Baron picks up a piece of his food and he flings it over at the mayor. When the mayor looks down, he sees that it's an ear. The Baron begins to stand up, stating that he doesn't care about all of that. He just likes to see humans running in the midst of great flames and the sound of bones being crushed. The guards grab the mayor and they begin to drag him off, and the mayor tries to call out to the Baron, but the Baron doesn't answer, and he continues to think about the black swordsman. Over in a cell, the man in black lays on the floor, unable to move from all of his wounds. But laying there, he looks over at the makeshift bed and he sees a disfigured creature. He looks at it and he says, "You again." The creature starts to crawl towards him. The man yells back at it, telling it, "Stay back! Stay back!" But soon, it's interrupted by the sound of gargling water. Puck appears with a key ring, asking, "What was all the yelling for? You made me fall in the water. Wait, why is this water yellowish?" The man looks towards the creature, but he sees that it's gone, and he looks back at Puck, asking why he's here. Puck says that he's here to do a good deed. And with these wounds, as Puck reaches down to touch the wounds, the man yells at him, "Do not touch me!" Puck tells him, "Geez, I won't hurt you, just watch!" And he reaches out over the wounds. Soon the pain begins to fade and the wounds begin to heal. Puck looks back at him, telling him that elves have different powers. They can heal injuries, sense people's feelings, and some even say they have the power to bring happiness. Puck then asks the man his name, and the man tells him, "Guts." As Puck continues to heal Guts, he also notices a strange marking on his neck, and he asks what's that for. Guts swats him away and gets up, telling him it's the brand. And Puck has no idea what he's talking about. Guts tells him that the man is going to come and kill him and burn this town to the ground. And Puck begins to argue that he would be involving the townspeople if he stays to fight him. But Guts says that whatever happens to them will just happen. "I'm only interested in killing that man. People who get caught up in others' battles are fools who lack the strength to really live." Puck then asks, "What about me? Why did you save me?" And Guts just begins to laugh, asking, "Who would save a little insect like you?" Puck flies up and he hits Guts in the chin, and Guts yells, "Why'd you do that?" And Puck just looks back angry and flies away. Guts sits back down in his cell looking at the keys that Puck left, and he starts to scratch at his own skin, causing himself to bleed. Then, the brand begins to bleed as he smears the blood on it. He licks the blood, stating that this is what he's been waiting for. Later, outside, the Baron and his men begin to storm through the city, killing everyone in their path while the Baron drinks the blood of his victims. As the men continue to ride, they come across a pile of bodies, but one of the men notices something. When he looks closer, he sees a man stand up from the pile, and that man is Guts. He loads up his crossbow and he begins to fire at all the men on the horses. The arrows begin to hit the men in their neck and eyes, and Guts continues firing more and more. One of the men gets behind Guts and starts to charge at him, so Guts grabs the hilt of his sword, and in one powerful swing, it cuts both the man and the horse into pieces. Above the fight, Puck watches the Baron as he makes his way to the front of the group, and he stares at Guts, asking, "Are you the black swordsman who's been hunting us apostles?" Guts drops his sword and he grabs a handful of arrows and he starts to reload. And the Baron tells him, "No human has any hope of defeating me." And he begins to charge towards Guts. Guts starts firing the arrows, hitting the Baron with so many arrows that he falls off his horse. As the Baron starts to get up, Guts reloads and launches more arrows, knocking the Baron into a building. He then reloads again and he starts to walk through the doorway that the Baron flew into, and when he steps in, a giant tail swings out, knocking Guts away. Through the doorway, the Baron's face appears, telling Guts, "It's impossible for a human to kill me." And when he steps out, he reveals himself to be a giant snake-like beast. The Baron makes his way towards Guts, and he begins knocking him around with his tail, throwing him into buildings. The beatings continue until Guts stops moving, and the Baron picks him up by the arm, telling him, "Humans are worthless. You're only good as food." But as he gets ready to swallow Guts, Guts holds out his mechanical arm, and then he pulls a string with his teeth. The fist drops down, revealing a cannon in his arm, and he fires, blowing away half of the Baron's head. Once on the ground, Guts grabs his sword and he swings once, cutting the Baron in half. He then falls over from that swing, spitting up blood, and as he gets back up, he's smiling. He begins to reload his crossbow, telling him, "It's true, humans are weak, but no matter how weak, we still want to live." And then he begins shooting the Baron repeatedly. The Baron looks up and he sees Guts' neck, and he sees that he has the sacrificial brand. Guts asks him, "Where are the remaining 5 members of Godhand?" And the Baron tells him he doesn't know. "I'm not permitted to enter." Guts tells him, "Enjoy your slow death." And he begins to walk away as the flames of the city start burning the building that the Baron is in, forcing it to begin to crumble and fall on him. The Baron screams for him to save him, but Guts continues to walk and he puts his sword away. Puck watches as Guts walks through the burning city, and the only thing that he can say is, "Berserk." Guts makes his way out of the town and he begins to walk with Puck following closely behind. But as Puck begins to sit on a branch that breaks, he falls in front of Guts, who begins to hold his mechanical arm in pain. Puck begins to ask what happened because he looks pretty beat up, but Guts grabs him by the wings and asks him, "Why are you even here?" Puck tells him that it's because he's pretty interesting, kind of like a monster or something, so hanging out with him, Puck's gonna get to see a lot of cool things. Guts drops him in a puddle and says, "I'll be honest, I don't like elves very much. You're weak and weak people irritate me." Guts begins to walk off, leaving Puck, and Puck tries to stop him but doesn't have any luck. As he continues down the road, it begins to rain and Guts is stopped by a passerby and his daughter asking if he needs a ride. Guts tells him no, For your sake, I'm being pursued by evil spirits. The man tells him that that's the first time he's heard that, but they have a lucky spirit themselves. And when Guts looks back, he sees Puck making a face behind the little girl's head. Guts thinks to himself, why not just go with them? It's not his concern what happens to them. After a bit of traveling, the man asks what the giant thing behind him is. Is that a sword? Guts tells him something like that. And the man tells him how he looks like a mercenary. He has a nephew who decided to be a mercenary, but 5 years ago he was killed and he became just another nameless soldier. Guts asks, what's wrong with that? He died doing what he wanted. We all die someday. Why not die in the glory of battle? The carriage goes silent and Guts tells everyone, sorry, can you just let me sleep? Soon Guts falls asleep and he begins to dream, but in his dream, he walks down a narrow path with a giant eye looking at him. As he walks, his brain begins to bleed and he hears a voice telling him that he can't escape. Listening to the voice, Guts doesn't look where he steps and he ends up stepping on a spike going right through his foot. He tries to pull his foot out, but then he hears a voice again telling him that he cannot escape, and he looks back to see the giant disfigured creatures getting bigger and closer. Guts begins to scream and then he wakes up to a creature trying to latch onto his face. He pulls out a dagger and he stabs it, throwing it to the side. Everyone starts to get up asking what was that? And Guts tells him, it's an incubus. And then he thinks to himself how they won't even let him sleep now. Puck asks why would they come and Guts points to his brand and says this summons them. He then puts his hand on it as he begins to feel it bleeding again. Guts jumps out of the carriage telling everyone not to follow him. The incubi are born from hatred mixing with the spilled blood of dead humans, which means there are corpses around here. The horses begin to get scared and the daughter jumps down trying to calm him. Guts tells her not to follow him, but it's too late. A spear shoots out of the ground, going through her chest. The man calls out to his daughter, but then all around them, the corpses begin to rise and surround them. Guts looks at the little girl, and then he grins, throwing knives at the skeletons, breaking their skulls. Puck says it's pointless, they're all dead already, and Guts tells him, you can leave if you'd like, but I'm staying. He then grabs his sword and he slashes upwards, cutting through several bodies. Guts readies himself and he begins to charge right into the middle of the group, swinging his sword, destroying everything in his path. Puck watches from the carriage, but then he hears something. He calls out to Guts, and when Guts looks over, he sees the little girl standing there, holding the severed head of her father. The little girl tosses the head to the side and jumps down, making her way towards Guts. Once she gets over to him, Guts looks down to see that she stabbed him. A moment later, Guts swings and the top half of the little girl's body launches across the forest. The corpses begin to gather up, but something's wrong with Guts, and as he swings his sword, he begins to cough up something. The corpses try to attack Guts, but he just grabs his sword tighter and he slashes his way through the giant crowd. Bodies begin to fly in every direction. Guts continues to fight until finally there are no more bodies and he looks down at the little girl. Puck tells him it wasn't his fault, and Guts begins to laugh, telling him, that's right. I told you people die in other people's battles. They didn't have the power to protect themselves from this destruction. That's all there is to it. But the forest goes silent and Guts looks up. The two begin to hear voices, telling Guts that he cannot escape them. As long as he has that brand, he cannot escape, no matter where he goes. Anger, sadness, pain, all of it. Guts begins to shout for them to shut up, holding his mechanical arm up. The fist drops down and he falls to his knees, firing the cannon. And then the voices stop. Guts stands back up and he begins to walk, and Puck looks around at all of the dead bodies and he thinks to himself, this is Guts' world. Guts continues to travel until he finds himself in another town with townspeople crowding around something. The people are having a public execution for a woman that is suspected of heresy, and the woman is being beheaded. The head rolls off the platform and Guts reaches down and picks up the head and looks at it. A little boy shouting that was his sister tries to fight his way through the crowd, but a guard knocks him down, telling him anyone under suspicion will be killed. Children are no exception. The guard walks over to Guts and asks him to hand over the head, but Guts just looks at him and spits in his face. He then turns his back to the guard and throws the head towards the Count, who's been watching over the execution. The Count catches the head while Guts punches and kills the guard. And then while holding the head, the Count sees the brand on her forehead. The Count looks down at Guts and Guts takes his finger and touches his brand. And he draws a small line from one end of his neck to the other with blood. Then he walks away. Guards are sent after him, but the Count sits back stating that was the Black Swordsman and he just declared war. The Count begins to squeeze the head tighter and tighter until it pops, and then begins to laugh. During the execution, a hooded figure walks off while Guts starts to run through the city, but before long, the guards surround him. Two guards walk over to him telling him not to resist, but Guts reaches to grab his sword and swings it across, cutting the guards in half. Soon the guards start to charge in, but Guts starts cutting them down with his massive swings. The archers prepare themselves to fire down on Guts, but before they can, a blinding light flashes in front of them, and then down below the light flies towards Guts shouting, "See? I saved you, didn't I?" Puck tells him, "You owe me now!" And then he's grabbed by a guard. A second later, the guard's hands are cut off, and Guts tells him, "There you go. The guards begin to stop attacking, and soon their captain, Zon Dark, appears. The man towers over Guts, telling him, "You've got a big sword for such a little boy." And Guts says nothing. Zon goes on to tell him that is an impressive sword. Would you mind me testing my pickaxe on it? And he begins to swing downward. The strike lands between Guts' legs, and he doesn't even move. Zon begins to swing side to side, hitting his own men, and then he swings down once more, hitting the wall behind Guts, telling him that he has nowhere to run. Zon readies one more swing, but this time, Guts readies himself. As the pickaxe comes down, Guts swings his sword into the path of the pickaxe, deflecting and breaking it, causing the broken pieces to fly right back into Zon's face. Guts then steps on Zon's head, kicking him to the side. All the while, the hooded figure from before is watching. Guts thinks that this may not end anytime soon, and then he throws smoke bombs to get away. But the hooded figure calls out to him, "Follow me if you want to escape." Guts follows the man, and soon they walk down an alley, and he tells Guts how everyone in this town is on alert because people are afraid of being arrested for suspicion. As they walk into the man's home, Guts notices all of the jars are filled with specimen, and he asked if he was afraid that he would be suspected himself. The man tells him not really, these are all ordinary doctor's odds and ends. And then he tells Guts that he saw him at the execution today. Does he maybe have something against the court, maybe revenge? Guts looks down at the man and kicks his walking stick out from his hand, telling him, "I'll be asking the questions." But as the man begins to stand back up, he tells Guts that he wants him to kill the Count for him. And once he stands, the man shows that he has 2 peg legs and part of his face missing. The Count shaved and cut away at him, consuming his flesh, but he knows it's a difficult story to believe. And Guts tells him, "Actually, I believe you. Rather, I know what he is." The man begins to laugh and tells him that there's something he wants to show him, and then he turns and pulls down a jaw hanging on the wall, and a secret door begins to reveal a passage. The 2 men walk into the room, and Guts looks at an egg-shaped thing and his eyes widen. Guts says, "This is Behelit!" At the end of our last chapter, Guts escaped through a tunnel with an old man. The man told Guts that he would like him to kill the Count. He also would like to show him something. So he led Guts down a hidden passageway, where he revealed an egg-like object that Guts knew too well. Behelit. Guts quickly grabs the man by the neck, asking, "Just who are you, and how did you get this thing?" The man told him that he stole it from the Count, but he will tell him everything. His name is Vargas, and he used to work as the castle's physician. And 7 years ago, things began to change. The Count himself changed. He began to suspect that other people were heretics, and those that he captured would be cut and dissected alive, and then he would eat them. He too was a part of it. After the Count captured him and his family, they tried to get away from what he had become. And in return, the Count cut off pieces of him. He then made him watch as he ate his family. Vargas says that he only managed to escape because of a drug that he concealed that allowed him to fake his death. And so when the opportunity came, he left the castle, taking that thing with him. So since then, for 7 years, he's researched every aspect of religion and the occult, but still he has been unable to find out what this thing is. And Guts tells him, it's a key that opens a portal to another world that overlaps ours and summons demons. Demons who manipulated the dark side of human history, the 5 members of Godhand. Meanwhile at the castle, Zon Dark gets up, still injured from Guts, shouting, "Kill, kill, kill!" Zon Dark begins to knock things over and people away until the Count enters, asking, "What is going on?" Zon Dark continues shouting, "I will kill the Black Swordsman!" And then the Count tells everyone to leave the room. Zon Dark starts hitting his head against a pillar, and the Count grabs him, asking, "Do you really want to kill him?" And Zon Dark tells him, "Yes, I'll do anything!" The Count tells him, "I will grant you a wish." And he begins to hold Zon Dark's head close, opening his mouth. A creature begins to worm its way out of the Count's mouth, and the Count tells him, take his demon inside of him. Back at Vargas' home, Puck begins making faces at the Behelit, saying that it's a nice piece of artwork. But Guts kicks him away, telling him that it's not art. That thing is alive. Puck begins to complain, "Well, why didn't you tell me that before? I was touching it!" And Guts tells him, it may be alive, but it's no danger in its current state. It's kind of like a tool. Guts then asks, how was it that the Count came across it? And Vargas says that the Count bought it by chance. A caravan of merchants came to the castle, and they even said they didn't know anything about it. While Guts begins to wonder if it was really by chance, Vargas pulls out a map and begins to show him the secret passage. Then he begs him, because he's waited for this day for 7 years. Avenge him! Vargas grabs Guts by the shoulders, and Guts pushes him to the ground, telling him, "Do not touch me!" Puck then grabs his cloak, asking how come he's always picking on people, and Guts just flicks Puck away. "I won't avenge you, but I will kill the Count, all the same." And then Guts begins to hear something, and a giant figure comes crashing through the wall swinging an axe. He looks up and he sees that it's Zon Dark, and Zon Dark swings again. Guts manages to deflect the hit, but the power of it sends him to the ground. He then starts to get back up. He gets it now. This guy isn't even human anymore. Zondark tells him, I will cut you to pieces! And he begins to swing down his axe. Guts begins to get back up and he swings his massive sword, cutting off the arm holding the axe. Zondark begins to laugh. And then where his arm was cut, something begins to crawl out of it like lumps of flesh. It grows bigger and longer, and it picks up the axe, and Zondark yells, kill! Guts begins to lick his lips, and then he readies himself in a stance, holding a sword behind him. Zondark begins to whip his arm around with the axe, and Guts blocks the attack. But he is still pushed back, and Zondark continues to whip his arm around. The wild swings begin to cut and break everything in the room, and Guts blocks every attack faster than the eye can see. The attacks continue over and over, and then Guts sees his opening, and he moves in for it. He appears behind Zondark, and he cuts off his other arm. He then crouch swings his sword upwards, slicing off part of Zondark's head. The cuts that Guts made begin to pulse, and then a head pushes itself out, telling him, not bad for a mortal. The demon begins to taunt Guts, telling him, you have impressive skills. Surely no human can defeat you. But you being a mortal human will be your downfall. Zondark gets ready to attack again, and that's when the ceiling begins to cave in from all of the damage, and it falls directly onto Zondark. Vargas opens up a trap door, telling Guts to hurry, and the three of them escape into the sewers. As they get out, Vargas asks if that was the Count, and Guts tells him, no, more like my demon, really. This is where we part, so if you don't mind giving me the Behelit, think of it as a down payment for killing the Count. And then Guts leaves, and Pucks tells Vargas to take care of himself. But before Vargas can leave, the fleshy arm creeps up from the waters and grabs him. Guts walks through the city, and Puck asks him why is he so rude, just walking off like that. You both want to kill the Count. You're allies. And Guts asks him, you're kidding, right? I can't be bothered with good-for-nothing bastard people acting like friends. That goes for you too, bug. Before turning a corner, Guts overhears some townspeople talking about how there's going to be another execution. They say it's a friend of the guy who's been causing all of the commotion the other day. Guts grits his teeth, and he continues to walk off. Later, Guts starts to prepare for his fight by setting and arming his crossbow, and Puck tries to get his attention asking him something, but Guts just ignores him. After getting frustrated with no answer, Puck tells him, fine, I can take a hint, and he flies off. But after Puck flies off, Guts takes off his mechanical arm, and he touches the missing part of his arm, and he thinks back to Vargas, thinking how they both have similar wounds, and then he touches his brand. The voice of Vargas telling him to avenge him rings through his head, and Guts punches the wall next to him. Later, during the execution, Puck watches trying to figure out what it is that he can do, and as he looks at the crowd, he sees Guts standing in an alleyway. He flies down telling him, I knew you would come, so what are you gonna do? But Guts begins to smile, telling him, you got it all wrong. I just came to watch him die. He then motions over to the castle and he tells Puck to look. There's a trap set over there for when I actually go out. The soldiers will come bursting out to capture me. But if you want to do something so badly, why don't you save him? Guts begins to say how a misfit like Vargas can't even swing a sword, so it's pointless to think about how he could defeat the Count. Ambition comes with a price, but the reward for ambition too great is self-destruction. Puck begins to feel all of the emotions that Guts is displaying, dark and violent emotions, self-hating and destructive. Is this the source of Guts' strength? Puck then tells him that he must be afraid of the Count then. Afraid of losing a battle like Vargas? If so, why even come here? Guts grabs him, telling him, you talk too much. And then Puck bites down on Guts' hand, freeing himself, telling him, you're just a selfish bastard and a chicken. As Puck flies off, Guts wonders what he should be feeling. Is it compassion? Puck watches from above the crowd as the executioner readies his axe for a swing, and then he looks over to Guts, who is just standing there. Puck decides that if Guts won't do anything, he will. And just as the executioner holds his axe up, Puck flies in and bounces off of the axe. The Count tells him to hurry up and finish this, but Vargas yells out to Guts and begging him to hold up this devil's severed head for everyone to see. Then the executioner swings, and Vargas's head flies off. Guts watches and then begins to leave, but as he walks down the alley, he sees a creature that's been haunting him, and when it turns its head to him, Guts sees that it's Vargas's face instead. Guts falls to his knees, and all he can hear is Vargas stating, hold his severed head! Hold his severed head! Hold his severed head! Later that night, the guards begin to take Vargas's body and head to the pit, but as one of the guards looks at Vargas's face, he then sees a giant shadow looming over it, and then he sees Guts' face. After killing the guards, Guts looks at Vargas's head and he says, he won't fail, like him. Soon Guts begins to see something. He sees the souls of all of the dead bodies in the pit, and they begin to grab a hold of Guts, telling him, revenge, revenge, we want revenge, together. But as Guts stands, his arm twitching, he screams, no! The spears begin to scatter, and Guts shouts, "We'll never have anything in common. You're all dead. This is my fight. A person of flesh and blood. That's right. I'll do it myself. I will kill the Count with his own flesh and blood." Meanwhile, back at the castle, the Count captures Puck and puts him in a cage, and he begins to take him somewhere else in the castle. He then opens up a locked door, and inside of that door is a young girl sitting on a bed. The girl looks up, says, "Father," and the Count says that he has something for her. He then hands her the cage where she sees Puck. The young girl, Teresa, says, "Thank you." And the Count tells her, "Be patient. I can't let you out of this room and into an impure world overrun by filthy heretics." He begins to reach out to touch her, but Teresa pulls away and he asks, "Still, you won't let me touch you?" He tells her, "So be it. It's getting late, so good night." And then he leaves. Down in the lower part of the castle, Guts makes his way through the secret passageway that Vargas had shown him until he hears something. He looks up and he sees Zondark, but this time the flesh has oozed out of every part of his armor, and now his other arm is just as long as the previous one. The demon tells him, "No more games!" And he starts to flail his arms, destroying everything around him. Guts pulls out his crossbow and he begins firing bolts into Zondark's chest. With so many bolts, it knocks him over. He then loads up more bolts, but the demon starts to whip its arms around again. Once loaded, Guts continues to fire until the demon stops moving, and then he makes him move. He grabs his sword and he charges up the stairs, slashing down onto the demon. The body part he cuts off rolls to the edge of the stairs, and Guts just watches. And once it's out of sight, he continues walking. Just as he begins to put his sword away, a fleshy arm comes whipping back up, hitting Guts in the head. And as he falls down, the arms begin to climb back up. Soon a giant fleshy body crawls above him, telling him, "Unless you cut off the head, I'll just keep regenerating." But as the demon finishes his sentence, a sword slices into his head, and Guts tells him, "Thanks for the tip." He then begins to lift the sword up, ripping the head off. And as it starts to crawl down his sword, he turns and slams the broad side of the sword against the wall, and the demon's head slides down it. The demon then says, "One thing, it's not over yet. I'll be waiting for you upstairs." Guts tries to walk up the stairs, but he's lost so much blood that it's making him weak. He tells himself that he can't give up, and then he begins shouting, "I will skewer him! I will skewer his head on my blade!" Back upstairs, Teresa opens up Puck's cage, and she tells him that she understands if he doesn't trust her. She is the Count's daughter after all. Her father has been such a different person ever since the day that her mother died 7 years ago. Teresa begins to state how her mother was kidnapped by pagan worshippers, demanding to let them practice their faith freely. The Count didn't give in to their demand, and then her mother was sacrificed as an offering to the evil god. Since then, he's been hunting heretics, but lately, it doesn't even matter if they're heretics or not. He just seems to enjoy hurting people. It's like he's not even human anymore. Guts continues to walk through the castle, up the tower, until he faces a room full of soldiers. Dahl, the Count's assistant, tells Guts that they knew he would be coming, so he can surrender quietly or he will have him killed at once. But Guts tells him, "Move! You're in my way! Move!" Dahl then tells the archers to fire, but Guts just holds up his sword, blocking them. As Dahl sees the arrows blocked, Guts then runs forward, swinging his sword, cutting through the guards, slicing torsos and heads off. The spearmen then advance, and as they corner and thrust, Guts ducks and then swings again, cutting through the guards. He continues cutting and slicing through everyone, but Dahl calls out for Jericho to come out. Jericho steps out and charges at Guts, swinging his flail, but as Guts turns, he swings his sword down on Jericho, cutting through his shield and into his shoulder. Jericho staggers back and Guts swings a second time, but this time through his stomach. The rest of the guards begin to run and Guts continues to walk up the stairs, and then he stands over Dahl. But all Dahl can see is a blank stare from Guts. Up in the tower, Puck and Teresa continue to talk, and she tells him how she's never been able to leave this room for the past 7 years. As Puck looks at her, he sees this child has a sober eye as she looks out of her window. And that's when they hear something. The guards below talk of a burglar, but Puck knows it is not a burglar, it is Guts, and he tells her that she needs to let him out. So she lets Puck out, and after shutting her window, he knocks on the window and tells her that he forgot to tell her. He'll be back, and he'll take her out of here. Alrighty then, bye! Back below, Guts kicks Dahl through the doors into the Count's chamber, and he makes his way in to see the Count. The Count sits on his throne telling Guts, "It's impressive you've come this far. Now come test me. Let's see how far human power will go." Guts starts to walk towards him and then up the steps, but then he stops and stabs his sword into the stairs, hitting part of the Count that was hiding there. The Count tells him, "Nicely countered. Now I can grasp the extent of your skills." Puck begins to fly towards the Count's chamber, but then the walls break by him, and inside he sees Guts. The Count tells Guts, "I will crush you," and he begins to grow into a giant fleshy creature. And with a massive swing, Guts cuts off the Count's arm, and just as quickly as it was cut off, it begins to grow back. The Count says, "It doesn't matter. Cut parts off, I will just grow bigger and bigger." As the Count continues destroying the room, over in Teresa's tower, the walls and the ceilings begin to crack and fall, and as she ducks from the falling debris, she sees that her doors are broken and been opened, so she decides this is her chance to finally leave. Back in the Count's chambers, he starts thrashing about trying to catch Guts, but Guts begins to dodge his attacks and begins to hide behind a pillar. As the Count starts to search, Guts sees Doll, and he has an idea. The Count sees Guts' cloak behind the pillar and begins to crash into it, causing it to fall on top of Guts. And then the Count looks at the body and sees that it was Doll wearing Guts' cloak. Just as Guts comes rushing out, swinging and cutting off the front tentacles of the Count. The Count then turns, grabs Guts, and slams him into another pillar. Guts begins to gather himself and stand up, and the Count tells him, "It's pointless. You can never win. And you can die knowing that you at least inflicted one attack on me." He then swings and knocks Guts away, but before Guts can get back up, the Count grabs one of his legs and begins to whip him across the room, hitting him into pillars in the ground. As he holds up Guts' lifeless body, the Count tells him, "It seems you still won't drop your sword, so I will just have to finish this." And he slams Guts one more time into a pillar, letting the blood pour from him. And then the Count begins to laugh as he towers over Guts' defeated body. And in our last chapter, Guts has made his way to the Count, but the Count has proven to be a bigger problem than Guts thought. Now Guts lays lifeless at the feet of the Count as he towers over him. And the Count looks down at Guts and he tells him, "It's over now." Puck flies in telling Guts, "You need to get up. You were acting so high and mighty before. It's time to wake up." The Count continues to stare at him. "How these humans are so fragile." And then Puck begins to yell at the Count, stating, "You are one of those fragile humans. I know all about you from Teresa." "It wasn't about revenge. If that was the case, I would just exercise my authority. Instead, I just threw away my humanity." The Count begins to laugh. "I thought elves had the intellect of a bird or a squirrel, but your speech is amusing. I will spare your life, so be gone." Puck begins to pick through Guts' pockets and he pulls out the behelit, and then he tries to leave, but the Count sees what he is taking. Puck quickly grabs it and he begins to fly off, stating, "You won't catch me, I have the advantage of flight." And then the Count begins to shake the walls and the stones begin to fall, hitting Puck. Before the Count can even take the egg, Teresa runs into the room calling for Puck and then stops and sees her father. Teresa turns in horror at what her father has become and she runs to hide. Then the Count looks back at Puck, furious for causing her to see him like this. The Count begins to come crashing down on Puck and Puck is frozen in place, petrified with fear. Just before the Count falls, 3 daggers fly through the air, hitting the Count in the face, and he looks over to where he left Guts, and he sees him, hardly able to stand, ready to attack. Puck flies over, calling him a jerk for faking dying, and Guts just brushes him away. Guts begins to drag himself to the Count, and Puck tries to stop him, and he sees Guts smiling. Guts looks up and he says, "That wasn't good enough. Just 2 or 3 broken bones. If you want to stop me, you're gonna have to crush my skull or pierce my heart, just like you." The Count yells in rage and kicks Guts away, bouncing him across the floor until his body hits another pillar. He then begins to charge, but just as he gets close, Guts grabs Teresa and he holds her up as a shield. The attack stops mid-attack, and then Guts fires his arm cannon directly into the Count's face. He starts to get back up and he walks over to his sword, but with his hands broken, he leans down and he bites down on the hilt of the sword and he lifts it up, balancing it off of his metal arm. He then begins to pick up speed and he runs towards the Count, then he slices through one of the Count's mouths, cutting off the head. The Count's large body begins to fall and Guts gets back up smiling and he starts to walk towards the severed head. The Count begins to curse him, so Guts takes out his knife and he sticks it in the Count's mouth, pulling it upwards towards his eye. Guts tells him, "I will show you the limit of a human," and then he pulls the blade up, cutting right next to his eye. The Count screams out in pain and Teresa watches, crying, saying no, and Puck flies over telling him, "Stop, not in front of Teresa." And then Guts takes the knife and he swings it towards Puck, telling him to shut up. "If you get in my way, I'll kill you." He begs for him to stop, and then Guts slams the head on the ground, telling him, "Take a good look at a body that doesn't die." And then he stabs the head with the knife over and over, and Guts begins to laugh. "This is amazing. You really are superhuman. You really don't want to die, do you?" He continues to stab the blade until it breaks, and then he slips and falls on his back. As he lay here, he continues to laugh, picking himself back up. However, all of the blood from the Count begins to flow over to the behelit. He begins to beg that he doesn't want to die, and then everyone looks to see the behelit open its mouth, and then the room begins to change. Stairs appear going in all directions, and the Count tells Guts, "They are coming! The Great Ones are coming!" Soon Guts' wound begins to take its toll and his body collapses, but that's when he hears footsteps. When he looks up, he sees people standing there, floating in front of him. He begins to grit his teeth, seeing him. He sees Griffith! He calls out to him, and Griffith tells him, "It looks like you're still squirming around in your pitiful existence." One of the figures looks down at the Count and tells him, "You've been ordained by the laws of fate. Your desperate desire for life has cleaved open space and brought us here." The Count begs for them to grant his wish, take his life and avenge him. But the figures tell him, "We can't. It is your desire that has brought us here, not your hatred for that man." The Count tells him that it's because of the Black Swordsman. He destroyed so many of the apostles of Godhand. He's your enemy. The figures begin to laugh, and Griffith tells him, "A few worthless servants killed is inconsequential to us. That man is petty and his existence is beneath our notice." Guts begins to pick himself back up with all of the rage that he can find, and the other Godhand members say, all that hatred seems to be aimed at Femto in particular, who is after all responsible for marking him with that brand. Guts begins to make his way up the stairs towards Griffith, telling him, "It's thanks to you that I'm like this, standing there like you're some godly being." Guts tries to take a swing, but the brand begins to bleed, and then Guts begins to lose his strength, and Griffith tells him, "Don't you know that your brand responds to demon kind and causes pain? The closer you get to a greater demon, the more pain. That's as far as you go." And Guts' body begins to fall to the ground, and then he gets up on his foot, and using the last of his strength, he brings his sword down towards Griffith. Before the sword can land, Griffith pushes him away with such force that Guts' body hits the wall, breaking it, and he falls down onto his own face. Griffith looks down at the Count and tells him, "It seems you have unintentionally granted his wish. But the Void says enough of this. It is time to perform the invocation of doom. What is your sacrifice?" And the Count tells him, "The Black Swordsman." The female slain tells him, "That's not good enough." And another member, Conrad, says he's already been branded. The Count then asks, "Who?" And Griffith points to his daughter, to Teresa. The Count says, "Is there anyone else? If there was anyone else, I would. But my daughter." Another member says, "Don't be upset. Just do what you did last time." And Teresa asks, "Last time?" Ubik starts to laugh, asking if the little girl doesn't even know what her father has done. Well, then show her. 7 years ago, the Count was a noble man and he had a beautiful wife and a daughter, the very picture of happiness. But the land was overrun by pagans, so often the Count was away destroying these heretics. One day after returning home, he opened his doors and found a sea of flesh squirming in a tangled mess, and above them was a statue of a grotesque god with the head of a goat. The one who was clinging to that statue was the one that he loved above all, and in blind rage, the Count killed every single person except for his own wife, and when he raised his sword to her, he couldn't do it. The Count decided that he wouldn't do it. He would end his own life instead. However, his despair called out and opened the portal to another dimension. He begged for the suffering to end. He'll do anything, so he was offered to become a supernatural being if he would sacrifice someone. The sacrifice was offered the one person that he loved and hated the most, so he could transcend his very humanity. The Void begins to bring the mark closer to Teresa, telling the Count that all he has to do is offer her and they will grant his wish. As Puck watches, Guts begins to call to him, telling him, "I need my right arm so I can use it. Hurry up and do it now." Puck looks back and Guts tells him, "Hurry up or your friend will get the same brand as me. So if you don't want that, heal my arm right now." The Godhand states that the Count needs to hurry or soon his life will snuff out. He already belongs to them after he dies. And don't think he'll be resting in peace. Griffith calls out to the Count, "Behold!" A vortex begins to swirl in it. The demons of the damned and Griffith tell him that this is only a small portion, but this is hell. If you keep waiting, soon your soul will be pulled in and you will wander for all of eternity. Selene says this is the fate of those who get caught up with demon kind. And then Puck sees that would mean Guts! Griffith tells him again, you have two options. Be reborn living among demons and continue your existence among demon kind, or revert to nothingness. And Conrad tells him, all you have to do is say the phrase, I offer my daughter for sacrifice. The brand gets closer and closer to Teresa, and she tries to back away, but as she does, she inches closer and closer to the ledge. The Void tells him, speak it! And the Count begins to think, is this the end for him? Only to die as some carved up monster? No, he doesn't want to die! The light begins to shine, and the Void says the fate has been severed. From the vortex, souls begin to flow out, reaching to take their newest soul. The Count watches, and the souls grab a hold of his severed head, and they begin to pull. But among those souls, Puck sees someone. He sees Vargas. The Count begins calling out to Teresa, but the souls begin to fade back into the vortex, taking the Count with them. But the souls are not done claiming. They begin to grab onto Guts' leg to pull him along with them. Griffith turns, and he begins to walk away, and Guts begins to load his cannon, and he calls out to Griffith, and then he fires his cannon right at him, and as the shot gets closer, it's deflected by an invisible shield. The blast knocks Guts back down to the ground, and all of the God Hand members just stare at him, and then a light begins to shine. As the light fades, everyone is dropped back into the moral world. Puck looks around, but then he sees Teresa crying, and in front of her is the severed body of the Count. Puck flies over to Teresa, and she tells him to go away! This is all just a lie! I just want to go back to my room! If I stay here, I would rather be dead. Guts stands over her and he drops a knife and he tells her, go ahead then, kill yourself. Puck slaps Guts, telling him, how could you be so heartless? And Guts responds with, all right then, why not just die then if it's so bad? It's easy, you just need to slit your wrist and all of your worries will be over. You'll probably end up in heaven. Or would you prefer hell? That's where you would see your mother and father again, but it's your life. Do with it what you want. Teresa grabs the knife and she begins to hold it to her wrist, but Puck wraps himself around it, telling her, what do you think you're doing? Snap out of it. The ledge that Teresa was sitting on begins to crack, and then the floor begins to give and she begins to fall. But before falling, Guts holds out his sword and Teresa grabs a hold. Blood begins to drip from her fingers and she begins to scream, and Guts lifts his sword, tossing her back to solid ground. Puck rushes over to check on her, and Guts starts to look at Teresa. Teresa tells him, it all started after you came. This is all because of you. Guts gets back up and tells her, you don't plan on dying anytime soon, so that's fine by me. He then grabs his cloak and the bahillet, and he walks away. Teresa tells him, I will kill you. Someday I will kill you. And Guts turns back. That's fine. I'll be ready whenever you do it. Puck flies to catch up and notices Guts is crying. He knocks him away and continues to drag himself away from the scene. Where a long time ago, there was a mercenary group going through a village that had been killed off and hung. As the group moved through, a woman jumps from the carriage and runs over to one of the hanging bodies on a tree and picks up a small child's body. One of the men mentions that Shisu has been acting strange ever since her miscarriage 3 days ago. And then they state that the leader Gambino, that would have been his kid, right? But he says, how the hell should I know? Gambino grabs Shisu and pulls her away, telling her that the kid is already dead. But as the child falls back down, it begins to cry. She runs back, picking the child up and holding it close, and then runs back to the carriage. One of the mercenaries comments that isn't it a bad omen to be picking up a child in a place like this? And Gambino says, what? Are you scared? 3 years later, nurses gather around Shisu in a tent, telling Guts to get out. Shisu has the plague. But as Shisu reaches out to him, Guts doesn't leave. He stays there holding the woman that he saw as his mother until she passes. 3 more years later, Guts finds himself on the battlefield with Gambino and his men holding out weapons to the men. Gambino calls out for them to give him a spear, and hesitant, Guts gives it to him. Gambino kills the man charging at him, but as the dead body falls on Guts, Gambino hits him with the base of the spear, telling him, don't be so slow, I could have been killed. Days later, Guts trains with Gambino with swords, but being so small and using a sword so big, his movements are slow, and Gambino knees him in the stomach. You can't expect to be getting any more free meals. You have to earn your food. One of the other men then tells him it's fine. Why doesn't Guts use a sword more to his size? But Guts tells him no. He picks himself back up, grabbing the enormous sword, and he charges back at Gambino. But Gambino begins to slice away, cutting Guts all over. That is, until Guts moves forward, thrusting his sword up, cutting Gambino's face. Gambino's face fills with rage, and then he grabs Guts, hitting him across the face, cutting his nose. The other men then rush over to check on Guts and tell Gambino, that was a bit childish, wasn't it? And Gambino tells them, yeah, I guess so. As the night comes, Guts tries to get some sleep, but the cut on his nose clogs his nose with blood and making it hard for him to fall asleep. And then he overhears some of the other mercenaries outside stating that he's a bad omen. Probably his fault why Shisu died. Guts does the only thing that he knows to do. He grabs his sword and he holds it close as he tries to go back to sleep. Days pass and Guts continues to practice swinging his sword until he finally reaches 100 swings. And then he takes a break. The blisters on his hands start to hurt and begin to bleed, but he can do it. He can push through it. Behind him, Gambino calls him, stating he's taking an awful long time to get some water. And then he tosses a punch at Guts, telling him it's medicine. Gambino heads back before leaving Guts, telling him thank you. But Gambino just says, hurry up and get the food. 3 more years pass and Guts finds himself on the battlefield again, this time holding a sword, and Gambino orders the charge and the men start running into the battlefield with Guts joining them. A knight swings his sword at Guts, knocking off his helmet, but Guts thrusts his sword forward, stabbing the knight in the throat. He then pushes the knight off of him, and as he stands back up, he's hit in the back with a flail. The large knight continues to attack again, but before he does, Gambino stabs the knight from behind through the neck. He then looks down, telling him, your sword isn't practical. After he kills another one, he tells him, move on, we got more work to do. Later that night, the mercenaries continue to collect their rewards, but after collecting his, Guts runs over to Gambino to give him his share. Gambino pulls out a coin and flicks it, telling him, keep it up. A short while later, the night goes on and another mercenary calls out to Gambino, and when he turns, Gambino says, Donovan, what can I do for you? As the moon hangs over in the sky, Guts lays in his tent trying to sleep, and then he hears something and he sees Donovan. Donovan reaches down to him, but Guts reaches for his sword and Donovan tackles him and holds him down. The end of our last chapter, we began to see Guts' upbringing as he traveled with a group of mercenaries. As the group won their last battle, the mercenaries celebrated, but the night came and Guts went to bed. And another mercenary by the name of Donovan entered Guts' room and began to hold Guts down by force. Guts tried to fight off the large man, but using his large size, Guts was no match to defend himself. Donovan kicks Guts in the stomach and he tells him, "It's no use fighting. I've already paid Gambino for this night with 3 silver coins." Guts tries to understand what is going on, but the only thing he can do is endure Donovan having his way. The next morning, Guts lays beaten and broken and he steps out to confront Gambino. But as Guts stands with nothing but a sheet and his sword, Gambino looks at him asking, "What do you want? It's a bit early for sword practice, and I'm too hungover, so go find someone else." Guts begins to think to himself that he doesn't know what happened, and as Guts tries to ask, he stops himself, and he remains quiet. Later, the group rides into battle as Donovan leads the charge. He tells everyone the spoils are theirs, so loot whatever you can first. As the battle goes on, Donovan begins killing the enemy knights and begins chasing after a few stragglers. But as he kills them, a bolt flies through the air, hitting Donovan in the back. He looks back to see Guts holding a crossbow, and just as he calls him a bastard, Guts fires another bolt right into Donovan's mouth. Donovan falls to the ground and Guts places his sword into Donovan's mouth, telling him, "Say it! Say it again! Who was it that sold me?" The anger is too much for Guts and he slams the blade down into Donovan's mouth before he can talk. Shortly after the battle finishes, the mercenaries receive a blow as their leader, Gambino, comes back with wounds and a missing leg. Guts sits at Gambino's bedside telling him, "This isn't like you. You couldn't have." With the mercenary group now ran by another of their ranks, the group returns from another successful battle and Guts runs up to Gambino telling him, "Look, I killed the enemy general and I get a bonus." Gambino just says, "Where's the meat?" And Guts asks him, "What? Meat for the dog. Go fetch it quickly." And he hits Guts with his crutch. Guts leaves, wiping the blood from his mouth, stating, "Oh, I'll go get it now." As Guts leaves, 2 other mercenaries say that Gambino is in such a great position, and they wish they could be like him. Gambino overhears them and tells them to say it again, and the 2 of them tell him it was just a joke. Gambino draws his sword, telling them to try. Even with a handicap, they're still scared of him. Now get out of his face. Later that night, Guts lays in his bed, and the rain and the storm hits, and he thinks to himself, "Maybe I should quit. Maybe that's probably wrong. I'll just go out and kill tomorrow and get lots of money." As he drifts off to sleep, the lightning outside cracks, and Guts sees a figure standing over him, Gambino holding a sword. Gambino swings his sword down, and Guts jumps out of the way asking, "What are you doing?" Gambino smiles, telling him how he was stupid. "All of this happened because of you. I thought I would die quickly, but look at me now. I lost my leg, and now my mercenary career. Damn funny, isn't it? So what are you gonna do now? Take your revenge on me? For what? You should have died 11 years ago under your mother's corpse." Guts' eyes begin to widen and Gambino swings again, tearing through the tent. And just as he comes back to swing again, Guts grabs his sword, deflecting the attack. Guts is thrown to the ground from the force and Gambino stands over him, telling him, "I'll tell you one thing. Remember that night when we took you into your first battle? Donovan bought you that night for 3 silver. Guts begins to cry, asking him, "Why? Why would you do that?" And Gambino says, "You're disgusting." And he swings again, but that's when he stopped as Guts holds out his sword, stabbing Gambino in the neck. Gambino's body begins to fall and he struggles, stating, "It's because of you that Shizu is dead." And then he bleeds out on Guts. Guts sits there looking at the lifeless body, and the other mercenaries run over to see what's going on, and that's when they see the bloody Guts in Gambino's body. They ask if Guts killed him, and then they reach out to grab him, so Guts slashes at a man's arm, nearly cutting it off. The others begin to draw their swords, and Guts begins to fight them off, and then he runs to escape. He runs to the stable, and he jumps on a horse, and he leaves the camp, but as he rides, the other mercenaries begin to catch up to him. The horse gets closer and closer to a ledge, and the men begin to fire their bolts, and one man lines up a shot and then shoots Guts right in the back, causing him to fall off of the horse and drop down the cliff. Slowly, the rain begins to stop, and at the bottom of the cliff, Guts lays motionless, and then his eyes begin to open. Looking up at the night sky, he begins to pick himself up, using what little strength he has left, and he begins to walk. He tells himself that it would have been nice if he had died, so what is he supposed to do now? As he walks dragging his sword, he notices a pack of wolves gathering around him, and he just smiles. The wolves howl, and he says, "This is it. The end. No more trouble." The wolf lunges at him, but instead of biting, the wolf lands on Guts' sword, like his arm did it on its own, and then again, and then another. The wolves begin to surround him, and Guts begins to fight back, killing all of the wolves that attack. He then stands over their dead bodies, and the rest of the wolves watch, and then they begin to leave. Seeing the wolves leave, Guts begins to relax, and then he collapses with no more strength left. But off in the distance, carriages begin to ride by, and they see Guts' body. The men see that he's still alive, but did he kill all of those wolves by himself? If he did, he's lucky to have been found by them mercenaries. They needed more people anyways. Years start to pass and Guts is with his new group. During the assault on a castle, the leader calls out that whoever can kill the general will get a prize. The soldiers all begin to attack, and just as one has his head cut in half, a knight wielding an axe towers over him. The other soldiers state that it's the Grey Knight Bazuso. He once killed 30 men with his bare hands. The soldiers start to back up, and then through the crowd, Guts walks forward asking, "How much?" The knights ask, "What?" He says it again, "How much for the 30-man slayer or whatever? He's just a mercenary." The knight says, 5 gold pieces for the head. Bazuso laughs at him, stating, "Only cowards like kids fight for them." And suddenly Guts shifts and swings his sword upwards and then back down into Bazuso's shoulder. He swings again and Bazuso swings, but Guts catches the axe with his sword, slicing into it, pushing him away. Bazuso swings again, but as the axe hits Guts' helmet, it shatters and Guts swings into his side. Just as Bazasu tells him to wait, Guts lifts his sword and slams it down, splitting Bazuso's head. The body falls and Guts just stands out there looking at everyone else. As the battle begins to dwindle down, a group of soldiers watch from a balcony, and one wonders whose group would be better, but another says that they're on a totally different level. Isn't that right, Griffith? A short while later, the leader of Guts' mercenary group hands him his money and tells him that he should stay. He can offer him a good salary. But Guts just takes the money, and after counting it, he walks off. The knight grabs him, telling him to wait, but Guts knocks away his arm, telling him, "Do not touch me." And he then turns his back to the man. The knight tells him that he should just go die in the battlefield, and Guts walks off. A little while later, Guts begins to walk through a field as someone watches, and they call out that someone is coming. Those men were the soldiers watching from the balcony, asking Griffith what they should do. While just laying there, he tells them that they can do whatever they want. The man Corcus starts to lead a group of men down. However, before leaving, another mercenary named Casca laughs, stating that their ability isn't enough to kill the boy. They might just die. Guts continues to walk and then hears the sound of horses, and suddenly he finds himself surrounded. One man charges in, but Guts quickly pulls out his sword and cuts into the man's side. Another soldier charges with a flail, but Guts just cuts his arm off. Corcus shouts that they may need more help, and Griffith tells Casca to just go handle it. Guts gets ready to swing at another soldier, but he's stopped by a bolt flying through and hitting him in the arm. Casca begins to ride her horse towards Guts, drawing her sword, and as she gets close enough, Guts deflects her attack and slashes upwards, hitting her helmet. Guts stops as the helmet flies off, and he sees that this was a girl. Casca jumps off the horse and lunges into attack, but Guts' strength begins to overpower her and he knocks her down to the ground. Just as he's about to deliver the final blow, a spear is thrown, stopping the fight. Guts looks over and Casca shouts, "Griffith!" Griffith looks at Guts holding his sword and he asks, "Are you gonna drop it?" But seeing that he's not, Griffith begins to charge forward. Guts jumps into attack, but Griffith easily deflects the massive sword with a much smaller blade, and then he stabs into Guts' shoulder. Everyone begins to cheer for Griffith, but then everyone begins to see Guts picking himself back up. He walks towards Griffith and he starts to swing, but the wound was too great and then he collapses. As everything begins to fade to black, Guts begins to have nightmares. Everything that happened with Gambino, Donovan, telling them not to touch him, and then he sees a girl with black eyes, and then he wakes up. Guts sees that his wounds have been treated, and he steps outside to see what's going on. That's when he sees mercenaries, but they're all young. Guts looks over to see the girl speaking with Griffith, and suddenly she snaps away, walking towards Guts. He looks into her eyes and he sees that those are the same black eyes from his dream, and then she pulls her fist back and punches right into Guts' wound. She tells him that he should have been killed and walks off. Once Guts picks himself back up, he sees Griffith. Griffith introduces himself and tells him, "You have a great sword, but come, I want to talk with you." The two of them walk through the camp and Guts looks around at everyone asking, "Who are they?" And Griffith tells him, "We're the Band of Hawks." Guts realizes that this is the mercenary group that he fought against at the castle. Instead of taking the castle in 3 days like they were supposed to, it took 3 months. Once the two of them are alone, Guts begins to ask why his thrust missed. He could have easily killed him, and Griffith tells him it's because he wants him. And Guts stops and asks, "Like in a gay way?" But Griffith says no, he saw him fight a few days ago at the castle, the fight with Bazuso and Corcus' group. "You seemed confident, so brave. You're quite interesting. I like you, so I want you." Guts tells him, "Well, I refuse. I don't like you. First you stabbed me and now you want to be my friend?" Griffith tells him, "Okay, what are you going to do?" Guts pulls out his sword, telling him, "We'll determine it this way. If I win, I get to give you a wound like mine. If not, I'll be your soldier or partner or whatever you want." Griffith pulls out his sword, stating, "That's good. I don't mind using power to decide things." Casca calls out to him, but he tells her, "Do not help." Guts raises his sword and he swings it down, but Griffith blocks the attack, and as the blades slide past, he slices a part of Guts' arm. Guts wonders how he can fight with such a slim sword, and only with one hand. This isn't an ordinary guy, and Griffith suggests that they should do this another day. He's still wounded, but Guts tells him, "No way," and he continues swinging. And just as before, Griffith deflects the attack, slicing away at Guts' arms and legs. Guts suddenly sees a chance, and then he flings sand upward, and he swings again, but this time, instead of deflecting it, Griffith jumps and stands on the blade of his sword. Guts tries to lift the blade, but Griffith holds his sword out, facing it towards Guts' face, telling him, "I like you even more now. You'll do anything to win, won't you?" Guts begins to laugh, telling him, "Haha, you talk too much. Now I'll show you what I can use my mouth for in battle." And then he bites down on the end of Griffith's blade. Blood begins to drip from Guts' mouth, and then he pushes on his sword, sending Griffith to fall off the edge of it. The two of them roll down the cliff, and as they reach the bottom, Guts jumps up, punching and kicking Griffith. Griffith is knocked away, but he begins to get up, balling his fist, and he smiles. Once Guts swings again, Griffith catches him and slams him to the ground, telling him, "You made me a bit dizzy, but this is going to end here. So are you going to surrender, or will I have to dislocate your shoulder?" Guts begins to struggle, but as he turns back to Griffith, he tells him, "Piss off." And then, pop! Everyone begins to surround Griffith, telling him, "That was amazing." But then Griffith looks down and he grabs Guts by the face, telling him, "You're mine now." Then he turns back and he tells everyone, from now on, he's a part of the Hawks. Later that night, all Guts can do is think about how he was defeated. It was a complete loss to that babbling guy, the smiling innocent face, just like a little kid. But soon he begins to hear rustling outside of his tent, and he overhears Corcus and a group of men getting ready to ambush him. As Guts grabs his sword, he smiles. But then he hears Casca telling them that they shouldn't do what they're about to do. Even wounded, they're no match for him. So if they go back to their tents, she'll forget this ever happened. Corcus says that she should almost feel that vengeful feeling, right? Griffith made her sleep with him for 2 nights straight. Casca takes out her sword and tells him, "Say it again." And the men quickly say that they're kidding, and they leave. As she walks away, Guts steps out, telling her, "That's twice I owe you for now. Thank you." But she just turns her back, stating, "Don't be misled. It was only Griffith's order, so just hurry and die in the battlefield." Once Guts regains his strength, he heads out on his first battle with the Hawks. Their mission will be to destroy the other army's supplies and weaponry. However, Guts will be tasked with the rear guard. He'll have to block the enemy so that the group can get to safety. Even though it will be the only way out of the forest, he'll have to be careful of pursuing soldiers. This task will have a very high chance of death. A little while later, the group begins to sneak up on the enemy camp, and as the guard sits and watches, he begins to see a light coming out of the forest. And then more. And then the army rides out. The guard calls out that the enemy is attacking from behind, but Griffith and the group are already riding through, killing anyone in their path. Griffith calls out to set fires, and soon the encampment begins to light ablaze. As the fire begins to spread, Griffith then calls out to everyone, telling them to move out. They will leave and split into 2 groups. The groups begin to charge through the entrance, running over the enemy knights, but as they pass, Guts starts to get into position. He's never seen an attack this fast before, but that doesn't matter, because right now, it's up to him to complete his task. At the end of our last chapter, Griffith had just recruited Guts into his mercenary group, the Band of Hawks. Once Guts recovered from his battle with Griffith, the Hawks set out on their first mission with Guts to flank an enemy camp and burn down their supplies. Guts' task was to hold back the line while the rest of the group escaped. The enemy knights began chasing after Guts, trying to kill him, but with each and every attack, Guts managed to deflect the hits and kill those that got close. However, back at the Hawk base, as the group returns, Griffith notices that they are 1 short. Guts hasn't made it back yet. Back in the forest, Guts continues cutting his way through the attackers until he notices that there are more knights waiting for him up ahead. His horse gets shot with crossbows and it falls over, throwing Guts down to the ground. As the knights come in close, Guts watches as they are shot with bolts in their necks, and the sound of a horse behind him gets close. The horse begins to run past, and Griffith holds his hand out, telling Guts to grab on while the other Hawks fight off the knights. Once he gets a hold, Griffith takes Guts, and the Hawks begin to retreat back, but the enemy knights continue getting closer and closer. Just as the knights get within attacking range, Griffith calls out for the group to disperse. Then the enemy knights stop as they see a line of cannons pointed right at them. The cannons begin going off, and the enemy commander tells their group, "Retreat! Retreat!" And as the enemy turns to escape, the rest of the Hawks start to gather and celebrate over Griffith's victory, as Guts just watches, wondering what just happened. Later, as the night begins to set, the Hawks all continue celebrating by eating and drinking. However, Guts sits alone from the group. Another soldier, Jude, walks over to where Guts is sitting and tells him that he should come back with them and drink. While they're all stationed here, they need to have as much fun as they can. Guts tells him, "I'm okay." But another soldier named Rickett comes by to thank Guts for saving him earlier, and Jude tells him to come on, this is your welcoming party. Guts says no one asked them to do that, and Jude calls over another soldier named Pippin to forcibly bring Guts to the party. As he screams, "Do not touch me!" he swings his arms over Pippin's shoulder, hitting him in the chin, and Pippin tells him, "Stop being so bashful." Once they get back downstairs, Pippin tosses Guts down, handing him a drink, and at first, Guts tells him no, but he finally gives in, and he drinks with the rest of the soldiers. They all toast Guts, and Griffith watches from the other side of the room, smiling. The next morning, Guts goes back to sitting along the castle walls, and Jude stops by to see how Guts is adjusting to being in the Hawks. At first, he tells him that he's not sure. There isn't much difference between mercenary groups, but one thing that he has noticed is how young all of the band of Hawks are. And there's something else, something different about them. Jude thinks about it and tells him it might have to do with Griffith. He's like a child, an adult, a good guy, and pure evil all at once. You just really can't figure out exactly what he is. It's also like he has something that the common people don't have. Some kind of confidence with everything. While Guts thinks about what Jude said, he's called down because Griffith wants to have a word with him. He heads down to where Griffith is and he finds him bathing, and Griffith asks him if he'd like to join. It's a great way to sober up. Guts tells him no, but Griffith hands him a bucket and splashes Guts. So Guts grabs one and begins splashing back. The two continue playing in the water until they finally tire themselves out, and Guts pours one last bucket, and they begin to laugh. After a while, Guts looks at the necklace Griffith is wearing and asks him, "What is that?" Griffith lifts it up, stating, "I bought it from some old fortune tellers called a Bahillet, also known as the Egg of the Conqueror. They say that whoever possesses this, in exchange for their blood and flesh, will take a hold of their world." Guts takes a closer look and the eye opens looking at him, and Griffith says, "I'm not sure how it works, but it seems alive, doesn't it? Cool, huh?" As their conversation begins to die down, Guts begins to ask why did he come back to save him, and Griffith tells him that he finally got a hold of something excellent and he wasn't about to lose it in a petty battle. So join him. Things will get interesting. So interesting that it'll be worth risking their lives for, and he'll take a hold of his own country. Fight on his behalf. For now, you belong to me, Guts, and I will be the one to decide your place of death. Later on, Guts begins to think to himself about what Griffith said, taking a hold of his own country. He's not much different in age from him, so how can he say all of that with so much confidence? Time goes on and Guts gets promoted to squad leader, and he now finds himself on the battlefield with the Black Sheep Iron Spear Heavy Knights fighting for the Kingdom of Midland. He sits on his horse before charging the army, and then he takes out his great sword as he runs through, ripping the enemy soldiers apart. While controlling the battle there, the enemy soldiers see the woodsmen running towards them, and it's the Hawks! Just as quickly as Griffith leads the Hawks into battle, the fight ends, and Griffith gives Guts a thumbs up. A little while later, as the Hawks regroup back at the castle, Casca pulls Guts aside, yelling at him, asking what did he think he was doing. He was supposed to accompany her and flank the enemy, but Guts brushes her off, stating, "I'm sorry, I'll keep that in mind next time." And she tells him he's just like he was 3 years ago. He doesn't think of what would happen to his friends. He's just a mad dog. He turns back, grabbing her arm, telling her, "Say it again!" But before the argument could go any further, Griffith yells at them. Griffith appears, telling them that they should leave it at that. As Casca leaves, Guts says that he thinks about his allies. He's not his old self. And Griffith tells him he remembers when they met and he gambled on him joining them. That fight was fun. Guts says that he's sorry about what happened during the battle, and Griffith tells him, "That trait of his, it's also a part of my plan. We must go." Once they leave, Griffith goes to see the king where he is knighted, which is unheard of for a mercenary leader to be accepted with that noble title. As the ceremony goes on, Guts stands outside continuing to train at swinging his weighted sword, and once done, he just sits looking at his sword. Griffith watches over the next battle, and then reports start to come in that the enemy that they are fighting is just one man. Jude says that he heard a rumor before the battle started. Nosferatu Zod has joined the enemy army. Pippin asks who's that, and Rickett says among the mercenaries, he's a legendary swordsman. Any fight that he joins will result in mountains of dead bodies. Even after everyone thought he was dead, he would appear on another battlefield, and the incredible part about it is that these rumors have been around for more than 100 years. Down on the battlefield, Guts fights through his squad to kill this man who has supposedly stopped 500 soldiers. But before he can enter the area that he's in, a soldier walks out missing his right half, stating, "Nosferatu Zod." As the man slowly dies, Guts closes his eyes and tells the men not to follow him. He will kill this man himself. Guts heads into the chambers where Zod is, and as he looks, he sees nothing but dead bodies smeared all around the place. He continues walking through, and then he sees a wall of dead bodies, and a man standing there holding a man's head with one hand, and a sword holding 2 bodies in the other. Guts charges forward at the man, and he flings the bodies from the sword, knocking Guts back with such powerful force. Guts stumbles and he asks, "What the hell are you?" Zod stands towering over Guts, and he begins walking towards him, and then he speaks, telling him that he can dodge his sword. He's pretty good. Guts can feel the enormous aura coming off of Zod, and Zod attacks again, bringing his sword down on Guts. Though he manages to block the strike, Guts can feel the power as it pushes him down, bringing him to his knees. The sword slides off and it slices past Guts' ear, cutting through the pillar that his back was against, and Zod continues his strikes. All Guts can do is block each attack as he's thrown back into the wall, trying not to be thrown over. And Zod tells him, "This is excellent. I've never met anyone who could parry my sword in 50 years. But that's all Guts can do. He's already at his limit. It's like his fighting ability is far beyond any mere mortal. With his back in a corner, Guts thinks, what can he even do? He can't even dodge that swing again. So, if it's just a sword fight, he might be able to match him. Guts gets ready to attack, and Zod says, I knew you couldn't take any more swings, so are you going to gamble on a single exchange? This should be fun. And then he swings down just as Guts begins to swing up. Guts' sword meets with Zod's blade, and the force from Guts' attack begins to cut through his sword. Guts swings one more time upwards, and Zod shouts, and then Guts sees his sword cut through Zod's arm into the side of his neck. Zod grips the blade and he pulls it back out, stating, that was incredible! To wait and break my sword. You are the first human to cut me so deep in 300 years that I've been killing humans. Zod begins to change into his demonic form, and Guts stands watching as his fear begins to set in. And Zod says that he is quite pleased. He's almost forgotten the feeling of bloodlust. Come, let's fight! And with a powerful swing, Zod throws Guts back, charging in at him again. Guts tries to swing and he connects, hitting Zod in the head, but he just laughs and swats him away. Guts' body slams into a pillar and Zod begins to ask, what's this? You can't fight anymore. For a human, you are doing so well, but I won't be merciful. But as he goes to pick up Guts by the shoulders, digging his claws into him, bolts begin to fly through the air into Zod's back. Zod turns to see an army of men standing there, and leading them is Griffith. Griffith tells the men to fire again, but Zod brushes off the arrows, telling him, that was unforgivable. Zod charges at the men, clawing and ramming his horns, and as the bodies begin to fly in the air, he grabs another and begins to chew right through them. Griffith orders everyone to retreat, and then he runs over to help Guts up. Zod then walks over to the two of them, asking, where are you going? My heart still beats. I'm going to fight you until my body breaks apart. And then he starts charging at the two of them. Griffith says that he's gonna go left and that Guts will go right, and the two of them break away as Zod gets closer. In a flash, Zod's right arm is cut off by Griffith. He screams out, knocking Griffith away into a pillar, and then stands over Guts, and he asks, what's going on today? I've met two humans capable of wounding my body. Zod picks up his severed arm and he begins to swing it down, stating, these humans will both die together! He begins to pick up Griffith's body, and as he does, he notices his necklace, the egg of the Emperor. He drops Griffith, asking, how does this young man have the crimson behillet? It belongs to the God Hand. And then he begins to break the roof of the building, stating, our fight for today will stop, but I'm sure I will be seeing you again. But before he goes, he gives Guts a warning. No, a prophecy. If he calls himself a true friend of that man, be prepared. For when his dream comes crashing down, he will face his own death, one that he can't escape. Zod spreads his wings and he begins to fly away, and all Guts can do is think about what he just said. He's gonna die? The rest of the soldiers run back in to help Griffith, and as Guts gets closer to Griffith, Casca knocks his hand away, stating, do not touch him, this is all his fault. Later, after being treated for his wounds, Guts goes to visit Griffith, but along the way, Jude tells him that he's gonna have to wait until after the aristocrats are done with their meeting. Guts says that it's not really a good reason, and he begins to walk to where Griffith is recovering anyway. Casca tells him that he has to wait until the barons are done talking with him, and Guts asks, why should he wait? He's visiting a friend, what does rank have to do with anything? The guards hold out their spears, blocking Guts, telling him that he must wait, and Guts smiles, tripping one of them with his crutch. The other guard tries to swing, but he trips him as well, telling everyone, let's go. As Guts walks in, Casca runs up to him, punching him in the face, asking why does he have to be like this? Why does Griffith like him so much? The next day, Guts begins his training again, swinging his sword, thinking about what Casca said. He's only happy when he's fighting. Why is he always like this? Why is it always his fault? But before he can let his anger take over, Griffith appears, telling him not to be so angry. He's sorry about the other day. He had to talk to those aristocrats, but it was important for this kingdom. He goes on stating that he can't believe they fought such a monster. It's proof that there are some unbelievable things in this world. For example, what they call God and the devil, or maybe they're just the same thing. Griffith then asks, how is it that I survived? I was unconscious. And Guts points to his necklace, stating the demon fled after seeing that. It was like he knew it well. Griffith starts to laugh, stating, I've got to thank that gypsy woman I bought it from. And then Guts says that he owes him again. 3 years ago, he didn't want to lose a good soldier, but he risked his life for just one good soldier. A rational person like him shouldn't have done that, so why? And Griffith tells him, you keep bringing that up, but really there's no reason at all. Is it necessary to have a reason? A reason for me to help you? Do you really need a reason? Now at the end of our last chapter, Guts and Griffith fought against the demon known as Zod. During the fight, Griffith was knocked down, and the demon told Guts that one day that he would have to face his own death at the hands of Griffith's dreams. While Guts and Griffith talk out in the courtyard, Griffith hears a voice call out to him, asking if he's okay from their last battle, and as the two of them look up, they see the King of Midland. Griffith quickly bows, and after being yelled at by the king's brother Julius, Guts does the same. The king praises Griffith for his support in the previous battle, and as the king goes on, Griffith notices a young girl standing behind him and his guards. Griffith asks who the girl is, and she shies away behind the pillar, and the king tells her to come on out. The young girl is his daughter, Charlotte, and as she walks out, she trips over a stone and begins to fall. Griffith quickly catches her, asking if she's alright, and Julius runs over, slapping him, telling him that commoners are not allowed to touch the princess. Guts steps forward ready to hit him, but Griffith stops him and smiles, stating, "I'm terribly sorry, General Julius." A short while later, after the king and Julius leave, Julius stands in the halls as Minister Foss walks by. He tells Julius that he looks rather unhappy, but Julius tells him it's nothing. Foss then asks if he's heard about this year's fall hunt, led by the king and his relatives. And Julius asks what about it. His guard, the White Dragon Knights, have been honor guard every year for that event. And Foss says that according to the Majesty, this year the Band of Hawks will have the honor of watching over them during that event. Julius is shocked. "What did you say?" "The fall hunt is when the Majesty and other nobility socialize. Only the army of the White Dragon should have that honor. It is my job!" Foss goes on stating, "This won't do. Even with Griffith being a commoner, he may rise to the ranks of general like you. But during the hunt, it would be a shame if someone were to be struck by a stray arrow dipped in poison." Julius stops and says, "You don't mean?" And Foss says, "Surely by accident." And then Julius begins to think, telling himself that would be excellent. As the fall hunt arrives, Griffith and his hawks watch over the nobles as they proceed hunting in the forest. Though Guts expresses how pointless this is, Corcus tells him how important it is for them. But while the two of them bicker about this, Griffith notices Charlotte as she turns away as the nobleman shoot at a fox, and he asks if she dislikes hunting. She tells him that it's cruel, just like war. "I don't understand why men have to fight." And without saying anything, Griffith reaches to a branch, pulling off a leaf, and he begins to use it as a whistle. Charlotte does the same, but she doesn't really make a whistle, and the two of them smile at each other. And then suddenly a boar runs past them, scaring Charlotte's horse. The horse begins to buck and run off, so Griffith follows, chasing them down to the nearby creek. But as Griffith gets on top to stop the horse, in the brush nearby, a man with a crossbow positions himself. Charlotte says that it was her first time riding a horse. She was so scared! And Griffith then asks if she's no longer scared. She begins to blush, and suddenly a bolt flies through the air, piercing Griffith's armor right in his chest. The rest of the hawks begin to show up, and Guts calls out to Griffith as he falls back into the creek. Guts then begins to ask Charlotte what happened, and as Casca asks how did this happen, Griffith tells him that they're being so loud, and everyone stops to see Griffith not dead. They begin to ask how he survived, and then he pulls out a necklace that he had, showing that that was what took the hit. The egg of the Emperor saved him again. Charlotte gets off her horse, stating that she's so sorry. If she hadn't lost control of her horse, that would have never happened, and Griffith tells her that there is no need to apologize. The guards begin to ask who was it that attempted to kill their leader, and Guts says that he will take his men and search the area. As everyone heads off, Griffith sees Julius in the distance, and as he looks, he sees Julius turn away and leave. Then Griffith looks back at the poisoned arrow and he smiles. Later that night, Griffith calls Guts up to his study, and as Guts walks in, he asks if he's even read all of these books, and Griffith tells him, pretty much. But some of them are rather interesting. Look at this one with the naked women in it. Guts sits down with the book, flipping through it, asking, this isn't the reason that I'm here, right? And Griffith tells him no, he called him here because he wants him to kill a certain person. Guts asks, kill? And Griffith tells him yes. The poison on that arrow that was fired was a super expensive kind, one a commoner can't afford. And after some digging, there is only one shop that sells it. The purchase was made by a sharpshooter in the White Dragon army. So Griffith bribed a servant girl to keep an eye on him, and she found him secretly going in and out of Duke Julius's room. She couldn't hear much, but she could hear them talking about an assassination. So he's asking Guts to assassinate Julius. Griffith asks him if he'll help him, and Guts tells him, don't make this complicated. If you want it done, just order me like you normally do. So later that night, Guts travels to the rooftops of Julius's manor, and he watches him and his son spar. But after the boy is knocked down, it reminded him of how Gambino trained with him. But then he realized, why would he remember that at a time like this? As Julius sits in his chambers, he wonders what he should do next, and then he notices the draft and he looks up to see a hooded Guts standing before him. He tries to reach for his sword, but as he goes, Guts swings his sword, cutting down Julius. As he falls to the ground, he falls forward, telling Guts that he knows. He works. Griffith. But then slowly he lets go as he dies. Guts hears the door open and the figure sees Julius on the ground and shouts that there's an intruder! Guts rushes at the figure, thrusting his sword out, stabbing into the figure, and then as the light shines, we see that it was Julius's son, Adonis. Adonis's body slides down the wall, leaving a bloody trail, and he begins to try and talk. Guts grabs onto the boy's hand, but he starts to cry, and soon falls lifeless, and then he dies. The guards begin to appear and ask what's going on, and Guts rushes through them, slashing at all of them, killing them, making his escape. Julius's servant, Hudson, looks at the bodies and tells the guards to find out who did this. But outside, Guts is already slicing and killing the guards in his path. He manages to run to the outer wall, and then he jumps over and hides in the sewers. But as he falls in, he begins to have a vision. It was him and Gambino training when he was younger, and then Zod appeared swinging his sword. The swing took off Gambino's head, and then Guts charged in, and Zod stabbed him and tossed his body to the side. But as Zod's face came into the light, it wasn't Zod, it was Guts. As Guts begins to wake back up, he notices all of the cuts and wounds that he suffered from the escape, and he picks himself back up to head back home. A little while later, he walks into their barracks and everyone looks at him, and Casca asks what happened. And he just responds with, "Where's Griffith?" And Casca says that he's at a party for the princess. Guts turns and walks back out, and Casca tries to stop him, but he doesn't respond and leaves. He then heads over to the castle and he heads up the walkway, but then he sees Griffith standing with Charlotte. After watching them for a bit, Guts starts to walk up the stairs, and then he's stopped as Casca grabs him, asking if he's gonna go looking like that. She's going to embarrass Griffith. She then takes out a knife and cuts off a piece of her sleeve, tending to the arrow wound in his arm, but Guts stands and listens. As Griffith and Charlotte sit and talk, Charlotte asks why men can't just stop having wars, and Griffith says true men have their barbaric side, but it's the only way to acquire and defend important things. But there's also something else that you fight for. That's a dream. That's something that you do for yourself and not for others. Those who just seek life just to live another day, that's unacceptable. Guts is stopped by those words, and Charlotte says, "That sounds amazing. Your friends must follow you because of your charm." Griffith tells her, "They do serve me well, but to me, they are not friends. A friend would not just follow another's dreams. A friend would find his own reason to live. A friend, in my mind, is someone that is my equal." Guts stops and he thinks, is that what he's been doing? Following Griffith and he's not been seen as a friend? As Griffith and Charlotte continue their talk, words begin to spread of the death of Julius and Adonis, as a noblewoman runs in shouting into the heavens. Griffith stands there and he smiles. Casca listens to them silently, and then she looks back at Guts as he walks away, and she wonders. Soon the day comes for the next battle, and the Hawks are stationed in the front lines due to the death of Julius. On his way out, Minister Foss stops Griffith, telling him that he wishes him luck, but also about that assassination, they still haven't found the killer. Foss goes on stating that it must have been the work of a demon, but Griffith stops him, telling him, no, not a demon, a human did it. Foss stays silent for a moment, and then he says that he heard that the arrow that shot him wasn't intended for the princess. It was in fact intended for him. Griffith laughs, stating, "Me? I'm just a division leader." But Foss tells him, "Don't be so modest. The rumor also says that you weren't from the warring Judah, but rather from within the palace." But as Griffith walks off, he says, "That's an amusing theory, but I must go now," and prepare to leave. Foss watches and he begins to think how even after mentioning Julius's death, Griffith remained calm. Maybe he doesn't suspect them, or maybe he's just being a bit paranoid. There's no way that they could trace it back to him, Foss, is there? However, after still watching, Foss looks down at the hall back at Griffith and he sees him staring right back at him, and then he leaves. Before leaving, Princess Charlotte stops Griffith to give him something. A lodestone pendant of a knight. It's a magnet, and while he's out, the female would try and pull him back to safety. He says that he can't keep something so important to her, so when he comes back, he'll give it back to her. But as he walks off, Charlotte notices Casca standing close by and tells her, "Please protect Griffith." And then she tells her, with her very life. As they leave, the queen appears before Charlotte, asking what does she think she's doing? Why did she give away something so important? As a matter of fact, she shouldn't even be talking to Griffith. Charlotte tries to say that she can do whatever she wants, but then she hangs her head in silence. The Hawks all begin to move out, but while leaving, Guts can only think about what Griffith said. A friend in his mind is someone that is his equal. As the Hawks leave, Casca begins to feel pain in her stomach, asking why today of all days. A little while later, as the group moves in, Griffith calls out the order to attack as the two armies meet, and soon the bloodshed begins. Through the fighting, Casca starts to become overpowered as the other army's general looms over her. He tells her that she's the only female officer in the Hawks. She makes him sick trying to be a knight. But if she's just here to please the other soldiers, he supposes that that's okay. In a fit of rage, Casca charges at the man, but he easily knocks her off her horse and stabs a trident down between her legs. He continues trying to stab her, and Casca fights off the attacks, but slowly she is losing more and more of her strength. General Adon starts to back her closer and closer to the edge of a cliff, telling her that she's quite pretty. "So I'll let you live if you'll become my whore." She tells him to shut his filthy mouth, and then he raises the trident to strike down, but as he does, there's a loud clank. Casca opens up her eyes to see Guts blocking the strike with his sword, telling her, "This is so unlike you." After pushing the trident away, Guts swings back, knocking Adon off balance, telling him, "Come on, I'm beginning to enjoy swinging this." Adon begins twirling his trident, asking if he can block this attack, the fighting stance of the Bokovich, which has been passed down for more than 140 years. Guts swings downward on Adon, breaking through the trident, lodging the sword into Adon's helmet, but not killing him. And as he falls, Guts swings a second time, slicing through the side of his face. Adon is flung back, and as he gets back up, he says, "Damn you, Guts." But Guts walks over to Casca, asking, "What's wrong? You're not your usual self today." And she looks at him without saying anything. and then begins to faint. Guts reaches out to catch her from falling, but behind him, Adon gets back up, firing a crossbow towards Guts. The bolt hits the side of him as he grabs Casca, but the shot causes Guts to lose his balance and fall off his horse. The two begin to fall down the cliff into the river below as the war continues on without them. Rain begins to fall, and then from the river, Guts pulls himself up, and he pulls Casca to the shore with him, and that's when he notices that she isn't breathing. He tries his best to resuscitate her, and that's when she begins to breathe again. But that's when he begins to feel the pain from the bolt that was fired into him. He pulls it out, tossing it into the river, and then he notices a cave where the two of them can take shelter, and he carries her into it. While inside, Guts tries to tend to some of his wounds, but without anything to wear, he knows that they're going to get cold. So he tells himself he has no choice, right? This is the only thing that he can do, and he begins to remove Casca's wet clothing. After removing her shirt, he removes her pants and he notices blood. But where was she injured? Wait. Being a woman is pretty tough. So Guts holds Casca close to keep her warm as the rain continues to fall. After some time has passed, Casca slowly begins to wake back up and ask Guts what he's doing. He says that they were lucky to fall right into the river, but she doesn't remember anything. She tries to pick herself up, and then she notices that she's naked and punches Guts. She begins throwing pieces of armor at him and even a knife, and he shouts, telling her, "Stop this, I saved you! I'm not looking for a reward, but it would be nice instead of throwing a knife at me." Guts leans back stating, "I know why women aren't suitable for war." But Casca begins to cry, stating she didn't want to be born a woman. As she cries, Guts tries to tell her that he's sorry, and Casca starts swinging at Guts. After finally restraining her, he hands over her shirt, telling her to put this on. But the only thing that she can do is cry, stating that she didn't want him to help her. Guts thinks maybe she just hates him, and he asks her what made her join the Hawks. It's kinda tough being a woman and going to war. At first she remains silent, and then she tells him it's because of Griffith. When she was younger, she lived in a small, poor farming village, and even though it was hard to grow anything there, they were all taxed the same. When they couldn't pay, the government set fire to their homes. So they got used to being stepped on. Then one day while she was working in the fields, there was a noble that passed by, and later found out that her parents gave her away to that noble. However, on their way back to the castle, he began to force himself on her, and just before he could have his way, a light shined, and the noble's ear flew off. Sitting on his horse stood Griffith, and then he threw his sword down towards her. He told her that if she wants to protect herself, pick up that sword, and in a moment of hesitation, the noble jumped towards the sword. Casca managed to grab the sword and hold it up, but before she knew it, the sword had pierced the man's chest and he fell dead. Back then, the Hawks were just a bunch of thieves, but Casca asked them if she could go with them. Griffith looks down, stating whether she followed them or not is her choice, and Casca smiled and joined the group. At the end of our last video, Guts and Casca became separated in their latest battle. While tending to their wounds, the two hid out in a cave awaiting for the moment that they could move out. But while they sat, Guts asked what was it that made her join the Hawks, and soon, she began to tell her story. Once she finished telling Guts how she joined, she then explained the life afterwards. She followed Griffith, even worshipped him, but he was a commoner just like the rest of them. By the time she was able to become a soldier, the Hawks had been serving underneath a baron who was very wealthy and well known. However, there was a rumor about him that he had an obsession and he would pick up little boys from nearby villages, but only the cute ones, and he would imprison them. But all of those boys, their eyes were empty and they had no feelings aside from fear. Later, the Hawks would continue their battles, but one day after fighting, Griffith found a young boy in the battlefield who decided to follow him. He was a nice boy who would help serve dinner, but that day when Griffith saw his lifeless body, he wondered if the thing that really killed him was his own dream. After that is when Casca began to see the changes in Griffith, and one night several days later, she went to the castle of the Baron to see him. While walking past the Baron's chamber, she noticed that Griffith was standing on the Baron's balcony, and moments later the Baron appeared and walked him back into his chambers with his arm around him. The next morning she found Griffith down by the river bathing, and when he noticed her, he asked if she would like to bathe with him. But while Casca tries to find her words to speak, Griffith then says that maybe she doesn't like it because the water is too dirty. Casca then asks why he was with the Baron, and with his simple answer, he tells her because of money. With their army growing, they needed funding to support everything, so instead of losing soldiers in the field, Griffith did a little math and decided that sleeping with the Baron for one night would give him 10 battles worth of money. Griffith tells her that he doesn't feel responsible when the soldiers die under his orders. They chose to fight in his battle. But for them, the only thing he can do for the lost is win. As he continues talking, Griffith begins to grip onto his arm, dragging his nails and ripping apart the flesh. The dreams he has depends on the corpses of his men, a dream soaked in blood. And as the blood drips from his arm, Casca runs to him, telling him to stop, and begins to hold him, telling him that that's enough. So since then, she figured that if this man was willing to sacrifice anything for his dream, then she will become his sword. Casca goes on stating how she wanted to be by his side, help him make his dreams come true, and that those dreams were reachable. That was until he came along. Griffith told him what he has never told anyone, that he wants him. In fact, she thought she would envy the person who was told those words. But him, she just told herself all Guts was an asset to the Hawks, but Griffith gets so worried about things if they involve him. The one thing, though, that she can't forgive is the fact that he doesn't care about others. He almost caused Griffith to die. Casca gets up standing over Guts and tries to yell at him, but all she can do is fall to his chest asking why. Why does it have to be you, Griffith wants? As Casca begins to cry, Guts hears the sounds of soldiers outside, and as the soldiers continue moving past them, he says that she needs to hurry and take the medicine. They can't stay here any longer. As the sun goes down, the two gear up and they begin to move out, and as they walk, Casca begins to feel weak from the fever again, and Guts asks if she's okay. While trying to catch her breath, Guts tells her it's just like they said. Women are trouble when it's this time of the month, but they can't take breaks because she isn't feeling good. The enemy doesn't care if she's a girl, they will kill them all the same, and with that, Casca picks herself up and pushes through Guts, stating let's go. However, not long after that, Guts noticed something else in the woods and quickly pushes Casca out of the way of an oncoming bolt. Suddenly, soldiers begin to surround them, and from the group, Adon steps out, stating that he's so happy that he found them. Though he, an honorable knight, was struck by the likes of him, he must take his revenge. He won't kill them right away. He will use his ancestors' techniques to torture him slowly, and for the woman, he will give her to the soldiers for their pleasure. Guts says that he better watch out, she might bite them off, and Adon shouts, kill them! The swords begin to swing as the soldiers rush in at the two of them, but with Guts' strength and Casca's speed, they begin to hold their own. More soldiers begin to pile onto them, and Guts jumps and stabs through one of the soldiers' mouths, and as he lands, he slashes upwards, cutting through the others. As the soldiers are being slaughtered, Adon says that they are all useless. It's time for his younger brother, the Blue Whale Armor Knight Samson, to handle them. Samson charges in swinging his flail, and Casca thinks how she won't be able to block those attacks, but that's when Guts stands between her and Samson. Samson swings down and Guts blocks the attack, but afterwards continues attacking relentlessly. While Guts is continuing to block them, Casca watches, thinking if he's doing that because of her. As she stands behind, she notices the wound that he took before they fell. He's even defending her while wounded. Soon the attacks stop and Guts says, hey, I'll create a chance, escape the forest. But just as Casca asks him what about him, Samson swings again, except this time, instead of blocking the attack, Guts swings his sword and begins to cut through the spiked ball, breaking it. Samson looks at the flail, and then Guts jumps up and swings back down. Holding his shield up to stop the attack, Samson doesn't have the power because the slash is so strong that it cuts through, and then it slams down after splitting Samson's head in two. Guts turns back and tells her, no, get moving! But Casca tells him she can't go alone, she just can't. Adon then tells the other soldiers to aim and fire at the woman, and as the bolts begin to fly, Guts runs in shielding Casca with his body. She asks him why. Why is he doing this? And he tells her, don't misunderstand me. Only a sick person will get in my way, because I have unfinished business with that guy. Casca remains silent, but then Guts asks if it's good for her to die in a place like this. Well, this shitty place will be the place where she dies. So go on, the sword must be held at the handle. Go back to Griffith. Guts then stops and throws his helmet to the ground and he begins to smile as he begins cutting away at the soldiers. Casca tells him that she'll be back with the rescue team, for wait for her, don't die. And Guts just grins and he charges back at the soldiers, dragging his sword. He cuts through the heads of one of them while heading towards the other group. He goes back to hacking and slashing and cutting them to pieces, but then he stops, telling them that his sword is getting awfully dull. With his sword being 3 times the weight and thickness of a normal sword, if he hits them, it will be a painful death. Elsewhere in the woods, Casca runs through them, but she trips on a tree root and then she sees that she's being chased. From the ledge above her, a soldier jumps out, but with a quick draw of her sword, Casca cuts through the man before he can even land. The other ones then begin to catch up, and not being able to take them all on, she kicks one in the face and begins to run. Back at the main battle, the fight continues as Guts cuts through everyone, killing them in his path. Some archers behind the group get ready to attack, and as one fires a bolt, Guts catches the bolt through his hand, and then he charges, thrusting his sword into the archer's mouth. More soldiers begin to surround him, and with not much use of his left hand, he says that things are starting to get fun. Over with Casca, the soldiers begin to surround her, and she begins to slow down because of the fever. One soldier stands over her ready to swing down a heavy mace, but before he can, she slashes away, cutting his throat. More soldiers begin to appear and overwhelm her, and then they disarm her. A soldier looks down, telling her that she's killed so many of their comrades, so before killing her, he's gonna take something from her. He begins to cut away at the straps of her armor, cutting off her shirt, and all she can think of is how she can't escape. She has no strength. Is she really going to die here? No, she has to go back. She has to go back to the owner of the sword. Just as the soldier begins to crawl on top of her, she reaches and grabs a stick and jams it in the soldier's eye. She jumps over her sword, but before she can swing, bolts fly through the air, hitting all of the soldiers, and she hears a voice call out, stop. As she looks back, she sees Judo, stating, they can't do that. Casca is their only flower. Back over with Guts though, he stands over a mountain of bodies, stating that there's still so many of them. It'll be dawn before I'm done decapitating all of you. Over with Casca and the rest, she runs over to Judo, telling him that they have to hurry. Guts, they just need to hurry. Judo asks what happened, and Casca tells him about the fight and how Guts allowed her to escape, but he's alone, they must hurry. She begins to run, telling herself that she hopes that she can make it. She hopes that they can make it in time. But as the sun comes up, Casca reaches where the battle took place and sees bodies littered all over the floor. And then she sees him, Guts sitting resting against a tree, wounded and bloody. She rushes over and begins shaking him, shouting for him to get up, but he just grabs her, telling her, "You're being so loud, don't shake me. It kinda hurts when you do that." Not long after, everyone helps carry Guts back to the camp and have the doctors look at him. As the doctor gets done wrapping him up, everyone asks how he's doing. And the doctor tells them that he's tough, he won't die easily, but that was the last fight in this campaign for him. Guts shouts out, "Are you nuts? I'll crawl to the next battle if I have to." And the doctor tells him, "You know what? I don't care. I won't be responsible for your death, so do whatever you want." Later that night, the Hawks gather around to celebrate their victory and the return of Guts and Casca, but during dinner, Judo asks Casca if she has a moment to talk to him. Once alone, he tells her that when Griffith found out that they were missing, even though the other general disagreed, he ordered a search party for them and said that the two missing are crucial to the Hawks. They can't afford to lose them. Just thought that she should know. Judo then says he really was amazed to hear him say that. Honestly, he envies her. But as Casca begins to cry, he tosses her a small pouch stating it's a medicine. It might look like dust, but it's actually elf dust. The stuff works like a charm. Casca begins to run back to the camp to give Guts the medicine, but she notices that he's not in his tent, and she finds him sitting alone by an old tree. After walking up the hill, Casca asks why he isn't resting, and Guts says that his whole body aches. He would rather be out here in the breeze anyway. Casca then begins to unwrap the bandages, rubbing the medicine over his cuts, and they begin to heal. And Guts asks what was that. She tells him Judo gave it to her, it's some kind of magic medicine. Then as she continues to rub it in, he tells her that she doesn't have to thank him like this. He didn't save her because he wanted to. He would rather face his enemies than run from them, but to be honest, he realized something. He really doesn't compare to her or Griffith. Both of you hold on to something, gambling with your very lives, and it amazes me. Because for me, I just kill for the sake of killing. Nothing honorable about that. And as Guts looks out of the camp, he says each of those flames out there, they look like a small dream for each person, like a bonfire of dreams. Normally, a small flame is easily put out, but when you join them, they become a strong flame, and that flame is Griffith. Truth is, there's no flame for him over there. He's just a temporary visitor taking comfort in the flame. No matter what, I'll come out and survive every battle. It's been true so far, but maybe my reason for fighting has been somebody else's reason. Guts then gets up stating, "I'm sorry for boring you. I'm not really sure why I said all of those things. Makes me feel like a fool." And Casca just smiles. But as Guts begins to walk back, Casca stops him and asks if he's thinking of leaving the Hawks. He says that he'll stay until the war is over, but before Casca can ask about after, Ricket and Pippet run up the hill shouting, "Griffith is back from his trip early!" Everyone runs over to Griffith and they welcome him back, and Casca runs up stating that she's sorry for slowing everyone down. It was because she hid her health condition that she endangered her troops and got Guts hurt. She failed and she'll accept any punishment that he sees fit. Guts just stands there and slaps Casca on the butt, causing her to jump into Griffith's arms. But before she can yell at him, Griffith tells her welcome back, and she just blushes. After quickly jumping back off Griffith, Casca watches Guts walk off with the other soldiers, thinking if he is really serious about leaving. At the end of our last video, Guts and Casca were faced with Adon and his army. Guts told Casca to go on ahead without him, and he'd make sure that he gave her enough time to escape. But as she returned with help, they found Guts still alive and 100 bodies scattered around the field. After returning back to the camp, the soldiers celebrated, and while Casca spoke with Guts in private, there was one thing that stood out, and that's how he wanted to leave the Hawks when the war was finally over. After the reunion at the Hawks camp, the day has come for the Midland army to battle against the Chudan Empire for one of their strongholds, Doldree Castle. With the Chudan in the middle of a civil war, now is the perfect time for them to strike and try to take that castle. However, this castle is one of their strongest holds, with General Boscone, the strongest of the Chudan army, leading the Purple Rhino Knights. Some of the Midland generals think that it's a bad idea. Their armies wouldn't be able to put a dent into the Purple Rhino Knights. One even mentions to Griffith that even with his invincible army, he wouldn't be able to do anything. And Griffith tells them, "Well, if it's an order from His Majesty, then I will take the castle. I won't need the strength of all of the armies. All I will need is the band of Hawks." Down on the camp as everyone relaxes before the battle, Guts sits in a tent with the other Hawks playing a game of dice. He looks up and he notices Casca there being rather quiet. And he asks, "What's wrong?" If Griffith calmly volunteered us to fight, it means that he knows that we're going to win. Casca tells him that he can be calm all the time. Now will especially be the time to. Remember when she told him how Griffith served under a noble? Guts remembers when she told him about the Baron that Griffith slept with for war money. Casca says that that's the Baron that holds the castle. He's the commander of the northern region of the Chudan army, and his name is Genin. Over at Doldry Castle, Adon returns to the castle after his battle with Guts, telling them that he won't die so easily. He used his secret technique, the movement block, to pretend to be dead. That technique has been passed down through the Brokovich line for 700 years, and if he ever sees that guy again, Bosco stops him, telling him that he used his men to get personal revenge, and he got them all killed, including his brother. How dare he return home? Bosco then grabs a weapon from one of the guards and bashes it into Adon's face, telling him the next time he embarrasses him, he will demote him. After Adon runs away, Bosco returns to bring his report to the Baron to inform him that the armies will soon be attacking the castle. It is said that the invincible Hawks are the one leading the charge. The Baron then says that there is one thing that he must do regarding this battle. The Hawks' leader. Take him alive. That is an order from the High Baron. Soon the time has come for the armies to ready themselves along the battlefield. Looking over at the castle, Judo tells Guts now that he's looking at it, he kinda wants to quit now. Guts tells him, come on, it's just a big castle. So long as we follow Griffith's plan, we'll be fine, even if the river is behind us. Across the way, Boss Kona looks out over the army wondering, what is it that Griffith is thinking? Having the river behind them will give him nowhere to run to. Whatever he's planning though, he still can't fight this many soldiers. But the Baron did seem interested in their leader. Whatever his stupid fetish is, his orders are to eliminate the enemy. Whether he stays alive depends on luck. Back with the Hawks, Guts says it's starting to get dusty out there, and Griffith says that is part of the plan, and Guts smiles, pulling out his sword. As he looks back at the Hawks flag, Guts thinks that this will be the last time that he is under that flag, and then Griffith gives the order to move out. Even if this is his last battle, he will do his best as the Hawks' raid leader. The armies begin to charge in, with Griffith leading his side straight for the castle. As the armies begin to clash, Guts begins swinging, cutting off any body part within his reach. Boscone watches as Griffith and his army start pushing through the defenses, and the soldiers report that they have already had their front line destroyed. Soon Guts' horse steps in front of Boscone, and without a second thought, the two swing right at each other. Guts' helmet flies off, where Guts manages to scrape the horns off of Boscone's helmet. Soon the purple rhino soldiers charge in to protect their general, but as the army comes to his aid, they find themselves being cornered by the Hawks. Boscone says, now I understand. It is true that this man could have killed more than 100 of Adon's men. Back up in the castle, Genin watches, wondering if Boscone will disobey his order and kill Griffith. To make sure that that won't happen, he'll go down there himself and command the battle. As the war goes on, soldiers from both sides begin to scatter, and Griffith gives the order for everyone to retreat back to the rear. The Hawks begin running back, and a purple rhino soldier asks if they should follow. Boscone tells him now. This battle has already shown that the Hawks are truly invincible. The soldiers then tell him that they should probably go after him, but then word comes down that the Baron is here. Genin says that the enemy is fleeing. Don't let this victory pass them up. So all of the units will move forward and do not kill Griffith. The one who can bring him back alive will be promoted 2 ranks and whatever else he wishes. Boscone tries to tell him not to, but Genin says that he will command the battle himself. Order them to pursue. Over by the river, Griffith and the Hawks watch as the Chudan army gets closer and closer, and he tells everyone right behind them is the river. Right now, they must sacrifice their lives. There is no other way to survive this. If you can do this, then we will be victorious. In front of the Doldry Castle, the soldiers position on the walls trying to see the battle, but due to the dust, they can't see anything. However, one soldier notices something on the ground, and it's Casca and her squad. Casca gives the order to attack, and the squad begins storming the castle. As the soldiers spread out to attack, Casca makes her way up the walls, but she's stopped by none other than the shark Adon. She looks at him and tells him that he's like a cockroach, he just won't go away. And he tells her that that's because he's the immortal Adon. Even a cockroach has to kneel to his life force. He then tells her that he knew of their stupid plan. That's why he stayed behind and waited for them. And Casca calls him a liar. No shame at all. Adon then gives the order for the soldiers to come out and tells Casca that this time he won't play around. He'll kill her even if he has to trade his knight's honor. Back out in the battlefield, Genin asks what's going on. Why haven't they captured Griffith yet? And the soldier tells him that that's because a small group is in front of him protecting him. And that group is led by Guts. Boscone steps forward and the battle between him and Guts continues. The purple rhino knights watch as with every swing, no one can see Guts' sword because he's swinging so fast. Over at the castle, Casca stands over Adon and he asks her, just how is it that last time you were so much weaker? And she tells him, at the time, her condition wasn't good. Women have that inconvenient time. And he shouts, you were PMSing? And Casca shouts at him, telling him not to shout that so loud. She then begins to attack, cutting the straps off of Adon's arm and knocking him back down. She moves in for the final attack, and Adon jumps up on his hands and knees, telling her, please, I apologize. And Casca just stares. He begs her not to kill him. Please forgive his past actions. If she would like the castle, go ahead and take it. She tries to figure out what to do. She can't even laugh at this. And then Adon pulls out a crossbow, telling her, I was merely pretending, and he fires. The bolt flies through the air, hitting Casca in the arm, and he tells her that this is the 1,000-year-old crossbow of Bokovich, the lightning crossbow, and it's been coated with a tranquilizer. She grips the bolt, telling him that she doesn't have time to mess with him. As the battle between Guts and Boscone continues, everyone watches as Boscone's last attack strikes so hard that it breaks Guts' sword. His sword is weakened from killing all of those soldiers from before, and then off in the distance, watching over the battle, sits Zod. Back over at the castle, Adon prepares himself to attack Casca, and he tells her that there is no point in struggling. If she drops her sword, he will let her live as his personal toy. Casca doesn't answer, and Adon then thrusts his spear at her. Though Casca manages to dodge most of it, the movement is just making the poison spread quicker. With one more swing from Adon, Casca dodges, putting her back against a wall. And then he asks one more time, what will it be? And while she says nothing, she charges forward, thrusting her sword into the ground. Before he realizes what's going on, Casca leaps over him and then swings. He begins to ask what happened, and as he does, the sides of his mouth begin to split open, and then Casca tells everyone to finish off the rest of them now. Move out! Out on the battlefield, Boscone starts charging, and his squad jumps in the way to shield him. He cuts through the group, and just as he reaches Guts, a sword is flung in front of him. Zod's sword. Guts grabs a hold of it, and he rushes forward with one powerful swing. Boscone's head flies through the air. As the soldiers all watch, one calls back to Genin and tells him, the castle. And when he looks back, he sees Casca and her squad standing along the walls, and everyone waving the Hawks flags. The Purple Rhino Knights try to understand what's happening, and Guts tell them, you are fools! Your general bought into our plan, and your fortress has fallen. Griffith raises his sword and tells everyone, we are victorious! Now start hunting down those enemy soldiers. Let them flee, but exterminate any who oppose us. Enemy soldiers all begin to retreat, and through the rushing, they knock Genin down off his horse. As he picks himself back up, he sees Griffith before him. Griffith tells him, long time no see. And Genin tells him, surely you would spare me, right? Our relationship. It's just, right now, it's unfortunate circumstances that we are enemies. But I've been searching for you, waiting for the day that we would meet again. I made sure to order my men not to kill you. You haven't forgotten that night, have you? The deep affection we had for each other? It was not just limited to one night. Griffith stares down and Genin asks if he holds a grudge. Griffith tells him no. He, however, has no affection for him. In fact, he doesn't even hate him. He doesn't care about him. He just happened to be there when he needed him. He was just a pebble that happened to fall in his path, nothing more. Genin calls him a bastard, but Griffith draws his sword and he stabs Genin in the eye. And he tells him, it would be bad for you to spread stupid rumors. As Genin's body falls, Griffith turns and leaves him with the rest of his soldiers, dead. Over in the castle, Guts goes to check on Casca from her wound, and he tells her good work. He helps her up, and they look out into the battlefield, and they see Griffith radiating over his victory. Casca says he's incredible, but it's weird. As she sees him raise the flag for victory, he somehow seems distant, unreachable. It hurts, and Guts tells her she's wrong, and then picks her up. He tells her that there is no point in just looking at him from over there. Let's go see your general. As Guts leaves, he looks back to see the sword telling himself he can't believe it. And across the field, Zod says, soon you will fall. The descent of the devil is close. Now, the end of our last video, Guts and the Hawks had a fight at Doldry Castle. Though everyone thought it was a mission that couldn't be won, Griffith formed a plan and was successful in capturing the castle. Now with the war over, it is time for Guts to do what he was planning on doing, leaving the Hawks to walk on his own path. It was late night after the return of the Hawks back to Midland Castle. As Minister Foss meets with a group of hooded figures, the men discuss Griffith's recent victory and how they need to remove this man from any potential power for his victories. The king plans to award Griffith by making him a general and awarding him and his Hawks the title of the White, the highest rank within the armies. But Foss has a plan. He will put a deadly poison in Griffith's wine during the victory celebration. Some of the men show concern, asking if this is going to work, and then a voice tells them not to worry, and the Queen of Midland steps forward. Foss learned of the Queen's affair with Julius, and spread rumors that it was Griffith who had plotted his death. Because of those rumors, she worked with Foss to set up this little arrangement for Griffith's demise. The Queen had loved Julius, so now she will have her revenge, and not as the Queen of Midland, but as a single woman. The next morning, the Hawks all return to the castle as the crowds gather, and they praise everyone for their victory. Even Princess Charlotte cheers everyone from her balcony. However, as the Hawks walk through the town, the Queen watches over, plotting Griffith's death. When the hooded group meets again, Foss receives a letter, and after reading it, his eyes widen. And the Queen asks if there's a problem, and Foss assures them that there is nothing to worry about and walks away screaming, "Damn you!" in his mind. As the night sets, the Hawks step into the banquet hall in their honor. Everyone looks around because it's very uncommon for a mercenary group like them to ever be this close to the nobles. The girls all swarm over Griffith and soon Guts, but for Guts, this isn't his type of environment, and he decides he's just going to step away. Guts sits down and he watches all of the nobles swarm around everyone, including Casca. Casca looks back, seeing Guts, and she quickly runs over to pull him away with her. She tells him that these men are just so persistent. He's going to accompany her for a while. Guts stares at her and she asks, "What's wrong?" And he says, "I just didn't know you were into that stuff, like wearing a dress." Casca then asks him, "What about you? I've never seen you come to any of these types of events before, so why now?" Guts looks up at the moon and says, "I figured I would see what it was that Griffith was working so hard to obtain just once." Before long, guards all call attention as the king enters the halls. Casca says that she's gonna head back in, and Guts tells her, "I'll be there in a bit." As she walks off, Guts begins to think about how the only reason that he came here is so that everyone in the Hawks don't hear about what's going to happen next. The king announces that he would like to honor Griffith and his Hawks on their bravery for succeeding in what they thought for 100 years wasn't possible, the capture of Daldry Castle. Tomorrow he shall bestow Griffith with the highest rank in the Midland Army, the title of White. Among that, all members will be given the title of Knight and Peerage, making them nobles. Griffith looks through the crowns to see Guts outside, and he smiles at him. While everyone celebrates on Griffith's awards, Foss watches from afar as the other men in his group ask if he's okay. Foss tells him that he'll be fine, but the more he stares at Griffith, the more worried of a look sets in. Soon the wine is passed out for the toast, and the king tells everyone, "Cheers!" And Griffith puts the cup to his lips, and then seconds later, the cup falls to the ground. Everyone stops talking to see Griffith falling over, and they run over to see what's going on, but during the confusion, Guts is nowhere to be seen. Outside of the castle, the server of the wine flees, thinking how this was the easiest job he's ever had to do. But as he runs further, he sees a figure, and that figure is Guts. With one swing, the server's head flies off, and Guts heads back. Meanwhile, over in another tower, the Queen and Foss meet back with all of the conspirators, discussing how easy it was to execute their plan. Foss mentions that he has already had the server taken care of, but for now, he will go and check on how everything is going. As he leaves, he shuts the door behind him with a worried look. The Queen and the rest of the conspirators sit around, and the Queen begins to smell something burning. Everyone gets up to run to the door, but the door is sealed shut, and suddenly an explosion goes off. The Queen rushes to the top of the tower to avoid the smoke, and then she looks down to see him, Griffith! She begins to shout, "How is this even possible? The doctors all said he was dead!" And Griffith tells her, "It would certainly appear so. That's the way I arranged it. It wasn't poison that I swallowed, it was a mixture that would temporarily make me appear dead." The conspirators start shouting for him to save them. It was the Queen and Foss's idea, but Griff tells him, "This is war. There is no spectator seat on the battlefield." The Queen shouts, "A commoner like him would burn her? The wife of the Midlands king? She will not permit it!" However, Griffith tells her death on the battlefield doesn't separate royalty, nobles, or commoners. Those simply defeated die. The fire begins to spread as the ceiling starts to fall down around the Queen, and Griffith turns his back and he walks away. After walking down the stairs, he says it's over and Foss stands there stating nothing. Griffith then asks if he is afraid of betraying his partners, or is it because he actually helped kill the Queen? Foss finally asks how was it that he had learned of their plans, and Griffith tells him that it was the day that they first went out to battle. He looked back from the hall and he saw his look, and he knew that there was something in there that they would become enemies. For it was that moment. His eyes were muddled with fear. Griffith then pulls back the document blackmailing Foss and rips it up, stating they all need to think of their futures, so let them put those silly grudges behind them. Griffith then leaves to pay the bandits that helped him blackmail Foss. As they walk off, they say maybe they should blackmail Griffith, and then they see a figure in the distance. Guts looks at him, and he pulls out his sword. A little while later, Griffith walks to Guts as he stands over the bodies of the bandits, telling him that it seems he's done. Griffith then asks if it's safe to leave the minister alone, and he tells him he's sure he learned his lesson by now. And then Griffith stomps and asks Guts for him to be using these filthy methods, not even getting his hands dirty. Is he a terrible person? Guts laughs, stating, "What could someone who killed 100 men even say about that?" Guts slaps Griffith on the back, telling him, "We should head back. We need to go calm down Casca. Speaking of which, you didn't get to see her, did you? She actually showed up to the celebration in a dress." Later, Guts and Griffith return to the castle, and everyone sees that Griffith is in fact not dead. Casca begins to cry, and Griffith tells her that he's sorry for making her worry, but she looks really nice in her dress. As the days goes on, the funeral for the queen is held, and talks of how the death of the queen and the assassination attempt on Griffith was carried out by Judah. But even with the bodies that were found outside of the castle, no one was able to connect the dots to the truth, and the truth fades into the darkness. A month later, Guts begins packing his things, getting ready to leave. He looks back at his armor and his broken sword one last time, and he smiles. Over in Casca's room, she looks out to see it snowing, and then sees Guts walking through that snow. She chases after him, asking if he's really leaving. Sure, they may have fought in the past, but they just got over a major obstacle. Guts tells her that he's already decided he can't be buried in Griffith's dream. A little while later, Casca begins to sulk, and Judo and Corcus appear, and Judo says to come with him for a little bit. The three men head off, and Casca begins to think about what can she do. She knows Griffith can stop him. A little while later, Judo takes Guts to the tavern to ask what's going on, and he says that it's not a sudden decision. He's already made up his mind. It's been fun for him for these past 3 years. It's not like he's unhappy or anything. Corcus then stops him, asking, why throw it all away if all you know is how to swing a sword? Guts thinks about it, stating, you're right, I can only do just that. But when I look at Griffith, I see someone who can take himself to the top. Griffith doesn't want someone who is weak by his side, so he wants to stand next to him with his own ability. He will not let him look down on him. Corcus starts yelling that all of this talk sounds like a kid. Everyone knows Griffith is special, and it's all because of him. As Corcus goes on, he decides that he's not going to waste his time having this talk with Guts. He already can't stand him. Once Corcus leaves, Judo mentions that as for him, he's kind of a jack of all trades. He's better than average with any kind of a weapon, but really, he has no specialty. So that's why he decided that if he can't achieve greatness, he would rather serve under someone who will. 3 years ago, he said he might find his calling in the Hawks, but it seems that he was wrong. Judo then walks with Guts as he gets ready to leave, and he tells Guts that he should take Casca along with him. Guts tells him no, she's in love with Griffith, and Judo says even still, she won't ever be with him. Even now, for Griffith to advance, he will have to do something that will put him over the top, and that means Charlotte. If Griffith was to marry her, then his dream would be reached very quickly. Then Judo asks, what do you think of Casca? Guts says that it's rare to see a girl who can fight side by side with men, but she's just a companion. For him, well, she's after Griffith. A person like him would never stand a chance. The two continue on their way outside of the city and see Casca and the others waiting for them. Rick Hirsch runs up stating how cruel it is for him to be leaving so quietly, and then Guts looks at Casca, and then from behind her, Griffith steps forward. Griffith asks if he's really leaving, and Guts tells him yes, but he's sorry. And Griffith's eyes widen at that response. Everyone tries to tell him to stay, but Corcus steps up stating that the Hawks survived before Guts came, and they'll survive after him. He always hated Guts ever since the first day that they met. It's because of his face. The presence of it annoys him. While Corcus continues to go on, Griffith stands in silence. Guts tells everyone farewell, and as he walks by Casca, he thinks about how Judo told him that he should take her with him. Instead, he continues to walk. That is, until a sword blocks his path. Griffith says that once he belonged to him, and he won using a sword, so if he wants to leave, he'll have to win like last time. Guts asks, can't it just be farewell? But after looking at Griffith's eyes, he draws his sword. Casca tries to break up the fight, but Guts tells her to just stay back. Don't try and stop them. Griffith stares at Guts just like he would an enemy. Guts had betrayed his trust, so he doesn't blame him for being angry. And so, everyone watches as Guts and Griffith get ready to do battle. As they stare at each other, Guts is unusually calm. Casca begins to think about how everyone will go back to normal once Griffith wins. But is she wanting that because she wants Guts to stay? Griffith inside of his mind says that there's no way that he could possibly leave. He will not permit him to go. He will not allow him to leave the Hawks. But what can he do? With Guts' strength, he can only block a hit or two. Griffith continues playing out how the battle will go, only seeing his chances of winning being him cutting through Guts' attack and possibly killing him. Griffith then rushes forward to attack, and Guts pulls back on his sword, and then Guts swings down, meeting with Griffith's sword, pushing it down. The dust flies, and through it, Guts stand, holding the blade next to Griffith's head. Griffith drops his sword and sits there. Guts tells everyone that he's leaving now, and Casca watches. She tells him to wait, but Guts continues to walk, not even looking back. Griffith remains silent, but in Guts' mind, he tells him, it's all right. I was just a pebble in your path. You can get up and continue on your journey. Now, at the end of our last video, Guts began to set off on his own, leaving the band of Hawks. However, before leaving, Casca told Griffith of Guts' plan, and the two went to try and stop him. After a duel where Guts won, Guts left, leaving all that he had fought for behind him. Night began to set as Guts sits alone around a campfire. Off in the distance, he begins to hear something, but then only sees that it's a wolf. It's been 3 years since he had to sleep alone. Everyone used to always be around him back then, but Guts begins to wonder, did he make the right choice by leaving? It all started after he heard Griffith say those words, and since then, he ultimately changed. As Guts sits staring at the fire, a shadow begins to loom over him. He quickly grabs his sword and prepares himself for what could be in the shadows. Could it be Zod? The shadow moves behind Guts, but he can't move. He could be attacked. The shadow then swings, and Guts swings back, but what he sees is nothing. And then the shadow begins to take a shape, one of a man in a skeleton-like armor riding a horse. The Skull Knight says that the gears have been set in motion, and then he calls out to Guts, calling him the Struggler. From this moment until the eclipse 1 year from now, him and his friends will walk blindly into their doom. But there is one thing that he must remember. He was born from a corpse, and he struggles every day with death. So struggle, challenge, and rise to struggle again. Never forget that. Guts shouts, "What do you mean?" But the Skeleton Knight turns and walks off, disappearing. Guts wonders if it was an illusion, but looking at the horse prints on the ground, he knows that it wasn't. Back in Midland, the rain begins to pour down and Charlotte looks out her window. Her servants tell her that she should go to bed early to avoid catching a cold, but as she does, she hears a knock on the window. She looks back to see Griffith standing outside. She lets him in and Griffith tells her that he's sorry for coming in all wet and visiting so late. But Charlotte just hugs him. Charlotte then says how she so badly wanted to see him again. She was always afraid that she would hear what happened to him. Why didn't he come sooner? And Griffith says nothing, and then his eyes change. And then he kisses Charlotte. At first, Charlotte doesn't know what to do, but then she gives in, allowing Griffith's hands to wander. He moves her closer to the bed and she tells him no as he lays on top of her. He tells her scary and sad things may arouse her. And moments later, their bodies become one. However, through the noises coming from Charlotte's room, a servant looks into the keyhole and sees what's happening. As Charlotte begins to fall back asleep, Griffith sits up, touching the scar on his chest, and he begins to cry. The next morning, Charlotte wakes up to see Griffith is already gone, and then she sees the magnet that she gave him has been returned. She begins to feel a pain, and then she looks under her sheets to see blood. Outside, Griffith hops over the walls to return, but as he does, he sees soldiers and they quickly surround him. The commander then tells them to go away and take him away. Meanwhile, the king goes to visit Charlotte and barges into her room. She tells him even if he's her father, he can't come bursting into her chambers, and then he notices the marks around her neck. He pulls away the blankets to see the blood stain. A little while later, Griffith is taken to the torture chambers as the king walks in. The king tells him that he treated him as a fellow warrior, and he now knows everything he's ever said in praise is just lies. The king then grabs a whip and begins striking him. Though his daughter may be a stupid girl, not realizing the importance of her inheritance, she was everything to him. The king continues whipping Griffith over and over, telling him that he had to take away the only warm flower in his life. And that cannot be forgiven. 17 years he raised her as a pure body, and Griffith destroyed her. But as the king goes on, Griffith says he wanted to kiss her, didn't he? He wants to sleep with her. Is that it? He could have had her married off to strengthen his relationships with other nations, but instead he kept her locked away. Enraged, the king goes back to whipping, tearing the flesh off Griffith's body, shouting, "What do you know?" Even after the king is done, Griffith hangs there, smiling. The king then tells the executioner that he could do whatever he wants to that man. He is now an enemy of the country. Just make sure that he lives so that he can think about what he's done. Before leaving, though, the king says that it's a shame that the hawk fell to earth only to never fly again. Afterwards, the king returns to Charlotte's chambers as she sleeps, wondering what did Griffith do to her body. He then pauses and he begins to grope Charlotte, pulling down her blouse. She begins to wake up seeing her father touching her and she begins to scream. All the while, Griffith sits in his cell. Back upstairs, the king is getting ready to get on top of his own daughter, but she manages to push him away. He tells her to wait, he just wants to touch her, and then he begins to kiss her, but she pushes him away again. The king tries to spread her legs, but after Charlotte kicks him repeatedly in the face, he finally backs away. Elsewhere in the field, Casca rides with the Hawks to meet with Griffith, but off in the distance, Pippin hears something. He shouts for everyone to get down, but before anyone can react, arrows pour down from the sky. Many of the Hawks are killed, but as everyone looks around them, they see that it's not the enemy, it's the Midland armies. The Midland army starts to close in, continuing to fire crossbow at the Hawks, slaughtering most of them. And Casca tells everyone to try and get into formation, but then she sees the bolts flying her way. Back down to the torture room, the executioner tells Griffith that he's pretty strong for not crying, and then he notices Griffith's necklace, and he decides that he's going to take it for himself. But as he looks at the egg, one of the eyes open up, and he ends up dropping it down the drain. Off the egg floats into the waters below. A year later in a far-off castle, the nobles gather to watch a fighting tournament. The next fight will be with the one known as the Crazy Killer, said to have killed 130 Midland soldiers in the 100-Year War. His opponent is a man who is entering the competition for the first time, yet no one knows of his origins. Also watching this fight is Guts, who is waiting in the shadows. The fight begins and the Crazy Killer begins to rush forward swinging. The unknown man easily dodges the attacks, then finally catches the blades with his guitars. While holding the sword in place, the man begins kicking Crazy Killer's face over and over, and Crazy Killer pulls back and slams his sword down. But again, the man catches the blade. Using his weapon in a scissor motion, the man cuts the blade of the sword, and the Crazy Killer tells him he surrenders. The man says that this country's swordsmanship is pathetic, mere child's play for anyone trained like him. The crowds begin to cheer, and then out of the shadows, Guts steps forward. He tells the man that he looks like he wants to fight someone more skilled, and the man gets ready, stating that although it's just for entertainment, he still has to be ready for anything. Guts motions for him to come on, but the man stops. He looks at Guts and he asks if he even thinks he can win with that, and Guts tells him, "Come on, let's do this already." The man rushes forward, thrusting his blade towards Guts, but Guts just dodges side to side, weaving out of the strikes. The man then kicks and Guts catches it with the hilt of his blade, and then the man kicks with his other foot. Guts blocks the second kick with his hand, but now with his hands both immobilized, the man strikes. Just before the man can stab Guts' stomach, he swings his sword, throwing the man to the ground, telling him, "You should join the circus with those moves." The crowds begin to cheer for Guts' victory, and the noble hosting the event runs down to tell Guts that it was actually designed to find the stronger fighters so that he can ask them to come and work with him. Would he be interested? Guts tells him no, he was just looking for someone strong. And then the noble mentions that there's a thieves gang who is run by a strong woman. Not even men can stand against her. The noble then goes on to state that he should have heard of them. They used to be soldiers. They were the Hawk something. Guts grabs the man and he says, "That's right, the Band of Hawks." Guts thinks about it. The Band of Hawks is being led by Casca now? Back over in Midland, a pair of Midland scouts stumble upon the Hawks camp, most of which are beaten and bruised. Judo enters Casca's tent, telling her that if she keeps working too hard, her body won't make it. However, they did just get word from their spy in the palace who said Griffith is being held at the lowest level in the Tower of Rebirth. Though it's been a year, only few people have heard his voice. But this past month, his voice has ceased altogether. Judo goes on telling her that they may have elected her as the leader for now, but she doesn't have to take on all of the responsibilities herself. So in other words, go to bed after eating. As Judo leaves, Casca takes a bite of her food and then collapses from exhaustion. Outside, the soldiers sit around, but as one of the guards doze off, a bladed circle flies through the air, cutting into the guard. The man Guts fought pulls the ring out of the guard's skull, stating he can't believe there was no reaction. Is the Band of Hawks really worth his skills? He gets ready and then he tells his men to go, and suddenly the Hawks camp is overrun. Judo calls out that there's an enemy attack, and Casca rushes out of her tent to see the fight has already begun. She begins to give everyone battle commands, and the man tells her no wonder she's the leader of the Hawks. But no matter who the leader is, once they're down, the game is over. Casca readies herself and the man lunges forward, thrusting his guitars at her. Casca tries to swing back, but the man catches the blade and kicks her down. He then continues his assault, pushing her back further and further, and then he pins her down, her head between his blades, and he tells her, "It's over. If you surrender, I won't kill you, but I'm only counting to 3. 1, 2, 3. But before he can cut, a voice says 4 and kicks him in the back of the head. His body goes flying and everyone turns to see Guts. He tells Casca, "Don't let the circus fighter scare you. Be strong." And then he smiles at Casca. The man gets up, stating that he can't believe that he is the man who killed 100 men. No wonder he's so cruel. Guts tells Casca that he'll take care of this guy, she should go do her part. The man pulls out bladed ring, stating that he humiliated him in the competition, so let him repay him with these war wheels. Guts stares at him, stating, "You really are a circus fighter. It's a waste to call you a warrior." The man flings the rings into the air past Guts, and then he tells him that he is doomed. The rings circle back and they fly towards Guts, and then they suddenly drop. They begin to twirl around Guts' finger and hilt, and he asks, "Is that all you have?" The man pulls out a sword, but then the sword is split into several blades, all whipping around. The blades start to flail, cutting through Guts' cloak, some hitting him, but Guts just smiles, licking the dripping blood from his cheek. He jumps side to side, avoiding the whipping blades until he stops, and he gets ready to swing. The man says that he accepts his challenge, and he whips the blades forward. Guts takes his sword and he swings upward so hard that a gust of wind flies up, disrupting the blades. He then charges forward, slamming the man back down. Though the man catches the blades, he jumps back as his turban becomes undone, showing his face. The soldiers call him Salat, but he just stops, and then he says, "Your name is Guts, right? I'll remember that." And suddenly, the attackers are gone. Guts looks back to see Casca and the remaining Hawks that are still alive. Now, at the end of our last video, Guts had returned to the Hawks after hearing that they were being hunted down across the Midland lands. Upon returning, he found that Casca had been in charge of leading the men while Griffith was taken away. During his time there, Guts and Casca began to explore their feelings that they had had for one another, and soon they started their preparations to break Griffith out of the Midland prison. Even at a young age, Griffith found himself always leading. Whether he was leading the children to fight off the gang of other children or collecting their treasures, he would always lead. However, while in the back alleys of the town, the sun would never shine there, and it was after realizing that he made his mind that he would win by any means necessary. But here he is again, in complete darkness. Is he even sane anymore? Or did he lose his sanity a long time ago? Amongst all of these images, there is one that clearly stands out: Guts. There have been many people who either gave their favor or feel hostility, and from all of these emotions, he held so many souls in the palm of his hand, except one: Guts, the man that put him into the darkness, yet also the man who's keeping him alive. But why? As Griffith lay in his cell, all of these thoughts race through his head, and then there's a sudden creak in the stone walls. One of the stones begins to push forward, and from it, 4 small deformed creatures crawl out. They call out to Griffith, calling him their prince, and they beg for an audience. Back up at the Hawks camp, Casca tells everyone that from here on out, the Hawks will be split into 2 groups. Her group, the rescue team, will be leaving immediately. The rescue team will consist of only Guts, Casca, Judo, and Pippin. Once things are ready, the rescue team heads off to Wyndham, while the rest of them will head off on their own way. Guts and the rest of them begin to walk through a cemetery, and Guts asks why the hell are they out in a place like this. After examining some of the tombstones, Casca says that it's here, and Pippin pushes the gravestone over. Everyone looks down to see a secret passage, and Casca begins to climb down. Guts stops her, stating that it's okay for him, Pippin, and Judo to go, but it would be stupid for the commander to join them. Casca just backs up and leans in, and then asks, "Is this because you're worried? Because right now we're soldiers, so you had better leave your feelings out of this operation and obey your superior's orders." As she walks off, she turns back yelling at him that she can at least watch his back. She tells everyone to move out, and the 4 of them head down into the secret passage. After a short run, the group finds themselves in a mausoleum. They look around, and Guts notices a light coming towards them, and he grabs his sword. Casca tells him to hang on. It's an ally. From the shadows, a hooded young woman appears, stating that she remembers them, and after pulling her hood down, she says that it's her, Charlotte. Casca tells her they have their profound gratitude for helping them, and they don't have much time if they plan on saving Griffith. Soon, the group heads out, and Casca stares at Charlotte as she thinks about how things turned out for Griffith. Was this the person who was necessary for him to succeed, she thinks? But as she continues to think on that, she begins to feel some jealousy that it was her that Griffith needed. Charlotte tells everyone that she owes them an apology for the way that her father treated them and Griffith last year. She goes on stating that it all began the night that Griffith came to her room. Casca's heart begins to sink, and then 2 voices call out asking what they are doing. Guts and Judo start to draw their blade, and then the 2 guards realize that it's Charlotte. The guards tell her that she shouldn't be walking around this late, and then Charlotte's servant, Anna, pulls out a coin purse and tells the guard, how about they go check out the tavern? One of the guards mentions that they do have to protect that tavern. Once the guards leave, Charlotte begins to faint, and as everyone goes to catch her, she tells them that she might be a sheltered princess, but Griffith gave her the power to do these things. Casca looks at her, and then Guts puts his arm around her, asking if they want to hold hands. Casca pushes him away, and as Guts turns back, he feels a tug at his cloak, and when he looks back, he sees Casca holding onto it. After a little more walking, the group finally reaches to where they're holding Griffith, the Tower of Rebirth. Judo tells everyone that amongst all of the towers in Midland, this is the highest and the oldest. It's also said that this tower was here even before Midland was founded, but nobody knows why it was built. Charlotte then adds that there is a subterranean part of the tower that has been used for prisoners, and that Griffith is being held on the lowest floor. Casca then tells Charlotte thank you for helping them, but she can no longer follow them down into the prison. Judo stops Casca for a moment and whispers, "It might be a good idea to bring her. She could make a good hostage." Casca tells him to stop messing around. They can't do that, and as the 2 further discuss it, Charlotte steps between them and says that she has a favor to ask. She would like to come with them down below. Charlotte begs to be taken, and Casca tells her that she's against this. If they were to take her, they'd be hunted down as fugitives, and even if they flee to another country, they wouldn't be able to hide for very long. Besides, if the countries found out that they were using a young noblewoman as a hostage, Griffith's name would be forever soiled. She tells her that she must understand, and then Scarlet screams, "No way! She wants to go, she wants to see Griffith." Everyone quickly grabs Charlotte to keep her from throwing a tantrum, and Casca tells her, "Fine, you can go, but if Griffith says that you can't, you must turn back." Everyone turns to get ready to head into the tower, and as they leave, Guts notices Casca is somewhat sulking. Guts asks her what's wrong, what she said was actually good, and she says that it was only partly true. Just somewhere in her heart, talking about Griffith to the princess like that. Well, she reaches out and Guts pulls his arm away from her, telling her that this isn't the time, they need to move out. As he walks away, Guts tells himself that though he doesn't like to see her care for him anymore, it is really him who can't get Griffith out of his head. As they get closer to the tower, Judo throws 2 knives and hits 2 guards in the neck, killing them. Once they move the bodies, the group then makes their way into the tower. Back over at the Hawks camp, Rickett notices everyone in somewhat high spirits at the thought of Griffith finally returning back to them. He heads over to fetch some water, and as he drops the bucket into the water, he sees something out in the distance. The light begins to flutter around, and then he finally sees the image of a fairy. The fairy starts zipping through the woods, and as it fades, Rickett hears something else coming from the camp. He begins running back to the camp, thinking that it could be an enemy attack, but when he gets there, he sees the entire camp empty. He walks through the bonfires asking where everyone went, and then he hears a voice telling him to run. He looks over to see Kim hanging, and he tells him to run. Soon a face begins to appear and smile. The face comes into the light, and Rickett sees the smiling face with another mouth that Kim is hanging out of. Rickett begins to step back, getting ready to run, and then he steps into a puddle, except the puddle isn't water. It's blood, and it's coming from the mouth of the bodies with the other demon creatures all around. Up in the trees, the fairy from before watches over and then motions for them to attack. All of the creatures start to slowly surround Rickett, and from the shadows, the Skull Knight appears. The demons pause for a moment, and then the Skull Knight shouts for them to go back. All of the demons stop and they look at him, and then they slowly start to turn away. Rickett begins to panic, and as the demons leave, so does the Skull Knight. All that's left is Rickett and the mound of bodies that was once the remaining Hawks. He shouts, "Why did this have to happen?" And off in the distance, the Skull Knight watches and leaves. Back at the tower, the group heads down into the lower levels of the prison, passing all of the deformed and mutilated people being held there. One of the prisoners scares Charlotte, and Guts decides to pick her up so that they can hurry. As they continue to talk, Guts asks, where does this giant hole lead anyway? Charlotte tells everyone that the prison goes down about as far as the tower goes up, but the hole itself continues much farther below, even at the end of the prison. She goes on to tell the story of how Midland and how the lands used to be inhabited by various houses and tribes. Though due to the constant fighting with no leader, a third of the population was killed off. That is until a man known as King Geiserik came and united all of the countries. Even with the documents about him disappearing, one thing was known, and that was that he loved war. He fought his enemies without pity and would bring them all death. He also loved to wear a terrifying skull-shaped helmet. Guts stops, and then images of the Skull Knight begin to appear. Judo says that he remembers hearing about that too, but while the king lived in luxury, the citizens were crushed by taxes. And then one night, God sent 5 angels from above to punish Geiserik, destroying the city in a single night. Charlotte then adds that the city's name was translated into Midland, and that's where it came from. Everyone continues talking about the old stories, and Casca walks and bumps her head on a rock ledge. She drops her torch, and as it falls, it continues to fade lower, lower into the hole. Though out of sight of the group, the torch falls all the way down into the old ruins and a mountain of bodies. These bodies, though, all bear a strange marking on their foreheads. The group pushes further down, and Guts notices something behind them. Through the shadows, a small shadowy figure follows, but far enough to where Guts tells everyone that it was nothing. Soon the stairs begin to end, and everyone sees a single door at the lowest level. Using the keys from the guards they killed outside, Casca slowly opens the locked door and shines the lamp in. They walk further into the cell, and Guts says that he sees someone. And he starts to see a mutilated body on the ground, and he recognizes the helmet, and he calls out to Griffith. In our last video, Guts found himself in a fighting competition where he learned that the Hawks were now being led by a woman and are currently being hunted by the Midland armies. As Guts returns to the Hawks, he found that they were under attack by one of the fighters that he had defeated back in the competition. Taking his loss as a disgrace, the man attempted to fight Guts again and soon lost a second time and retreated. A short while later, after the battle, the Hawks set up camp so that the injured could tend to their wounds. While the camp was set, Rickard explains to Guts what happened to Griffith and how his behavior changed right after the two of them had their conversation. Before we could go any further though, Judo grabs Rickard by the shoulder and shakes his head. Judo then says that in the course of a year, the Hawks have shrank to a fifth of what they once were, and if it wasn't for Casca stepping up, they would have faded completely. Just as they were attacked, Casca took charge, and because of it, they managed to escape without losing their forces. Judo goes on to state that with everything that's been happening, they've been forced to lay low, and with their spy in the castle, they've come up with a plan to free Griffith. Guts looks out at the rest of the soldiers who remained, and he says that the place that he came back to didn't change at all, and that's a nice thing. Everyone asks Guts what he was doing for the past year. Word of the Hawks being hunted spread rather quickly. Guts held out his sword and he told him that he hid himself in a cave, and he's been practicing with his weapon. Judo then asks if he found what he was looking for yet, and Guts smiles and tells him, not yet. Soon Gaston and the rest of them crowd around telling Guts that it's time to stop talking about the serious stuff, and it's time to have a drink. Everyone starts to pull Guts away, and Judo stops him, telling him that he has one more thing to tell him about Casca. A year ago, when she was injured, she was delirious for 3 days, but as she slept, she kept calling for Griffith and him. Guts looks over at Casca, and as Casca looks back at him, she quickly turns back to the squad, acting as if she didn't see Guts. As the soldiers begin to get ready to turn in for the night, Guts stands off alone as he normally does. But this time, Casca comes to visit him, and she tells him that he needs to come with her. Once the two of them walk away, she tells him to get ready for battle. And before Guts can ask what's going on, she takes out her sword and she swings. By quickly turning, Guts blocks the attack with the hilt of his sword, and then he sees the look in Casca's eye. He tells her that that swing was full of hatred, and without saying a word, she thrusts her sword right back at Guts. She unrelentlessly swings as Guts continues to dodge the attack, and she tells him to take his sword out and fight her already. As she swings again, Guts sticks out his foot and he trips her, causing her to fall. He says that she can at least give him a reason as to why she's attacking. As Casca starts to pick herself back up, she looks at Guts and tells him, it's all because of him. He destroyed everything. Once she gets back on her feet, Casca runs back in swinging. So Guts holds out his sword, stopping her from cutting off his head. All the while, Casca screams how it was because of him that Griffith got depressed and weak. She thrusts one last time, shouting Griffith couldn't do anything without him. And Guts stops, and instead of blocking the attack, allows it to strike. He holds the blade in his side, and the two of them stare at each other, and blood begins to drip from his hand. She tells him that's enough, and while holding the blade, Guts tells her, I was doing what I had to do. What else could I do? Tears start to fall from Casca's face, and she tells him to let go already, and then she falls to her knees. She begins to laugh, stating that she can't take it anymore. All she ever wanted was to be Griffith's sword. She wanted to be with him. She goes on stating that she's not stupid though. She knew that Griffith's goal was to sit on the throne of Midland, and marrying Charlotte would have been the quickest way. However, with what happened back then, she realized that there was no space for her around Griffith, so her dream was finished. She'd worked hard for the Hawks, and now she can't protect them anymore. So she leaves the rest to him. Casca's body slowly begins to fall back, falling over the edge of the cliff. But suddenly, Guts' hand reaches out, grabbing her. And as blood continues to drip from his hand, he pulls her up and throws her back in the ground. He asks her, what the hell are you thinking? And she gets closer and tells him he always bleeds for her. With tears running down her face, she calls him a fool. He pushes her hair from her forehead to kiss it. And as he does, Casca tilts her head up, and the two of them kiss. A short while later, Guts leans over Casca's naked body, and he asks if she's scared. She tells him yes. She feels like she's changed. The love she felt while fighting now seems all fake, like it's all disappearing. Guts then looks her over, noticing all of the scars. She pulls away, stating that she shouldn't have those kinds of scars because she's a woman. Guts grabs a hold of her and holds her close, telling her that she can't think about such stupid things. Just feel her life. That's all. As the two kiss, Casca tells herself that the feelings that she has for Guts are not fake. The two bodies begin to twist around each other, and through their passion, Guts begins to see himself in the same position, back when Donovan held them down. All he can remember was what Donovan told him, how he was sold by Gambino. Casca turns back asking what's wrong, and then Guts slowly begins to raise his hands and place them around her neck. The visions continue just like when Donovan held him, and soon he sees himself holding onto a younger version of himself. However, as the grip begins to tighten, Casca begins to cough and soon falls down. She asks why, and Guts slams his arms against the tree, stating that he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to kill Gambino. Guts then begins to laugh, stating he couldn't resist the power of a child, so he killed Donovan by putting an arrow in his back. Casca asks if he killed Gambino because he attacked him, and Guts slams his hand, stating no! Guts says that he didn't want to kill Gambino. He took him home as a baby and taught him how to use a sword. Why would he sell him out to that pig? And then he realized, too late, that his sword was already at Gambino's throat. Guts continues to shout that he's so sorry to Gambino. He's so sorry, father. And as Guts' tantrums stop, Casca reaches out, and Guts quickly snaps back to reality. He's been crying, telling her although this was her first time, he screwed it up. He then threw his cloak over her, stating that he knows it's impossible to forget this. So if she wants him to disappear, he will, or he can repay her during the upcoming battle. He goes on stating that not once this year did he think about it, and why now all of a sudden? Without saying any words, Casca hugs Guts from behind. And she tells him that he has seen all of her, even her weak spots, and now she feels like they're equals. Her hand runs over Guts' scars, and she tells him that all of these injuries were because of her. So even if it tears them apart, she wants a scar on her body from him. The two fall to their knees and they go back to kissing. And a little while later, the two fall asleep. Some time begins to pass, and Casca leans up, stating that for her first time, that was amazing, even though he was kind of violent. She goes on stating that she can't blame him though. Back then he never liked when people touched him, so it's probably from the same thing, right? Guts turns over stating that if it's her, then it's okay. Only her touch doesn't offend him. Casca smiles and then says that after they save Griffith, he should stay with them and the Hawks, just like before. Guts stops her, telling her, "No, this was only temporary. I need to stay separated." As he looks back at the waterfall, Guts mentions how he stayed there once. Except back then, it was for training, so he tried to cut the falling logs from the top. He wasn't successful, and he ended up breaking a sword. He spent some time with a blacksmith named Godo, who stayed alone supporting himself with his daughter Erica. And back then, it gave him time to reflect on this dream. As he stared at his sword, he began to wonder if the sword was his dream. The sword was like an extension of him, and it allowed him to escape countless places where he should have died. Everything though that he has done, the people that he has met, the pain that he has been through, the sword has always been at his side, making sure that he survives. Or maybe it's because he's attracted to the sparks that it makes as the swords swing against each other in battle. The one thing that he does know though, is that he wants to create his own sparks. Back in the current times, Guts goes on stating that he would like to stay and help rescue Griffith and reassemble the Hawks, but after that he'll go in his own way. Casca begins to laugh, telling Guts that he really is like Griffith, and then throws a fist full of leaves in his face. She stands up telling him that all of their dreams are selfish. All they think about is themselves. Doesn't matter if she even exists. She continues shouting and telling him, but Guts tells her that they should go together. He doesn't know what'll happen in the future, but staying with someone against everything that he's ever done, it could be trouble, but it could be great. If it's like this, then he needs more. From now on, there's gonna be 100 moments like this. No, 1,000 moments like this, and he will take care of her. Casca tells him that he's stupid, and Guts says not to call him that. He has feelings, you know. The two awkwardly stare at each other, and they kiss. However, 3 days later in those same woods, a strange phenomenon occurred. Rumors among hunters began to spread as they talk about what they saw in the light, a huge, snake-like creature. And soon, the time for the eclipse will begin. Now, at the end of our last video, Guts was reunited with Casca and the Hawks in their attempts to rescue Griffith, who had been held prisoner for the past year. While a small group headed over to Wyndham to free Griffith from the Tower of Rebirth, back at the Hawks camp, demons started to show. Now at the lowest level of the tower, Guts opened the cell door to find the beaten and broken Griffith laying there. Once the cell door swings open, everyone looks at his body, and Guts' heart begins to sink. Griffith's body has begun to deteriorate, and most of the flesh has been ripped from his body. Casca begins to walk forward, and Guts shouts at her to stay away. Casca stops in place, and then Judo takes a key to unlock the clasp, holding Griffith's helmet on. Once he pulls it away, Guts and Judo see Griffith's face, or at least what it used to be. Guts shouts that this can't be Griffith, but as Griffith opens his eyes and sees Guts, his eyes begin to widen. Guts holds on to his old friend, but as Griffith tries to talk, no words come out. So Guts is left to hold Griffith and cry. Suddenly, everyone hears the cell door shut, and the deformed executioner tells everyone that it seems they're trapped here. But do not worry, princess. He has called the guards, and they'll be here in a few moments. Guts stands and asks the executioner if he's the one who did this. But the executioner says that the king told him to do whatever he wanted to him, and all the things that he did to Griffith. First, he cut his tendons in his hands and legs. Then he peeled his skin down to the bone. Sometimes he would burn him with a hot iron or soak him in a boiling water bath. But what he's most proud of is the tongue that he cut out and now wears as an amulet. Guts stomps his foot, and the executioner says that there's no point. And in a flash, the end of Guts' sword shoots out of the door, skewering the executioner. The executioner tries to tell him to stop, but Guts takes out his dagger, and he slices off the executioner's tongue. He then holds the deformed body over the pit, and the executioner attempts to ask for help, but Guts tells him, "I can't understand you. You need to speak more clearly." Suddenly, a bolt cuts through the air and lands at Guts' feet, and he looks back to see the guards surrounding him, blocking their escape route. They shout for everyone to surrender, but Guts doesn't say a word. He tells everyone to follow him, and he begins to charge up the stairs. Body parts begin to fly as Guts rips and smashes his way through the guards. The guards stop in shock as they see Guts never break his momentum, and they see him continuing right towards them. More bolts begin to fly, but using one of the other guards' bodies, he shields himself and he slams the sword into more guards. They begin to retreat, but the leader of the guards tells everyone to stop. But Guts doesn't stop, destroying everyone in his path, fleeing or not. As blood begins to rain down from the higher levels, Casca tells everyone that they need to move out. They will not let Guts get too far ahead of them. And outside of the tower, the captain waits with a wall of soldiers waiting for the recon to return. One of the guards mentions that he hears voices, and then bodies come flying out of the entrance, with Guts following closely behind. One of the guards sees what's going on, Guts sitting there, soaked in the blood of his comrades. And he shouts that that is the 100-man killer. And the guard captain tells everyone to surround him. The guards are petrified. They don't move. And the captain walks towards Guts, telling him that he's a fool for showing the enemy that he's tired. But as the captain continues talking down to him, Guts gets back up and smashes through his head. Casca and the rest of them finally manage to get topside, and all they see is Guts tearing through the guards. Casca manages to kill off any stragglers, and then suddenly a voice calls out to them, telling them to stop. Through the crowd, the old king says that he can't hurt Charlotte. All of the troops need to pull back. He drops his cane and he says that he won't let Griffith take away the light that is his Charlotte again. So bring out the Baki Raka. A short while later, 5 beings step forward, and one of the guards asks, who are they? And another captain says that they are a powerful gang of assassins, sort of a murder guild. Even though it's a religion, it's all covered in secrecy. The king shouts for the Baki Raka to go. Bring back his daughter and Griffith's head. Back inside, Casca and the rest of them walk through the hallways looking at the bloody destruction that Guts has left behind, and then they finally see him. Charlotte tugs in the back of Griffith, telling him that she's scared of that man. Casca takes up a cloth to wipe away any of the blood, and startled Guts asks what is she doing. Casca tells him that she's cleaning the blood. He's scaring the princess. Griffith watches as Casca continues to wipe the blood away, and then the look in his eyes begin to change. The group continues down into the sewers, and Guts tells everyone to stop. But as he listens, he hears the water dripping, and that's when he sees one of the Baki Rakas. A tall, lanky man dropping down from the ceiling, slashing away towards the group, and then he begins climbing back up. Guts tells everyone to be careful, and then a face appears in the water underneath Casca. The man then thrusts a small trident up, but Casca blocks the attack, stabbing downward. The attack misses, and everyone watches as a small man swims backwards away from everyone. Judo mentions that those men are the Baki Raka. For the king to hire them, he must be really pissed. Charlotte notices the man and sees him ready with a blowgun aimed right at Griffith. The dart shoots from the gun, and without a second thought, Charlotte extends her arm to take the hit. Everyone looks back to see Charlotte drop to her knees. Anna rushes over to tend to Charlotte as Guts hacks away at the drain pipe. The small man jumps out of the way, and with one more backswing, Guts cuts that man in half. Suddenly, the lanky man appears again between the walls. The man offers a deal. Give him the princess and he'll guarantee her life, because that dart was poisoned. Casca looks back at Charlotte and then says, fine, you have a deal. The man then tells Anna to bring the princess and make sure not to do anything since she's not a part of the battle, or he will kill her. Charlotte reaches out to Griffith and tells him that she wants to be together with him. Griffith looks at her, and then he begins to try and tell her something. And once he's done, Charlotte just closes her eyes, and Anna takes her away. As she walks, Anna sees another Baki Raka, and she tells her, right this way. As the two of them leave, the lanky man says that it's time for them all to die now. But from behind the group, the man in the water leaps up to attack, and Pippin deflects it. He begins attacking the water, and the lanky man begins to jump up and over the group. Casca tells everyone to form a circle around Griffith, and the lanky man calls out that it's time. Down the sewer, the large, muscular Baki Raka holds out a spear, and he launches it. Guts notices the spear, and at the last second brings up his sword to block it. The power of the spear knocks Guts to the ground, and then starts bouncing him backwards. He gets back up, stating that spear had the power of a cannon behind it. He then shouts for everyone to duck as another spear is coming in. He blocks the second attack, and Judo notices something. He turns off the lamp, and he tells Pippin to hit the wall as hard as he can on his signal. The muscular Baki Raka sees the light go out, and Judo gets into position. He throws a knife, and it starts to bounce off the walls, and then he throws a second knife, watching the sparks from the hits against the wall. And that's when he sees him. With 2 more knives, Judo quickly lunges forward and throws it to hit the water, and then back up, hitting the muscular man in the throat. Judo then calls to Pippin to do it now, and as the sparks light the passageway up, everyone attacks. Casca stabs down on the man in the water, and Guts splits the lanky man's head in 2. As the bodies fall back into the water, Guts tells Judo that was incredible. Casca tells him to go ahead and turn the light back on, and then Guts asks if anyone smells something. They all begin to cough, and Pippin tells everyone not to light the torch, just run for the exit. Off in the distance, they see the woman who walked Anna out, and they notice that she's striking her bracelets together to make a spark. Fire begins rushing towards the group, and everyone starts to run. It begins to burn the bodies of the dead Baki Raka, and it starts to get closer and closer to the group. And seeing a crack in the ceiling, Pippin strikes the ceiling and tells everyone to duck. The fire rushes by and through the opening, shooting up outside. The blast lights up the graveyard, and Guts asks what the hell happened. Pippin tells him that he's been through a ton of these accidents in a mine. Fire always escapes upwards. Everyone tells him that it's amazing that he thought of that, and Pippin says that it wasn't him who noticed it. It was Griffith. Guts smiles, and the group continues onward. Back over at the castle, the king forces the female Baki Raka to her knees, and he stabs her. As she falls to the ground, he tells her that he thought he made himself clear, but he said no one harms the princess. The king then turns to Anna, asking if she was a part of this. But Charlotte struggles, telling him no. She was the one who dragged Anna into this. And as Anna runs over to catch Charlotte from falling, she tells the king to forget about Griffith. He tortured him for a year. He can't even move his arm and legs or even talk. The king turns away and says that he understands. He won't touch him anymore. Charlotte smiles as she begins to go back to sleep, and once the king walks away, he tells the guards to send for the Black Dog Knights. Tell them to find Griffith and kill him. The guards ask if he's sure, and the king slaps them, stating, "If you bring me Griffith's head, I'll give you anything." As the king walks off, the guard tells another guard that those men are a bunch of criminals. They'll bring disgrace to the Midland army. Elsewhere, the leader of the Black Dog Knights sits in his chambers with women all around him. Suddenly, the door opens as one of the men tell him that they have a job, and the leader says that he's busy right now. Plus, he has something important to do anyway. The man laughs, stating that it's an order from the king. He said the leader of the Hawks escaped. The leader begins to strangle the women in his lap, stating, "That's funny, because the thing that he had to do was kill the leader of the Hawks, Griffith." At the end of our last video, Guts and the rest of the team managed to fend off against the Bakiraka assassins during their escape from Midland Castle. With the Hawks escaping with Griffith, Charlotte pleaded with her father to give up on his pursuit. The king promised her that he would, but after Charlotte was taken away, the king sent out the orders to have the Black Dog Knights pursue the Hawks. As the king sits on his throne, he thinks about how Charlotte locked herself away in her room for over a year when they held Griffith prisoner. The jealousy of Griffith is destroying his sanity, and a virus rages through his body, slowly draining his strength. It is all because of Griffith that these things are happening to him. But soon, Waleed will return with his head. The man, Waleed, the leader of the Black Dog Knights, was once a prisoner himself. During the times of the 100-Year War, Midland sought to recruit criminals in good shape to become soldiers, and among them was Waleed. He was a strange man, seemingly inhuman, and he told the king that he should let all of the prisoners here fight it out to become a leader. Some of the prisoners shouted at him for even suggesting that, but one of them stepped up. Barbo says that the monkey here has said some interesting things, and they should let him fight this guy and make the winner a leader. The king tells him so be it. Let them determine the winner with their methods. One of the guards takes the restraints off of Barbo, and as he goes to Waleed, Waleed tells him not to worry about it. This is all for fun. Waleed then motions to the tower next to him, and he tells the king to keep an eye out. He's about to give him a new sculpture. Barbo grabs a mace and charges at Waleed, telling him that he's going to die for that. And suddenly Waleed's face changes, and before anyone knew it, Barbo's body was skewered at the top of that tower. So the king honored the agreement by making Waleed a leader. Next to the Hawks, the Black Dog Knights were the second most feared group of knights. These knights would travel into the enemy territories and steal what they wanted, rape the women, and massacre the children and elderly without pity. The king too feared this man, but now he has released the hounds, and they're starving for blood. Elsewhere, Guts and Casca receive help from one of the local farmers in transporting Griffith. Casca tells them that they're sorry for the trouble, but the farmer tells her that Griffith is still a hero to them, and it was an honor to help. Before leaving, one of the farmer's daughters hands Griffith flowers, stating that she's convinced what the castle said about the Hawks is wrong. And Casca tells everyone that it would be better not to say anything about this to anyone, because it could put them all in danger. Shortly after, the Hawks move out again, ready to leave the country. But not long before they leave, horses begin to pull up on the farm, and Waleed asks the girl who handed Griffith the flowers if anyone suspicious has stopped by. The girl begins to shake in fear, and then Waleed tries to figure out what to do when they see the Hawks. So after murdering the entire family, Waleed rapes the young girl, telling her that his motto is enjoyment and excitement. A short while later, Casca notices they have pursuers and sees them holding their spears up. As she looks closer, she sees parts of the farmer and his family waving atop of them, and Waleed running straight for the Hawks. Guts looks back and Judo tells them that they're the Black Dog Knights. They're Midland's nastiest of troops. So much so that they've been exiled to a remote region. Casca tells Judo to keep heading towards the bridge, but Judo says that they'll have to catch up to them before they can even use their surprise. Guts pulls back, telling everyone to hurry. He'll buy them some time. And Casca calls out for him not to do anything stupid. They need to go. But Guts says that if killing those 100 men has taught him anything, he'll run if he's in danger. Casca doesn't say anything, and Griffith just looks at her. He readies himself, and as the raiders charge forward, Guts and Pippin begin tearing through them. As the two of them kill, more and more of the soldiers continue showing up. As the men fall back, Guts looks into the raiders' eyes and notices the men. They're motivated by terror. Through the crowd, a spear with a severed body is thrust through, and as the spear gets closer, Guts knocks it away with his sword, and then he sees the young girl's head fly off of it. Waleed rise up next to Guts and tells him, "I hope you had a good life, because right now you're going to amuse me." Looking down at the young girl's body and head on the ground, Guts tells him, "All right, let's play then." He brings his sword down, and then he suddenly stopped because Waleed grabbed a hold of Guts' hand mid-swing. He says that with such a big toy, what are you going to do next? Up ahead, Judo and Casca reach the bridge, and Casca quickly runs to the side of it. Suspended under the passage are barrels set with explosives. Back at the fight, Waleed starts to crush Guts' hand until Pippin swings, knocking it away. Guts begins to think, how could this man stop his sword with a single hand? The bloodthirst from him isn't normal. Guts then looks deep into Waleed's eyes, and he feels something familiar. Just like the time that he met Zod and the Skull Knight. From the distance, Casca calls for them to hurry, and Guts and Pippin take off. As the two cross the bridge, Casca begins to light a fuse, and Waleed says, well, this is interesting. And as the knights continue to chase, an explosion goes off, destroying the bridge. Everyone looks back through the explosion, and Casca shouts to them to keep going. Soon the smoke begins to clear, and Waleed stands shouting, safe. He then looks down in the ditch, stating that he's lost quite a few guys, though. Oh well. He tells the surviving men to hurry up, and he sees them not moving. One of the raiders says that it could be dangerous. There could be more traps ahead, and Waleed looks at him, stating, so? He reaches out with two of his fingers, and he pinches the man's forehead until it pops. He then tells the other men not to worry whether they live or die. Life is a waste anyway. Up ahead, Guts notices the knights are continuing their pursuit, and he thinks, why is it that these kinds of monsters appear before Griffith and him? Then he remembers the Skull Knight telling him that the eclipse is coming, and Zod telling him that he'll experience an unavoidable death. Casca shouts that they are at the next point, and as the Black Dog Knights follow, Waleed sees rocks beginning to fall. The boulders come crashing down on the raiders, and Waleed just smiles. As a large boulder starts to fall down towards him, he stands up on his horse and he punches through the rock. Then suddenly, the oil is lit, and the giant blaze covers the raiders. Waleed covers himself with the fire, and he charges on. Guts tells everyone that they're gonna have to face them again, but Casca tells them no, they made it just in time. Arrows begin to fly overhead, and they rain down on the Black Dog Knights. Waleed looks up and he sees the rest of the Hawks have lined up with crossbows. Corcus then raises his hand and tells the men to attack. The two armies run straight at each other, and Waleed tells Guts that this is the beginning of a real battle, and right now, he is Guts' opponent. Guts just looks at him and says he doesn't know what the hell they are, but he'll end this with his own two hands. Waleed begins to laugh, stating that Zod told him that there's something worth fighting in the Hawks. And then he raises his club and he tells Guts, let's play! Guts grips his sword and he charges forward, swinging, and as Waleed blocks the hit, the rest of the armies begin running into each other. More Hawks appear, and Corcus tells everyone to charge. Casca tells one of the soldiers to go on ahead and take Griffith with them, and then she rides back into battle. Body parts begin to fly as Guts and Waleed ride through the crowd swinging, but all of Guts' attacks are blocked and deflected like they're nothing. He swings one more time at Waleed's head, and then the blade stops. Waleed smiles, catching the sword in his mouth, telling him, haha, too bad. While still biting down on the sword, he winds up and he punches the horse that Guts is riding on in the side of its face. It falls to the ground and Guts jumps up and kicks Waleed in the head, knocking him off of his horse. The two men catch themselves as they land, and everyone stops to watch. Waleed stands back up, telling Guts, this is good. You're something else. Guts just smiles, asking, the hell do you eat with those kinds of teeth? He follows up with a flurry of swings, all blocked once again by Waleed. And as the battle continues, Griffith watches, and with his frail body, he reaches for his sword. But with no strength, the sword just falls, and all Griffith can do is stare at it. Back outside, Waleed swings and Guts stops the attack, but the force behind it pushes him away. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Casca leads the forces through, killing any raider in their path. One of the raiders calls out to Waleed, telling him that the fight is over. Everyone ran, and Waleed tells him, what? The festival is just starting. He turns to the tree next to him and he grips into it, tearing it away from the base. He then starts hitting and punching it until it splinters. It falls, crushing the remaining raiders. The Hawks watch as Waleed just killed his own men, and he shouts that he told them over and over, the fun part starts now! Waleed walks back over to Guts, telling him, I don't feel like playing anymore. So from now on, I'm gonna start to have fun. He lifts his arms and the smoke begins to swirl around him, and everyone watches as an eye peers through the smoke and Guts looks up. The smoke begins to settle, and Waleed's body is now covered in fur, with 3 extra eyes and a mouth. He stands there as Waleed towers over him. At the end of our last chapter, Guts and the Hawks are being chased by Waleed and his Black Dog Knights. During their battle, Guts began to get the same feeling as when he first ran into Zod, right after Waleed transformed into a monstrous beast in front of him. A second mouth on Waleed's chest begins to open and Guts stares at it. This feeling, it's like he felt before, just like when he faced against Zod. The soldiers all begin to panic, thinking Zod has returned, but Judo tells them no, this one is different from Zod. Waleed grabs a hold of a tree and he pulls it out of the ground. Before Guts can even react, Waleed swings the massive trunk, launching Guts into the woods. Everyone watches as Guts' body begins to fall between the branches and crashes back onto the ground. Casca begins to ride over to check, but before she can get to Guts, Waleed steps in her path, knocking her off of her horse. He tells her, I thought there was only men around here. And then he reaches down to grab her. But before he can, a bolt flies through the air, landing into him. Casca turns back to see Judo with the rest of the Hawks, readying for a second attack. When Lade starts pulling the bolts out, shouting, "Whenever I get interrupted when I'm trying to kill something, I get really cranky." Using the trunk from before, Lade starts swinging wildly, and he kills any Hawks in his path. Soldiers begin to flee, but before some of them can get a chance to get away, Lade reaches out grabbing them, eating both of them and their horses. Blood begins to drip down his chest, and the soldiers stare in horror at what they've just seen. Judo gives the order for everyone to retreat, but while the soldiers flee, Casca tries to wake Guts up. She looks at Guts' lifeless body and starts to slap him, trying to snap him out of it. She shouts that she won't ever forgive him. He's not supposed to die in a place like this. He was supposed to take her away. Soon Casca begins to hear the ripping of trees, and she looks up to see Waleed. He tells her that he's sorry for keeping her waiting, and he reaches out for her. She tries to pull out her sword, but Waleed's arm grabs and picks her up. As he holds her, he tells her that she's about the perfect size, so let's take off this armor. Pieces of armor begin to fall to the ground and he starts to rip her clothing off. He goes on stating that bitches really shouldn't have any clothes on. This might hurt a little bit. His second mouth begins to open and a barbed tentacle tongue begins to slither out. The tip of the tongue opens up and Waleed says that this is going to make her feel like a virgin again. The tongue starts to rip away at the lower part of Casca's clothing and she screams out in pain, and in a flash, the tip of Guts' sword shoots upwards. He looks down to see Guts standing there with his sword piercing through Waleed's tentacle. Guts tells him that he better not be popping a boner right above his head. He swings down on his sword and the tentacle flies off, and Waleed begins to scream. Then Guts turns and cuts away at the arm holding onto Casca, causing Waleed to drop her. She looks around and Guts tells her that she slapped him pretty damn hard. Thanks to that, he's got some strength back. The rest of the soldiers begin to stare at the strength that Guts has, and Griffith watches, and he smiles. Guts tells Casca to stay back. She's going to distract them looking like that. But mainly, he wants to kill this thing one-on-one. Casca asks what is he talking about. There's no way that she can. But Guts stops and yells at her to shut up and get away. I'm gonna finish this with my own sword. As Guts stands there holding out his sword, he can feel his body clenching up. Will his sword really have any effect on this monster? There's only one way for him to go now, and that's forward. He charges at Waleed, dodging his swings, and then he thrusts his sword into the lower mouth. He pulls back and the sword ripping through the side of him, and Waleed begins to stumble. Then Guts swings again, this time at his legs. His massive body falls over and all of the soldiers cheer Guts on. With the cheers of everyone, Guts jumps up onto Waleed's stomach and he stabs downward. And as he's tearing away, Waleed leans back, grabbing Guts with both hands. The power from Waleed begins to crush Guts, and as he's finished, Waleed throws Guts into some nearby trees. His body bounces and skips across the ground, and then he begins to cough up blood. Seconds later, everyone watches as Waleed jumps into the air and he comes crashing down, throwing Guts away. But as Guts' body lands from a branch, Waleed says that he may have overdone that last attack. Guts asks himself, is this it? Am I really gonna die here? But he begins to think back to his training at the waterfalls. He remembers talking to the blacksmith's daughter Erica, and her asking what will he be able to do if he fought that monster again. He told her that he wasn't sure yet, and Erica asked, what will happen then? Guts' eyes open as Waleed reaches out to grab him, but before he can, Guts slides off the branch, slashing away at Waleed's center eye. He screams out in pain and he slams his giant fist down. But again, Guts cuts away at the hand and the hand begins to heal itself. Waleed shouts that he's sick of playing these games, and Guts picks up his broken and bloodied body and he asks, how will it be then? But with as much as Guts can hurt Waleed has hurt him just as much. And Guts begins to ask himself if he can even do this. Can he even win this fight? Waleed stomps down, pushing Guts back, and with the force of it, he sends Guts rolling backwards. At the rate that they're going, Guts' sword won't last through another hit like that, and then he notices one of Waleed's men dead next to him. Waleed walks through the woods asking, where did he go? I'm sorry that I got so mad. Just come out, and I'll kill you painlessly. But then Waleed notices someone behind a tree. He gets closer and he sees the body not moving, so he chops into the tree, and he notices the soldier, and then he notices Guts is attacking from above, and he punches upwards, except Guts was there. Now it's just a tree branch. As Waleed has his arm extended, Guts jumps from another tree, and he stabs into Waleed's hand. Waleed manages to snap the blade, but Guts doesn't stop. He then takes the broken sword and he jams it into the side of Waleed's neck. Waleed starts smacking away at Guts, but Guts manages to get around and grab a hold of Waleed's head, and he holds it in place. Using a dagger, he starts to slice into Waleed's upper chest and then into his eye. Waleed's body flails and he slams Guts into the tree, but Guts then loses his grip, falling, and soon, so does Waleed. Everyone watches and they see Waleed go down, and through the crowds, Casca begins to run towards him. She runs over to where Guts fell, and then her eyes begin to water. Tears begin to fall, but they're tears of joy. As Guts looks back, grinning, Casca leans down and she hugs him. Meanwhile, back in Midland Castle, Charlotte wakes up from the prison that she was taken to after the night with Griffith. She leans up and asks what happened to Griffith, and Anna tells her that it's been a day and a half, and there hasn't been any reports of the king catching Griffith. Charlotte leans back, stating, "It's good then. Her father kept his promise." But in the back of Anna's mind, she can't tell her that the hawks are still being hunted. Charlotte then gets up from her bed and she opens up the windows to remember the night that Griffith came to her. She remembers the night of the attack and how Griffith said that he would return. But as Charlotte stares out of her window, she begins to see something. Is it a bird? Because it looks too big to be a bird. Meanwhile, over at the Hawks camp, Casca gets to work stitching up Guts from his wounds. She tells him that even though he may be stronger than he was a year ago, he still just swings his sword without even thinking like he always has. She goes on stating that they were supposed to retreat, but he kept on fighting, and Guts says that if she's so afraid of dying, why even fight in the first place? He feels the grip from Casca's hand on his shoulders start to tighten, and his tears fall. She tells him that he should just go ahead and die then. After angrily putting on the rest of his bandages, Casca and Judo leave Guts and Griffith to the rest. But before leaving, Casca looks at Griffith and tells him, "Welcome back." As Casca and Judo leave, Casca asks how bad is it. Judo remains quiet for a moment and then he tells her that his leg and arm muscles are gone. Even standing up or holding a sword, it's impossible for him. A little while later, the Hawk soldiers scout around and they look over Waleed's body. One of the soldiers looks down at Waleed's hand thinking that he saw something, but as he stares at it, he figures that he must be seeing things. Back at the carriage, Guts begins to laugh, telling Griffith that it's just like the time that they fought with Zod. Both of them got messed up pretty bad, but they somehow survived. Guts then says that if he wants, he can take the helmet off. It is just the two of them, but Griffith doesn't say anything. He then notices that Griffith is looking back at his old armor, and Guts asks if he wants to wear it. Griffith slightly smiles and Guts laughs, stating, "You haven't changed a bit in the past year." All right. He grabs the armor and begins to fit Griffith with it. He tells him that this is a battlefield, and if you don't wear armor on the battlefield, then you can't do anything. Meanwhile, back outside of the camp, the Hawks guards begin to hear something. And as the two turn back, they see a giant mouth, and then a giant hand comes slamming down on them. Waleed starts to crawl, shouting, "I don't want to die!" Inside the carriage, Guts finishes the last clasp on Griffith's armor, and he shouts, "Here comes the White Hawk!" Griffith reaches for his sword to pull it out, but with the loss of the muscles in his arm, he can barely grip the handle. Guts laughs, telling him that he can't rush just yet. It's been a year or so of course he's gonna have some trouble, but soon enough, he'll be able to swing his sword again. Suddenly, the two hear the guards screaming from outside and then a rumble on the ground. Guts opens up the carriage and a giant hand swings, knocking him away and destroying it. Guts and Griffith look up to see a bloody Waleed telling him that he doesn't want to die. Waleed reaches down and he grabs a hold of Griffith and he holds him into the air. Guts grabs the closest sword that he can, but Waleed tells him not to move and he begins crushing Griffith. Waleed says he can't be losing to bugs like them, and then he hears a roar in the distance. He then thinks that if he dies here, he'll be trapped in the maelstrom, and he yells to Griffith. Waleed tells him to call them out. Zod says that he's supposed to be the one. Use the Behelit! Call out to your guardian angels! Call out the 4 god hands! The rest of the Hawks surround Waleed, and Casca shouts for him to let go of Griffith, and he laughs, telling everyone how they don't even know anything. Their precious toy here has already been broken. Waleed starts to pull away at Griffith's armor, and as the pieces fall off, he holds out Griffith's body, telling them to look. Everyone sees Griffith's small and withered body, and Waleed tells them that he's so sorry, but they won't be following this guy anywhere. While everyone stares, Guts just watches as rage slowly takes over. Waleed once again tells him not to move. He can break Griffith's neck right here. But then he tells Griffith to go ahead and call them out. His vision is fading already. He looks at Griffith's body and he notices that he's missing something. He says that it doesn't make any sense. If he doesn't have the Behelit, then he's... Just then, Zod swoops in behind him. Zod's massive wings begin to spread and everyone looks up, and Waleed says that it's him. And then Zod's horn stabs into Waleed and he lifts him off the ground. The soldiers begin to panic as there are now 2 demons among them. Zod stares at Griffith and Waleed tells him to come on. They can do what they want. It's the only thing the disciples are told to do. He's even entitled to kill the man, even if he's the 5th one. Zod tells him,
Of course, and he is also entitled to tear you apart if he chooses.
Zod grabs him because to bend Waleed's body down with his horns, and Waleed screams out in pain. Waleed says,
We're on the same side, right? This guy doesn't have it, he's not the one.
And Zod tells him,
Either way, his trick of extending his life isn't going to work.
and then he rips Waleed in half. Guts catches Griffith, and as Casca runs over to check on them, Zod towers over them. He looks down to Griffith's eyes and he tells him,
It will return to your hands. That is its nature.
He then opens up his wings and he begins to fly up. But Guts shouts for him to wait. He has to ask him something. What is the eclipse? Does it have something to do with that monster monkey that they just fought? What about this death that he's unable to escape from? Zod looks down and he tells him,
You will know soon. Very soon.
and he flies off. Everyone watches as Zod leaves, and then a soldier notices something coming out of Waleed's body. Deformed creatures start to crawl and claw their way out. And as Guts watches, he realizes that those things are not getting out, they're being pulled in. A swirling vortex appears and all of the creatures are pulled down, as well as Waleed's demon body. And just as quickly as the vortex appeared, it disappeared. And all that's left is a single body, the human body of Waleed in his true form. The Hawks are now left to wonder, what was it that they just saw? At the end of our last video, Guts found himself battling against the demon known as Waleed, leader of the Black Dog Knights. And though he managed to bring him down, he soon recovered enough to take a hold of Griffith. But before he could kill him, the immortal demon Zod appeared and killed him, giving Guts his last warning of what's about to happen. As the members of the Hawks regrouped after the run-in with both Waleed and Zod, they set out to the Midland border to escape the King's pursuit. The remaining soldiers all turned to Casca to lead them, but with everyone's beaten and broken bodies, Casca could not come up with any words to soothe the group. Through the silence, Guts looks over at the carriage to where Griffith is resting, as he too has no words to say. But as time passes, Corcus steps forward asking if all of the stuff that Waleed said is true, and Casca doesn't answer. Frustrated with no answers, Corcus says, fine, he'll just go ask Griffith then. But before he can go, Judeau stops him, stating, forget it. Griffith is not able to answer you. Corcus laughs, stating that this is a joke, right? His throat is just rough from being in prison, right? But as the team who went to get Griffith say nothing, Corcus screams, what the hell is this? We were supposed to start over once we got Griffith back. We are framed as outlaws. We had to hide for a year. More than half of us are dead, but we were supposed to come back once we got Griffith back. Corcus takes out his sword and he begins breaking it against a rock before sitting down, stating, I knew this was coming, I just knew it. Though no words were spoken, the wind blowing by told everyone what they already knew. It announced the end of their fight. Some of the Hawks ask what are they supposed to do now. Casca is still here, she can still lead them. Judeau steps forward telling them that for a year Casca did the impossible by leading them. But as the Hawks talk amongst themselves, Guts stands up. Casca turns away telling him that he needs to give her some more time. There's still some time for both of their separate forces to come together. So she'll have to think this one over. Guts follows her asking, what is it you're planning on thinking over? And she asks, what is it you said to everyone a while ago? Guts finishes it by stating that I finished the battles that I started. Casca tells him, sure, you're strong, but there must be a battle that even you couldn't finish, and at this moment, could you say that to Griffith? She goes on to state that everyone there is weak because they all hang on to their dreams. But for those who have lost everything, he should offer some kind words, maybe a pep talk. Guts remains silent, but as Casca looks back at him, she leans into him, stating, all she wants right now is to be at someone's side. From the carriage, Griffith watches. Casca says that she's going to see Griffith so that she can change his bandages. But while Casca does that, Guts says to himself what she said, that she wants to be by someone's side. Inside the carriage, Casca begins wrapping up the last bit of Griffith's arm. But as she does, she begins to think back to how his now small hands used to hold everything. They were the hands that held onto her while she was trembling, and they used to put her to ease. As she ties up the last bandage, she sees her hands tremble like they used to. Griffith's eyes watch, but through her trembling, Casca knocks over the wash bucket. Casca says that she's sorry, she'll go get him a new blanket. But Griffith leans up, but without any strength to hold himself up, he falls over on top of Casca. She tells him to stop, but she holds on to him as she feels him trembling. So without any words, Casca lays there holding on to their leader. Outside, Guts and Judeau talk about their plans for what's next. Judeau asks Guts if he's gonna go off to train some more, but without Guts answering, he figured that would be the case. Guts then asks what about him, and Judeau says that he would start a group of thieves with some of the people here. That way he could take care of Griffith since it would only be him. Guts responds with, if that's the case, I'll stay and help look after Griffith. And Judeau says that he's already left once, so really, it's no longer his obligation. Guts looks at Judeau and asks, is it yours? And Judeau says that it is. He's still a member of the Hawks. Judo looks back telling Guts, "You're different though. You should take Casca with you when you leave." While the two continue talking, Gaston and the rest run over to ask Guts if he plans on leaving like he did before, because if he does, they'd like to go with him. The entire raiding group would follow him anywhere. They'll be mercenaries or whatever, just let them come along. Guts doesn't answer and thinks back to how Judo told him that he would find his place among the Hawks. That after getting away from them, Guts sees Casca sitting by herself. He asks how's Griffith and she tells him that he's sleeping, and then Casca looks away. Guts asks what's wrong and then notices that she's crying. She tries to brush it off, but he tells her that she wouldn't be crying if it was nothing. So what's wrong with Griffith? She shouts for him to just stop it, and the tears begin to fall, and she tells him that she's sorry, but she can't go with him. Griffith is just too small and he trembles, so she can't go now. As Guts holds on to her, he tells her to stay. Casca then says he's fighting his own battles. It's like the night when he watched Griffith speak with Charlotte after having dreams. So if he really is Griffith's friend, he must go. He must go alone. Back inside Griffith's carriage, his eyes begin to widen as a man stands before him, and that man is an image of himself asking if he's afraid of this place. He struggles trying to get up and talk, but the image sticks its sword into the ground, and then it points over at an image of the castle. As Griffith tries to talk, he reaches down to the sword to pick himself up, and then the younger version of Griffith runs by telling him to hurry up and let's go. They haven't played enough yet. Griffith tries to call out to the boy running by, but no words come out. Outside, Guts and Casca hear a sound and they turn to see Griffith's carriage riding off. She says that it couldn't have been just because of their talk, but Guts hops onto another carriage and tells Casca to tell the others he'll go after Griffith. Up ahead, Griffith rides off holding the reins in his mouth, chasing after the little boy. He can't stop now. The stone pathway still continues on. As the carriage goes on, it hits a rock and it launches Griffith from the front seat. As he flies through the air, things become black, and then he sees himself. And he sees Casca. Are they married? The little boy runs through the house playing with a dog, and Casca shouts to the little boy that Guts is telling him not to be mean to Pippin. He needs to go wash up for dinner. The little boy Guts yells, "Yes, mama," and runs off. Casca then begins to feed Griffith his dinner, but in the spoon, Griffith begins to see a face. The face of the behemoth. Griffith's eyes open back up and he finds himself floating in the lake that he flew into. As he picks himself back up, he notices that his arm is now broken and just swinging there. He closes his eyes and he begins to laugh uncontrollably. And he notices a stick poking up through the water. He leans over, letting the tip press against his throat, and then he pushes. The stick pierces through his neck and the blood begins to drip down his body. But as the bugs begin to fly around, Griffith feels something on his hand, and he starts to pull back. In his hand is the egg of the Emperor, the one that was taken away when he was sent to prison. As Griffith holds the egg out, he remembers when Zod told him that it would return to him one day and would lay it telling him to use it to summon their guardian angels. Griffith then starts to look around as the wind around him soon begins to pick up. And a little ways back, Guts continues riding to find Griffith and thinks back to asking if it was him that pushed Griffith over the edge. But if he did it, why him? What can he do? He then hears horses coming from behind and Casca runs up, leading the rest of the Hawks. She tells herself that she was careless. Griffith had to have heard her and Guts talking, and now he's past the point of no return. The rest of the Hawks follow up closely behind Guts, but suddenly everyone stops to look forward. And what they see is an eclipse. Guts says that this can't be it, can it? And as Griffith watches, the blood from his neck drips down his arm and onto the egg. Guts calls out to Griffith, but using what strength he can, Griffith tells him to stay back. Guts then sees figures in the distance, all walking towards them. As the sun fully eclipses, more of the deformed figures begin crawling and making their way towards the group. Guts says that he doesn't understand, but he knows right now they are all in danger. He hops off the carriage and he runs towards Griffith, but he shouts for everyone to stay back. Griffith thinks that right now if Guts touches him, he would never forgive him again. Guts grabs a hold of Griffith, but as he looks at the blood dripping down, he sees the bloody egg in Griffith's hand. Soon the face of the egg begins to change and twist, until finally it forms an actual face. With blood running from its eyes, the egg screams out, and everyone stops. Over in the sky, heads and faces begin to look down on them, and everyone begins to panic. The ground slowly begins to change, and then everyone notices that they are standing on giant faces. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Rickert sits in a carriage as two men drop him off at the Midland borders. He gets out, and one man stops him, telling him to take this with him, and he hands him a pouch. The man tells him that it's medicine for all sorts of injuries. It's a secret formula that works for everything, since he looks like he could just fall over at any moment. Rickert tells him thank you, but he must be on his way now. And while he walks off, another woman watches, asking the man if he thinks that he could have been wrong. It was like he had seen something terrible. But through the carriage, another person watches, asking if he should see him off. The shadowy figure then says as soon as Rickert saw him, he acted like he had seen a ghost. But with him being able to see him, he must have come from a good family. That or his friends did horrible things to him. The gypsy woman says let her look to see the child's future. As she places her hands on a crystal ball, she begins to see something, an evil omen. An unbelievable misfortune is about to happen. She then says where the boy is heading. Stars are gathering, but with the arrangement of stars, an evil omen is coming. The question now, will the eclipse affect the country or the entire world? The figure then tells the woman that he really doesn't understand all of this stuff, but if something bad is about to happen, they should probably go stop it. The woman says that they must not. The child is to play an important role in this arrangement of stars. Such is the child's fate. The figure tells her that she's making a sound like it's so much more serious than it really is. After all, things happen because they're supposed to, right? Suddenly, voices from outside begin asking, "What is that?" And the figure rushes out to look. Outside, the sun is fully covered, creating a solar eclipse. Rickard stares at it, stating that it feels so evil, and he begins to ask if there's something wrong with everyone. The little figures begin to flutter atop the man from before's head, and he says that it looks like a huge hole in the sky. The man shouts that he told him not to stand on his head, and the little figure tells him, it's okay. It's not like you're gonna get any bolder. The little figure then tells everyone surely either a god or a devil will come out of that huge hole. Back with the rest of the Hawks, everyone watches and screams as the world around them begins to transform into something grotesque. Everyone begins shouting, what the hell is going on? Why are we not in the grasslands anymore? And Korkus says that this isn't right. Are they in a dream, or are they really dead without even realizing it? Casca shouts for everyone to settle down and shut up. Right now, what they need to do is get in close formation and have no one stray from that. She calls out to Guts to get Griffith back on his horse, and he picks Griffith up, and then he notices the blood drip off of the egg. Guts asks himself, how is it that Griffith even has that thing? He's pretty sure that he didn't have it when they went to rescue him. More so, what's with his face? Why does it look like an awful face with blood dripping from its eyes? Was it what changed the world? As Guts continues to look at it, he notices that Griffith's eyes are now bleeding as well. Everyone begins to shout that there is something coming towards them, and Casca asks, what are those things? The deformed figures begin to shout out that it's the night of the festival! And it only comes once every 216 years. It's the eclipse. Guts watches as they begin to come. The one of the supernaturals is descending. The 4 guardian angels. As the deformed figures all begin to dance around from the hills of faces, a giant woman begins to get up. Now, when we last left off, the Hawks had made their way towards the Midland borders, when Griffith ran off in a carriage alone. After crashing it, Griffith tried to kill himself, but as the stick pierced through his neck, he saw the crimson behelit in the water. Once he grabbed for it, the world began to change around the Hawks, and soon, the eclipse was upon them. They stood terrified of what they were seeing around them, and then the hills with faces on them started to rise. The figure of a woman began to stand up, and the black feathers started to swirl around her body. As wings sprang out of her back, she began to smile, and soon reverted herself to the size of everyone else. They all began to shout, what was it that they saw? That woman was just a giant. And then from the sky, the faces start to swirl around as one of them pushes his way through, and it descends. Suddenly everyone sees a small figure floating among them, smiling. And another face pushes up from the ground, and then there's a 4th figure forming in the sky. A shadow of a figure looms over everyone, and then out steps a man with his brain exposed and the skin in his mouth peeled back. The 4 figures stand looking at the Hawks, and Guts asks, could these be gods, or are they devils? The twisted, deformed creatures begin cheering and dancing at the 4th's arrival. While the Hawks try to figure out what's going on, the one with the peeled back mouth tells everyone that it is time for a blessing, and he welcomes them all here. He then raises his hand to point at Griffith, calling him the honorable child, chosen by the law of casualty, the Hawk. Everyone stares at Griffith, and the man goes on stating he is the chosen one, and this place and time has been chosen for him. Guts pulls a dagger out, telling the 4 of them not to mess with him, and he tells them to all stop their stupid crap. He's seen Griffith's naked body. He doesn't have a tail. There's no reason for them to mix him in with the likes of them. The woman smiles, stating, it is such beautiful friendship. He will make a wonderful sacrifice. Guts asks, what do you mean? And the woman says, yes, a precious sacrifice in order to become a demon king. Everyone tries to understand what they just heard, and the floating man says that the moment that this man came across the behelit, he was qualified to become a demon king. Griffith looks down at his wrist, still holding on to the bleeding egg, and the floating man goes on to state that that is the behelit. It has summoned them here, including all of those that they see before them. Guts looks around, realizing that these creatures surrounding them, they're just like Zod and Waleed. The floating man then points at it, stating that it isn't an ordinary one as well, and the woman says that it is the only one that the guardian angels who can be reborn as god hand can wield. Griffith stares at it, and the woman goes on stating that they are all an important sacrifice for the angel's descent. Everyone looks around, and the creatures begin to lick their lips, and they open up their mouths. They move in to surround everyone, and everyone seems terrified to even move. Guts grits his teeth, asking if those monsters are going to change Griffith in exchange for their lives. And the woman tells him, this is a little different. This is his will. He has offered you all here as a sacrifice. Everyone looks at Griffith, and Guts shouts, that can't be! The man with the peeled back mouth stops him, stating, everything is within the flows of casualty. All has been decided. Your lives have been woven to meet at this point, and now we shall hold the ceremony of the coming Lord. The fat man then calls out for the honorable child to rise to the altar, and suddenly the ground begins to shake. Everyone begins to move out of the way, and the mound that Guts and Griffith stand upon begins to rise. It shoots into the sky while Guts hangs on to Griffith, and soon he loses that grip. Before falling, he reaches out to grab onto Griffith's arm, and as he does, Griffith's elbow snaps, and he lets go. As Guts begins to fall, he stabs into the wall of faces to slow himself down, and as he looks back up, he can see Griffith sitting on the palm of a hand, and the 4 god hands surrounding him. Back down below, the creatures all begin to chant, it is the ceremony of the coming king! And along the wall of faces, Guts begins to stab and climb his way back up. At the top, the floating man asks Griffith if he's afraid, because before going into the future, he may look once more into his past and know what kind of person he really is. Griffith's vision begins to change, and he sees his younger self running along while the man tells him that this is the reality of his conscious world. The young Griffith runs through the streets looking for his friends, but no one's around. They were all supposed to meet him, and they would all go to the castle on that day, but he would just go alone. As the young Griffith runs through the streets, he looks around because he's in an area that he hasn't been at before, and he asks an old woman for directions. She points the direction that he needs to go and tells him that his friends said that they would go ahead and wait for him. But as Griffith runs ahead, everything begins to turn dark, and there's still no one around. With his next step, he steps on something fleshy, and he sees a pile of dead bodies. He screams trying to run away, but he ends up tripping and falling face first into the blood. While he's screaming, the woman before him tells him to hush, and Griffith tells her that she lied. She tells him that she didn't lie. This is the only way to reach the castle. The person that is going to the castle must crush those beneath him, and if he doesn't, he will end up as one of those bodies. The woman then tells him to look around. His friends are there. He looks up to see one of the boys who used to follow him into battle. The boy says that it was so amazing that he was going to the castle to become a king. Well, he wants to follow Griffith so he can become his knight. He'll be sure to do his best for him. Griffith looks at the boy's toy knight and he tells him, you can't. You're already dead. The voices call out from behind, telling Griffith to take them as well. They fought for him so that he could pursue his dream. They all wish to build his country while they fight beneath his flag. And Griffith tells them that they can't. He can't bring them all there because they've all died. The woman then tells Griffith that he shouldn't say something like that to his friends. It's because he wanted to go to the castle that people followed him. So if he hadn't said those things, this wouldn't have happened this way. It's because of all of those dead bodies that he has even gotten this far. And if he wishes to charge farther towards the castle, he'll have to pile up more bodies. The woman goes on stating that if he wishes to return, he must not overthink it, or he will join his comrades' bodies next time. Griffith looks at his hands as they begin to rot away, and then he sees his body rotting away, and she begins to yell at him, telling him that if he was going to regret things, he shouldn't have come here. He could have just been satisfied looking for the castle. Then Griffith begins to tell himself that he knew what was going to happen. He knew the bodies that would follow him. A voice calls out asking if this was the path that he chose, that this was his dream, and Griffith looks over at Guts. The woman tells Griffith again that he needs to pile up those bodies. It's the only thing that he can do. He leans down, picking up the dead boy's body, telling himself that there's no point in regretting it now. He can't apologize for what he's done. No, he won't apologize. If he's going to apologize or feel regret, then everything that he's done up to this point would have been for nothing. So yes, he will pile those bodies higher and higher until he reaches the castle. Griffith then begins to see himself in the floating man's eyes, and he tells Griffith that yes, that is what he is. Griffith asks, what is that illusion? And the floating man tells him that it wasn't an illusion. It was the reality of his conscious world. So for him to aim for that castle in the sky, he will need to continue to pile up those bodies. He must walk over the thousands of bodies that were once his comrades. Walk over the tens of thousands of bodies that were once his enemies. Walk over all of them for his one true desire. The woman then points down towards the rest of the Hawks, stating, look at everyone down there. Even though they are terrified and filled with despair, they will forgive you and you shall live. So bury them. Bury them in the ruins of your dreams. The man with the peeled back mouth then holds his hands out, telling Griffith that all he needs to do now is make a single chant. He needs to state, this I sacrifice, and he will receive the wings of jet black and be carried to heaven. While Griffith sits, Guts climbs his way calling out to him, and Griffith looks down and smiles, stating yes. Among the thousands of comrades, the tens of thousands of enemies, only this man made him forget his dream. And with that final thought, Griffith says, I sacrifice. The hands that they are standing on begin to close around Griffith, and the last thing that Guts sees is Griffith smiling. He calls out to him, but the man with the peeled mouth says that the threads that bind the laws of casualty have been tied. The promised time has come. The brand that the man holds begins to shine, and then it begins to shoot out towards everyone. As the brands all find their marks, the monsters soon begin to roar and tower over everyone. The mouths begin to open as the monsters get closer and closer, and soon the bodies are grabbed and the monsters begin to eat and rip every one of the hawks apart. Everyone screams for help, but the monsters continue their slaughter, devouring everyone in sight. Casca watches as body parts begin to fall, asking if this is really their reality. Why are they here? Guts watches as everyone that he knows is slaughtered, and the man with the peeled mouth tells everyone that their bodies have been engraved with the brand of sacrifice, and it will remain there until the last drop of blood comes out. It will be food for the new child of darkness. Guts looks back and he sees Griffith's body changing, and he begins stabbing, trying to get to him. He shouts not to worry. He will get him out of there. And the God Hand members tell him that it's useless. The humans can't stop this. This is what he wished for. Guts shouts for them all to shut up, and he continues hacking away until his dagger breaks. He tells himself over and over that Griffith couldn't have said that. And then he falls to his knees asking if this could really have been what he wished for. Off over on the ledge, the monsters begin crawling, making their way back up to the top of the hand, and Guts just turns and looks at them. The monsters begin chanting, sacrifice. Finally, Guts lets go of the wall, gritting his teeth. His face begins to turn to pure rage, and he charges forward with a broken dagger. But outside of the changed world, Rickard continues pushing on, telling himself that everyone is just over that hill. And as he reaches the top of the hill, his eyes widen as he looks up to see a swirling vortex before him. Rickard begins running towards the vortex, asking where is everyone. As he gets closer, the smoke begins to fade and he sees two people. Those two people are the Skull Knight and Zod. When we last left off, the eclipse had happened and everyone was dying, but Guts refused to accept that this was Griffith's wish. He was pushing forward, trying to stop Griffith from his actions, and that was when everyone saw the Skull Knight and Zod. Rickard starts to get closer to the two, and then he begins to hear Zod talking. He tells the Skull Knight that he knew that he would show up. They've been fighting for thousands of years. The Skull Knight tells him that he was assigned to be the Gate Watcher, but Zod says that he's not interested in that. The only thing he wishes for is to meet the strong, old friend. The Skull Knight says how Void is always preaching about the things that you cannot avoid, but this place is as good as any to wield my sword. Back inside of the vortex, Casca watches as another soldier is eaten in front of her, and then the monster opens up its mouth, aiming for her. As it plunges forward, Pippin jumps in, knocking it back. Pippin tells Casca to get out of here, and he begins holding off the monster's attacks. She tries to tell him no, but Judo rides up on his horse, picking her up. She shouts that they need to go back, but as Judo looks back at Pippin, he throws two daggers at the monster and he continues to run. Casca starts screaming, hitting him, telling him they have to go back, but Judo tells her that it's no use. She needs to survive now. She's the general and she will live longer. Judo begs for her not to let the Hawks end, but as Casca looks back, she sees the monsters begin to overpower Pippin and then eat away at him. Across the field, another monster starts to devour some of the Hawks, while Corcus is watching. The soldiers call for him, but Corcus begins running, trying his best to get away. But before he can get too far, the monster reaches out, clawing away at his back, trying to stop him. He tries to swing his sword to keep them away, but then he trips, and he begins to roll down the hill. He looks up to see more monsters with bodies hanging from their mouths, stuck between their teeth. He gets back up and he begins running again until finally, there's nothing. There's nowhere to go. He tells himself that this is all a dream. Even though these wounds hurt, it must all be a dream. Everything was just so good. It's just a very long dream. He then sees a naked woman in the distance and he looks. And as he looks, the woman offers herself to Corcus. Then he tells himself, why not? It's all fake anyway. He grabs the woman and he buries his face into her chest, and her body begins to change. And her mouth begins to open. Back with Judo, him and Casca continue on their path, running by all of the monsters with body parts scattered amongst the field. Casca asks herself, what is all of this? Did they sin this much? Or was this nightmare what Griffith wanted all along? She calls out for Griffith to answer her, but as the monsters attack, Judo cuts its throat, and then he receives a wound in return. Another monster begins to run towards them, and Judo throws another set of daggers, stopping it. Casca calls out that there was one on the right, and the monster bites down at Judo's arm. She quickly grabs a dagger off of his belt and stabs into the back of the monster until until it releases its grip. Judo says that she saved him, but as Casca looks back, she sees his arm is ripped apart. She begins to cry, stating that they should have stayed back there. This way they could have all died together. And Judo tells her to shut up. This is just a fight to the death. He forces a smile, stating, well, that's what he'd say. She nods and the two of them continue to ride, and then a shadow begins to get closer and closer. And then out of the ground, the shadow rises and it opens its mouth, biting off the horse's legs. And the two of them fall. Another monster begins to open up its mouth and tendrils begin to whip around. Judo steps in front of Casca, taking the hit. And as it continues to flail its tendrils, Judo leans over Casca, trying his best to protect her. She begs for him not to do this. He can't die like this. And then she sees the two tendrils stab through his back and come out of his chest. He tells her, to the very end, and then he grabs a hold of the tendrils and he throws a knife back. She leaps, grabbing a sword, slashing at the monster, killing it, and then she runs back over to check on Judo. As he tells her that it was his last knife, she needs to go. Tears begin to pour down her face and she tells him that she won't. They're supposed to keep moving to the very end, right? She then picks him up, stating that he can cry all he wants, but he's coming with her. As she carries Judo, he begins to watch as she talks. And her words begin to fade. And as her eyes begin to close, he tells her that he's glad that he was able to see her cry, and she thought of him as useful. She calls out to Judo as his body goes limp and heavy. She tries to shake it off, but more monsters begin coming towards her, and soon she finds herself surrounded. Casca grabs Judo's sword and she runs in swinging, but her swing is suddenly stopped, and as she looks, one of the monsters catches the blade in its mouth, and it bites down on the sword. More and more monsters begin to surround her, all stating that she is the sacrifice. One asks if they can eat her, and the others state that it's that time. So the monsters grab a hold of Casca and they begin ripping and tearing away her armor and her clothing. With the demons attacking Casca, Guts fights off what he can using the broken dagger that he had when he tried to free Griffith from his cocoon. After grabbing a hold of a demon, he slams the broken dagger down on the demon's horn and breaks that off. As the horn flies, Guts takes it and jumps onto another demon, slamming that horn into its face. With more and more demons appearing, Guts continues fighting his way, stabbing everything in his path. Blood begins to fly as more demons fall before him. But off in the distance, the female god-hand Slain watches. She says that this man is displaying quite a bit of strength, but if he lives, how long could he live with anguish? His existence shall become an unquenchable despair. All the while that Guts is fighting, Griffith continues to sit in his cocoon, slowly changing into something else. Back outside, Guts continues fighting off the demons as they keep replacing themselves with the new ones from the Horde. He goes on and the fight begins to take its toll on his already wounded body. But as he looks back at Griffith, the demons continue to appear, and using what strength he has, he pushes through fighting. Meanwhile, in Griffith's cocoon, he begins to see visions of everyone's death. These deaths pass through him. It is what he desired, and even so, he feels nothing. Outside, the fighting drags on, and still Guts fights as many demons as it takes to get free. But as more demons show up, they force Guts back from the top of the tower. Before falling, he takes the horn and he rams it into the wall to slow his descent down. But the force is too great and he ends up tumbling down. He falls face first into a pool of blood, and then he begins to see the body parts of his fallen comrades. He can do nothing but scream, shouting, "If anybody is out there!" Then from behind him, he hears Gaston, and he runs over to check if he's okay. Gaston tells him that he's alive, but not for long. All of the raiding soldiers got scattered about. He then asks what exactly is going on here. Where the hell are they? He goes on stating that he feels the same feeling they had when they all faced against Zod, like they were dealing with something unknown. Guts tells him to stop talking, and Gaston says it doesn't matter. The memories are starting to fade. The ones that he thinks he knows about was why Griffith felt so different from them, like he was a man out of a legend. Slowly as he talks, the words begin to trail off and his head begins to change shape. Suddenly, Gaston's head bursts, and a demon starts to crawl out of his skull. Guts grabs onto a sword and he tries to kill the demon, but then it crawls into the pool of blood and it swims away. As he looks back, Guts looks up the hill and he sees Pippin standing there and he runs over. As he gets up there, he finds Pippin's body, hollowed out. The hollow body is then split into two, and Guts sees the giant demon who ripped Pippin apart. The head of the monster lunges forward trying to bite down, and Guts barely escapes. As he falls back, he gets up and he looks around to see that he is surrounded. Each of the demons has the parts of people hanging from their mouths, and Guts continues to watch in horror. As the bodies begin to pile up, he grits his teeth and he screams, "You can all go back to hell!" And then he sees something that he wasn't expecting. He sees Casca. Some of the larger demons gather around as one holds her body up in the air. The claws are wrapped around her, cutting away at her flesh. His eyes turn white with rage, and he charges at the demons holding her. Like a whirlwind, he cuts and he carves through the demons who stand before him. Parts of the demons start to fly in every direction direction, and Guts runs through, making his way towards Casca. As he gets closer, the demons slash away at him and they grab onto him. He looks up and he sees a spiked tendril slowly making its way between her legs. He screams out for her and he pulls away, but as he does, another demon bites onto his left arm and holds him into place, forcing him to watch as the demons gather around her body. Griffith begins to see something, and he asks it, "What are you?" From the giant heart, a voice says that it is the desired God. It is the idea of evil. Griffith then asks if he is God, and the voice tells him that he is seeing part of him. Everything around them is an ocean of feelings, things within human souls where the common consciousness transcends individuality. These collective consciousnesses is a dark ocean, and from those, he was born of that. The darkness that dwells in every human heart, the idea of evil. Griffith then states that if what it's stating is true, then that would mean that man created God. But is this what mankind wanted? This terrifying thing? The voice says, "This is hell," or some would call it that. This is just the surface of multiple layers of the whole consciousness. However, this place is all human. Griffith then looks around stating that this is all inside of him. But why is it that the humans gave birth to this and called it God? The voice then speaks again, stating that the humans desire reasons. Something to blame their pain on, their sadness, their life or death. The humans needed something to blame for their problems, and thus, a god to blame was born. But it is he who controls destiny. It is he who weaves every man's fortune. Griffith stops and thinks about that for a moment, and then he asks if that's the case, he would have been the one who made this happen, who arranged for all of this to be this way. The voice then informs him that everything that has been done is a carefully made plan. By manipulating history, a lineage was created to make him the man that he is today. All of those accounts were what brought him here. Griffith shouts, "Then what is he supposed to do? What is it that God wants from him?" And the voice says, "Be as you will." He dwells deep within his heart as a part of him, just as he is a part of him. Whatever desires he may wish, whatever they may bring, pain or salvation to mankind, simply do as you wish. As the rest of Griffith's body begins to take form, he says if that is so, he wants wings. The souls of those lost begin to swirl around him, covering Griffith, and the stars begin to change him. The voice then says to take with him the power of the feelings of this inner world and change the physical body into a shape suitable for the task at hand. Basically, what that chapter was revealing is that mankind created God, and God in turn is making more demons. But, like I said, the creator did not want this revealed until later in the story, so take that for what you want. Now let's move forward with where we were in the story. When the demons were gathering around Casca's body, and the only thing that Guts could do is watch as they were holding him back. Up atop the fist, the God Hand watches their new demon king is being born, and they shall name him as the Wings of Darkness, Femto. Guts watches as Griffith's body begins to rise from its cocoon in its new form. He jumps into the air and he flies down, landing before Guts, and he just looks at him. Guts asks if it's really him, but Griffith doesn't respond. While staring into Guts' eyes, he grabs a hold of his arm, and Casca's body is brought to him. More tendrils appear and they begin to wrap around her legs, and then they begin to pull them apart. Guts is watching, helpless to do anything, and Griffith continues to stare at him in the eyes. Griffith's hands continue to wander until they stop between Casca's thighs. Guts is forced to watch as Casca's body is then suspended and spread apart, all of the demons gathering around as Griffith enters into her. Her eyes begin to open as she starts to make out with Griffith's face, and he kisses her. Guts begins to hack away at the demons holding him, and as he goes on, his sword begins to break. Taking the broken blade, he starts to stab it into his own arm, trying to free himself. But while Guts stabs into his arm, Casca suddenly realizes what is actually happening. Guts takes his severed arm away from the demon, and he screams out for Griffith. He charges forward, but several arms reach out and pin him to the ground just before Griffith. The demons force Guts to watch as Griffith continues to have his way with Casca. She begins to call out no, and all Guts can do is struggle. Then atop of the tower, Slain watches, stating how beautiful all of this is. The love, hate, pain, all of this is so human. All of this is so demonic. Griffith continues to stare into Guts' eyes as he violently defiles Casca, and Guts is made to watch, with Casca telling him to look away, and Griffith continuing, as blood begins to to drop down onto Guts' eyes. Griffith releases Casca and lets her fall to the ground. With every fiber in his body, Guts screams as the demons push its claws into his eye. Soon up above, the sky begins to part, and everyone looks up. And through the broken sky, the Skull Knight appears, and he swings at the void. The portal opens up above his head, and the Skull Knight's sword passes through, and another portal opens as the sword is thrust back towards him. After blocking the attack with his shield, the Skull Knight rides down the arm, fighting through the demons that try to stomp him. Limbs from the demons begin to fall from the sky as the Skull Knight rides, making his way towards Griffith. And as he gets there, Griffith looks up and holds out his hand. Just as he closes it, it's as if he grabbed onto one of his surroundings and crushed them all together. Griffith stares at the empty hole that he just created, and the Skull Knight lands before him. The Skull Knight swoops in, grabbing both Guts and Casca, and then heads off back towards the sky. Griffith holds out his arm, trying to crush them before they can leave, but it's too late. Once the Skull Knight takes Guts and Casca away, Ubix says that this has all been so amazing. It is beyond their expectations. The Void then tells everyone that this is one of the many paths that fate has prepared. Now the flow has begun, and the fifth angel is born. The time of darkness shall visit them. Soon the people will know this as the Age of Darkness. Meanwhile, outside the storms, Zod picks up his own severed arm and reattaches it. All the while, Rickard is watching on. Moments later, he watches as Zod is defeated by the Skull Knight. No sooner than he can recall that, the Skull Knight flies down towards him. Rickard looks up and sees the bodies of Guts and Casca. The Skull Knight notices the pouch of medicine and says that it seems that these two are not meant to die. He then hands the bodies over to Rickard, telling him that there is no time, that he needs to tend to their wounds. Rickard begins to panic, asking how, and then he remembers the medicine that the travelers gave him. And then Zod towers over the Skull Knight. Rickard begins to panic even more. The Skull Knight tells him not to be bothered by this, go ahead and continue taking care of them. Zod tells the Skull Knight that he hopes he doesn't think their fight is over. And the Skull Knight says that he too is immortal. The Skull Knight looks down and then sees Guts. He starts to laugh, stating how interesting it is that this man survived the eclipse. So alright, they will stop here to honor that man's amazing luck. He then stops, stating, actually, we should call it bad luck. He then tells the Skull Knight not to forget, they're not finished here. The Skull Knight then picks Guts and Casca back up, and Rickard asks what's going on. Where are the others? And the Skull Knight tells him that there are only two left of the band of Hawks. He then picks up Rickard and soon begins to ride off. Zod watches, telling himself that things are going to become more interesting for a man to survive the eclipse. When we last left off, Zod and the Skull Knight were discussing what was going on, and Zod was amazed at the humans that could survive the eclipse. But Guts, Casca, and the Skull Knight had other plans. It's time to pick up where we left off in the eclipse. Guts charges off into a field to find the Skull Knight once more, and he's told that the demons of hell will not rest until they take his blood because Griffith offered it. So Guts continues to fight the spirits around him, and soon they begin to fade, and the Skull Knight notices that they are seeking out the other who escaped with the brand. Guts jumps in the back of the Skull Knight's horse, and he tells Guts that this is the second time that he has given him a ride. Guts asks what does he mean second, and the Skull Knight explains that he was the one who rescued him and Casca from the eclipse. He goes on to mention that he had a chance to meet their friend who had with him the fairy dust that kept them alive. Guts continues to ask, what about this fairy dust? And the Skull Knight tells him that fairy dust is the greatest medicine and does not normally come into human hands. Sometimes the fairies become careless and allow themselves to be seen by humans, and one day this may happen to him as well. Guts speaks of Casca standing out in the field while the spirits surround her. Guts jumps down and begins to run, but the Skull Knight tells him to wait. Even though those evil spirits are surrounding her, they can do her no harm, which is rather strange. However, Guts doesn't stop and he keeps running up the hill until he finds Casca. Guts asks what's wrong, and Casca begins to sweat and grab her stomach in pain. She falls to her knees, and Guts notices blood coming out from underneath her clothes, and then she screams out in pain. At that moment, a small premature fetus falls to the ground covered in her blood. Guts gets ready to stomp on it, calling it a hellspawn, but before he can, Casca shields the baby. Guts demands to know why she's protecting it, and the Skull Knight says that simply because it is her child. As he turns back to listen, the Skull Knight says that the woman was with child. However, it has become evil, perhaps by the work of the new God Hand. That is, while being born, it accepted an evil nature and chose to be cursed. They should put the infant down, because as long as it exists, it'll bring to them nothing but grief and trouble. But before Guts can do anything, it begins to crawl up, and Casca holds it close to her chest. With hatred flowing, Guts reaches down and grabs the fetus from her arms. As he stares at it, it continues to stare back, and Casca screams, biting Guts' arm to let it go. As the sun begins to rise, the light begins to shine down on the fetus, and soon it begins to fade, and once it completely disappears, Casca screams. The Skull Knight tells him that the child has not returned to the dust, but it will appear before them again. An evil child yearns for its parents. Off in the distance though, Rickard and Erica run over to them calling out, Guts turns back to the Skull Knight and he sees him leaving. But before leaving, the Skull Knight says that they will probably meet again. His heart may be good, but the path he's going to walk will be dark. So until then, have a safe and good journey. Time began to pass, and one day inside of Godu's workshop, Erica sneaks in grabbing a key hanging from the wall. She turns back outside, pulling Rickard with her, but before he can ask what she's doing, she shushes him, telling him to follow. Around the back is a locked shed, and as Erica pulls off the lock, the door swings open and she yells, "Ta-da!" Rickard looks in and sees rows and rows of weapons and armor, and Erica says that her dad is known as a blacksmith. He's kind of famous too. So Rickard picks up a small cannon, and she goes on stating that her dad can probably make just about anything they ask for. He's a genius about this stuff, but there is one weapon that catches Rickard's eye. Erica tells him that that's a dragon slayer, and Rickard walks over to it as the sword towers over him. Suddenly the two hear Godu saying how long ago he was asked to make a powerful sword strong enough to take down a dragon. Don't ask him how, but he forged it, and it did kill a dragon. Rickard asks what happened next, and Godu tells him, well, they almost hung him for making such a thing. Ever since then, he's lived out here alone, but as of now, he knows not who has the strength to wield it, though he would rather not find out, so it's staying locked up here. Rickard asks if this thing can really kill a dragon, and Godu looks at him and tells him, do not ask about the dragon. Godu then says not to tell their friend about it. He'd probably snatch it up and try to kill dragons. Besides, he's already got so many enemies, he doesn't need the dragons after him. Down in the cave, Guts stands in the water holding his sword and listening. As the water pours from the waterfall, he begins to hear a fish swimming, and as it jumps, Guts swings back, slicing it in two. After cleaning it up, Guts tells Rickard that he'll be leaving tomorrow, so until then, he's going to keep his cave door locked to keep Casca in. Guts heads downstairs with a basket, but Casca stares at him, staring with hate and malice. He sets the basket down, telling her to have some food, but tomorrow, they're going to be having a feast, so she jumps up from her bed and stuffs whatever food she can get into her mouth. Guts eats his food and he thinks about how Casca has not changed since the day that they came there. While Casca begins to eat her soup with nothing but her mouth, she accidentally spills it all over her clothes. Guts runs over, telling her to take the shirt off before she burns herself, but Casca fights back, screaming, and tries to push him away. Through the struggle, the shirt rips and the two of them stare at each other. Guts climbs onto the bed and he leans in to kiss her, but Casca pushes him away and runs to the cave door, screaming and shaking the door. The next morning, Rickard helps Guts put on his armor and notices that he's got knives across his chest. Guts mentions that Jodu taught him that a long time ago, though they've never really been his style. He thought that he might need them at some point. As Guts stands back up, Erica then asks why all of his clothes are black, and Guts tells her that he'll be fighting in a lot of dark places, fighting darkness itself. Rickard begins to strap something to Guts' arm, and he sees a fake arm. Rickard tells him that it is a magnet in the palm so that he can hold onto a sword, and that there's also something else that him and Erica helped set up. He then hands him a crossbow that attaches to the arm, and Guts aims it towards the rocks outside. Before he can fire, Godu appears in the doorway asking if Guts is even still here. After looking at several of his products on Guts, he says that it seems that he helped himself to his tools. Guts tells him that he's a mercenary, not a thief, but Godu pulls out a sword and says that this will be his final farewell gift, so he better not turn it down. Even though he doesn't like to boast about it still, this sword was something else. Guts takes the sword, and he swings it down, cutting both the sword and the tip of the anvil off. But before Guts can even say anything, the brand on his neck begins to bleed. And then a voice tells him that he's finally found him. Everyone looks back to see a short, stocky man, and he tells them that there are leftovers here. Guts tells everyone to get back, this one will be his. As everyone watches, the small man begins to grow, sprouting a tail and turning into a hulking beast. Godu asks, what is this? And Guts smiles, telling him he'll be the first that he kills. The rage begins to take over and Guts charges forward, slashing away at the beast's two faces. The giant beast falls back and Godu asks, what the hell is that? And Guts smiles, stating that he will hunt the strongest prey. The beast leans back and Guts swings away, cutting off an arm. As the beast continues to get back up, Guts swings for a third time right down the middle. And though he cut through the beast's stomach, he notices the sword had broken. The beast uses its insides and grabs Guts, throwing him into the storage shed. He then starts to walk over, so Guts tries to get back up on his feet, and he tells himself, it can't end this way. This is even more of a reason for him to survive. Rickard shouts to use the fake hand, point it, and pull out the handle. So the beast reaches out and the mechanical hand drops, reeling a cannon. Guts fires it through the beast's mouth, and the beast stumbles back. And Guts says that's what he's talking about. But the kickback is a bit rough. As he works out his arm, Guts looks back and he sees the Dragon Slayer's sword. Seconds later, Guts calls out to the beast and then tears down the middle of it. The beast is thrown back from the swing and Guts walks off, holding the Dragon Slayer. With one more swing, Guts cuts the beast in half. And as his entrails begin to fall out, Guts holds up the sword, still covered in guts, telling Godu that he should have told him about this thing. Godu stares, asking if he can really wield it. Erica watches and begins to hide behind Rickard, telling Guts looks all scary suddenly. The sword is called the Dragon Slayer because no human hands could even wield it. And even with that massive sword, how could someone even defeat a dragon with it? Once the fight is over, Guts tells Rickard not to tell Casca about anything. Rickard begs Guts to stay and not leave Casca behind. The band of Hawks are. But Guts tells him the band of Hawks aren't over. They're still here and the fight is far from over. They're the generals now, so it's their job to protect Casca. He's the raiding party, remember? He'll go destroy the enemy camp. And as Guts walks off, he thinks to himself that revenge and war might be enough reason to press on. For now, he is alone, and all that is with him is the Black Berserker Rage. The only thing that will keep him on his feet as he heads towards him.
And that's the end of the Golden Age. If you stuck around with us the entire time, congratulations and thank you for supporting us. Let us know if you want us to keep doing big videos like this on other series that we've done on the channel. And we'll see you guys next time.